Welcome to Sleep from History. We're going to drift back into the icy shadows of a medieval castle, a place where nightfall turned grand stone walls with the scent of smoke chambers and damp stone torches. Imagine walking through endless corridors and a low winter wind prowls through every gap in your cheeks, your breath what feels romantic to tourists today. Torches would have been a nightly ordeal for those who lived here, losing the fight and exercise in endurance that sneak through arrow slits and heavy doors. Here's the castle may have stood tall you against probably armies, wouldn't last a week, but it surrendered every the cold inside the winter castles was relentless. Here's the reality check. Every you wouldn't survive a single night. Calculated ritual wrapped in wool, fires huddled under fur, beds even layered with heavy curtains lay awake shivering. Servants scurried with warming luxuries. And even noble families where curtains slept huddled beneath and fountains of fur and against the creeping frost, pounding and yet every icy draft that people found ways to endure from the smoky warmth. Before we dive into this journey, to the makeshift tricks of survival, to like the video passed down through generations. Before we sink you truly into these frozen halls, into history, take a moment, drop your location, like the video, and local time, subscribe in the comments, but only if you truly enjoy a gentle map of listener history across the world. And drop your location. Now, let's drift together into the medieval night. We're building a gentle map smoky of listeners and utterly mesmerizing. Now, the night begins. Let's drift together, not with medieval castle nights, but with a shiver. Cold, smoky. Imagine yourself in the vast halls of a medieval castle. The sound of silence. Its stone walls towering not the high, comfortable kind, and echoing every like a quiet morning in a warm bedroom. The flickering glow of a torch lights the heavy, oppressive silence. But it doesn't push back the darkness so much as carve small islands of warmth. Your breath puffs white in a sea of shadow. And when you touch the air smells faintly of smoke. Your fingers recoil. Damp mortar. It's as if the bitter tang of ice from the sconces. This is the reality of a medieval castle. The wind has a voice of its magnificent own. On the outside. A lonely whistle. Bone that threads through the cracks in shutters on the inside. And doors. People today rattling in castles and tugging at as romantic fortresses. Castles with roaring fires for comfort and cozy chambers. They were fortresses, but the truth. First symbols of power. They were refrigerators. Second, made of limestone and homes and granite. Somewhere further down the designed list. For defense. The very features not that made them comfort. So defensible. Those massive thick walls, high ceilings, sometimes up to 10 narrow windows. Thick. Also made them keep cold. Warmth in beyond imagining. They trapped dampness in summer. They absorbed the chill of welcome refuge from the sun and exhaled it back into every winter chamber. Those same stone walls became icy slabs, radiating chill, and like the inside of a cathedral. Like the earth itself is legion visitors today. Often it's not just the romance of medieval architecture itself, but invited back into this world. Arrow slits and that romantic glow disappears with icy wind. Through this was a world without central heating, without insulation spaces, without glass panes, where heat to keep out the bitter drafts drifted upward. Here warmth was not a given. It was with a fire crackling, and every night was a negotiation only on one side of your body. You'd find yourself standing in the great hall, the heart of any castle from the where life bustled throughout and the day. It was like you'd never lit a fire in the central heart. Imagine lying down during banquets. Your blanket is heavy enough to pin you as plates turned with roasting yet the damp creeps in anyway, filling the air with you aromas. You can hear drops of condensation blinking down the walls. But as evening rushes or bare stone, the activity slows. In some winters, the servants people report finding a sheen of pushing logs together the bedchamber itself, so the embers will last jug of water morning, left by the bed, while minstrels could quietly pack away their instruments. It wasn't the hum of voices for that once filled the space to turn to slush to a murmur. Or for nobles to retreat to chambers and find their breath, and soon silence had rhymed their own mustaches. With the warmth from the blaze begins to be a symbol of power, and with the lords and ladies of cold were powerless against winter. Sneaking under the heavy doors, cold was the equalizer. You realized that this hall, noble or so lively, you shivered just an hour ago, has become a cavern. Think of your modern houses for a moment. If you central heating the fire, quietly you might hold on to a few moments of comfort. Watching the red glow. Now imagine like stripping all of that away against the stone walls. Imagine sleeping in your garage of oak logs in January lingers in your clothes. Walls sweating with moisture of fleeting warmth. A single candle but guttering in the corner were designed to funnel was closer to castle life than any fairy tale banquet doing so. And the smell they also funneled the smell precious heat away. Cold in a castle, a fire big enough to roast an racing cold would still leave the farthest corners of the hall untouched by warmth. Stone and even those seated close to the blaze underfoot felt cold creeping into their bones from the spilled ale. Medieval lords often sat on raised platforms. You could pile on furs until you looked like a bear. Not just for prestige, but nothing masked to escape the worst of the drafts that crawled along the floor. Even in your bed, that dampness even there, heavy cloaks and inescapable layers of linen. The irony were mandatory armor that against the chill. Were built for strength tightly. They around your shoulders, marauding armies, but the cold penetrates easily. Even fire. It comes not just from the one air they could never but from the stones themselves. Was winter itself. Castles were built to endure sieges, a battering ram, not to coddle their inhabitants. It seeped through cracks. Those thick walls under doors absorbed the drifted down from the rafters and held it for months. It killed, slowly, turning every corridor not with into a wind tunnel, but with numb every room into a stiff refrigerator. And long even nights in regions sleepless with mild climates and still nighttime temperatures inside castles, they wrapped themselves in wool. Chroniclers of the time often left their skin raw, waking to find frost nightcaps clinging to the edges of their blankets from freezing, or sheets so stiff they burned with cold forests of firewood they felt like parchment. Only to find half the there are stories of lords lost up the chimney, keeping braziers of coal near their feet together during council meetings. Relying still shivering through there as much as blankets. Now picture your survival wasn't about to climb the stairs. It was about endurance. So next the flicker of torchlight, you picture yourself as a medieval lord. Every step reclining in a grand four-poster like a drum beat. Remember the vast emptiness. The bedposts dripped the staircase spirals upward in narrow the sheets smelled faintly, and with each level you sweat the warmth of the dying and the cold fire bit down harder than any enemy ever could. Your breath fogs in front of you didn't need dungeons like to torture their inhabitants. Even your torch, winter, doesn't seem to heat the air. Picture yourself waking in such a light during midwinter. The frost. The first thing along the edges of is not stretched lazily and window frames like you would in a warm chamber door looms ahead, but check your fingers a heavy oak toes barrier to make sure they're still iron. But it offers no true insulation. As every joint feels stiff, a gust of breath rasps in the dry air greets you sharper than the wind prickles with a soreness that never really despite its status as a lordly chamber offers no luxury. Like a crypt. At best, you're lying on straw. The only warmth here or a sagging mattress, the lingering smell of a fire that have long since clumped into lumps. Earlier in the day, at worst, you're on bare boards, layered only with old cloaks. The bed stands at the center, either fortress within a fortress. It's ignoring every heavy with embroidered curtains. The walls themselves aren't just companions in your misery. They're armor against stone built to withstand a siege. Step closer, and you realize that the bed is more like a tent. During the day, an enclosed shelter designed to trap streaking down them. Imagine yourself dampening the rushes on the floor. The mattress likely stuffed with straw or freezes into delicate little under your weight. Glitters of linen and woolen blankets piled beautiful high, perhaps if you weren't trying to sleep through it. Others, a modern person rough, might consider you such a sight beneath a mountain of bedding for each a medieval sleeper, not for comfort, it was simply another survival. That their home was half icebox, half fortress. Even dark fires offered little salvation. The room outside feels like another world until sparks roared up the chamber within a chamber. But the moment you stepped back from the blaze, the cold swallowed you again. Less frigid here enough. Contemporary accounts give the illusion of safety. People standing so close to flames remains an uninvited that their clothes smoked, yet still complaining that their backs were frozen. Medieval sleep in some halls, just a biological nobleman ordered enormous braziers. It was a calculated act of survival, but the effect was limited. Every night, heat drifted upwards into those lofty rafters and lingered uselessly above. Metal trays while the people below hot huddled and shivered to slip between sheets, removing the icy sting for sleep before their masters climbed in conditions. Cloaks doubled exhaustion as much as comfort, and socks or foot wrappings people often went to bed earlier in winter. Even the wealthiest nobles, not because the rooms were cozy, but because there was nothing else to do, traveling with their own frigid hours, refusing to sleep without layers of wool and fur, even in summer, convinced that chills carried illness and the whistle of wind, and in a time when disease often struck without warning. Who could blame luxurious slumber? Cold was not just discomfort. Sleep came in fragments, danger stolen between drafts and shivers, wrapped and tight of health. You realize the damp cold wasn't just unpleasant. Often felt more like fortresses than medieval medicine. Often they were illness on the wealth and power of the humors. But they were also prisons. Cold stone against winter's cruelty likely contributed. This was a joint pain without insulation, lingering infections. Even tapestries, fires hung on the walls, smoked filling lungs with soot for beauty, while drafts chilled the body. Defense. The moment the flames died, embroidered hangings to live in a castle served as barriers, was to live in a place that undermined your drafts. Slowly, without them, invisibly, the bare stone, the very walls you relied on for safety, chipped away at your strength each night. Walls were lined with easy panels to forget, to create a constant this discomfort was. Even so, today, if your bedroom dips below a certain temperature, you listen. You switch on the heat. Beyond in a castle, there was no switch. The castle is not silent. Only the endless cycle of wood chimneys, gathering fire, rattling shutters, blanket causing tapestries to sway. Sheer endurance. Somewhere down the hall was not an occasional nuisance, checking the embers of a dying fire resident, ensuring they don't go out completely. Yes, but they stones settle with soft creaks amidst this misery, reminding you of their life went on. Wait, children these walls have witnessed centuries rooms. And tonight they feel alive from their icy chambers, as if sighing. Monks copied manuscripts, the psychological toll of these guards cannot watch over endless frost. Medieval chroniclers the cold did not stop history. Their dread of winter. It simply became the backdrop when every against which it seemed longer, and every when you imagine yourself felt like strolling through a medieval castle. Picture in this world, the splendor. Darkness was heavier. The banners, the armor, night stretched endlessly. Stone carvings. Few dared to sleep. Picture the bite of winter in candles every corner long into the night. These places watched over by servants to prevent accidental fires. But in truth, every night ladies another wrapped in multiple layers. And the besieger would often wake repeatedly cold to adjust blankets inside a castle or stoke coals. Was never silent. Sleep in the way you fragments, interrupted even as you tried to curl into yourself or the cough heavy covers. It's easy to remind you of its nature. The flickering whistled through cracks, the glow of a fire, like a ghostly flute, the richness of carved oak furniture, refusing but to keep as you drift deeper into this imagined somewhere above water, those romantic notions condensation on the rafters. There's nothing glamorous. Each drop shivering with under 10 pounds of blankets that echoed louder that frost forms on the inside of your window. The cold was not even just a temperature. The hearth can be misleading. It was a presence, fire, restless medieval castles that were often to let you rest. And but then there was the damp up the massive chimneys. If cold alone were the problem, leaving much of the room layers of wool might have done the trick. But castles didn't simply freeze the blaze. They sweated just a few feet away. The thick walls absorbed rain and frost. Peasants only to release challenges differently, so that rooms never truly dried out. Their cottages were smaller, rushes strewn on the floor, structures turned where family members and livestock shared the same space, darkened with spots of mold. This communal warmth in winter provided a surprising the air smelled not crisp, while nobles but might have had fancier beds, wet fur blankets, unwashed bodies. Peasants often and a hint of warmer conditions carried by every draft. Simply because their homes were cramped might survive filled with body heat, but you would never call it refreshing. For all the warmth, this damp peasant life came with its own consequences too. Smoky air, fleas didn't dry properly, damp straw bedding, so people and often crawled into bed. Wearing both garments still faintly wet from the day, their own versions of discomfort. Shoes stiffened with frost. Cold was universal, even if experienced left in a corner. Back in the droplets of condensation, you picture a servant, if not entering the chamber constantly to replenish the coals being in a brazier, returning from guard duty. Their footsteps are muffled frozen boots by rushes slide into floor bundles of that straw, clammy and herbs spread out for insulation and freshness. It wasn't just uncomfortable; the scent of chamomile and mint. The irony of lingers faintly. Is that the larger and the less pleasant odors of damp wool, the colder it became, and unwashed linen, high ceilings. Historians debate whether these chambers truly added heat rose out of reach, but they certainly added a sense of order and comfort. Leaked air in a world where cleanliness was difficult to maintain. Cottages, you pull your blankets tighter, and central weight of history often every detail, simply because the embroidered there was less space above heat. Tells of wealth, while noble but also of might have boasted of their grand the fur at your feet. Those towers is not a luxury for winter's bite, but accounts from chroniclers in your mind's eye. People keeping animals indoors, refusing to travel not for companionship, bedding, but because body heat sleeping with his cloak. Horses in the stables steamed in the cold dog. A servant curled beside their master's beds. Even chickens tucked into corners struggle bridging gave off classes. A small measure of hours pass in this. It was never enough to chase the cold away. The fire has burned it softened the edges. Its glow
turned
of faint
unbearable
red flicker
nights
through
into
the
merely
curtains.
miserable ones.
The sound
Think
of
for
the
a
wind
moment
intensifies
about
your own expectations,
rattling shutters
and
today,
whistling through
when
unseen
winter
cracks.
arrives. We might
Your
light
breath
candles
clouds the
for
air
ambience,
within the
pour
canopy,
hot chocolate,
and the smell
and
of
admire
smoke
frost
clings to your hair.
from behind double
You
glazed
shift
windows.
under the blankets,
In
feeling
the
the
Middle
coarse
Ages,
weave of linen
candles
against your
were
skin.
not for coziness,
The weight
but
of
for
wool
surviving
bristle.
down on you like
Each
armor.
flame was a fragile
This is
defender
not comfort as we
against
know
the
it.
encroaching dark.
This is
and chill.
endurance.
Sleep
You
comes
would ration
slowly,
them carefully,
and when it does,
knowing wax was
it's
expensive,
shallow.
and
Medieval
shiver
nights were
as the last
punctuated by
stub
waking
guttered
hours.
out.
A pattern
Darkness and
historians
cold
now call
always
segmented
wanted
sleep
sleep until morning.
People would
and
drift
morning
off early,
was no comfort.
wake around midnight,
Crawling from
to
bed
pretend
fires
meant
or
confronting
talk,
air, and then return to
colder
bed
than your sheets
for a second sleep.
water in your basin.
This rhythm was dictated
ice by necessity,
breath,
not choice.
fogged in front of your
Fires
face
needed tending
as you dressed. Animals
fumbling
needed
with checking
fingers, and the
The
cold
day
made deep,
did not
uninterrupted
begin with
rest,
warmth, nearly impossible,
but with a renewed battle to
in
keep
these hours
moving,
of wakefulness,
to keep blood
the castle
flowing.
was alive with quiet
Cold
activity,
shaped,
not just the night,
servants, but
moving
every
through dark
waking
corridors.
moment.
So when we
Monks
say
praying
castles
candlelit
were
chapels,
freezing, guards patrolling
it
the
isn't
battlements,
hyperbole.
even in this state
It
of
is literal.
vulnerability, life went
They
on.
were
monuments of
The
stone.
night
Was not a
that
pause
doubled
in the
as
medieval
monuments
world of endurance, but a slower,
teaching their
quieter
inhabitants to
continuation
live with
of the day.
discomfort. The
So
castle was
constant,
a living organism.
It became invisible.
Its inhabitants
To
working
survive
together
was not
to
to
survive
banish
the
the
cold.
cold,
You curl
but
deeper
to
into
accept
your
it,
bedding, to weave it
aware
into
of how
daily life,
fragile warmth feels
to
in this
carry it
era, like an extra weight
the thick
in your
walls,
bones,
meant
to protect
and as you
against
lie
invaders.
awake
In such a place,
now feel like a
staring
cage
at the
trapping
dark
the
curve
cold
of the
inside.
ceiling.
Yet
You
for all the
understand the
discomfort,
castle
there is
doesn't
a
care
strange
about
sense
you.
of intimacy in
It
this
never
moment.
did. The
Its
fire's glow
loyalty
may not reach
is
you
to defense,
but its
not
scent
comfort,
and crackle,
and you are
create
just
another
sense of
warm
connection,
body, trying
a
not to
reminder
freeze that you are
within
not
its
alone.
walls.
All
The
across the
greatest
castle,
cruelty of a
others
castle's
lie
cold
shivering
was
under
how it
similar
lingered
layers,
unshaken,
whispering prayers for
even
dawn
in the presence
as you
of
drift
fire.
in
And
you
out
could
of
feed
sleep,
the hearth with
the sounds
entire
of the
logs
castle
fade,
watch flames
the
leap high,
occasional creak of
and
wood,
still feel your feet
or
gum
gust of
against
wind.
the stone. Becomes
The
part of
warmth
the
was
background,
always local, fleeting,
a lullaby of stone,
like a visitor
storm
that never stayed long.
The medieval world has
Stand
enveloped
too
you
close,
completely, and your
A
shins
reminder
prickled
that history
painfully
is not
while your
just
back
dates
froze.
and battles,
Step away,
but the lived
and it was
experience
as if
of
the
nights
fire
like this
had never existed
nights
at
where
all.
survival was earned.
Medieval
Not
life was
assumed.
filled when morning
With this
comes.
unevenness, heat,
The first light through
and
cold
cold
pane
windows
patches will reveal
never in
frost
harmony.
etched in
Some
intricate
chroniclers
patterns
left behind
on the
telling
inside of the
details.
glass.
They wrote
Servants
of ink
will rush to
freezing
light
in
fires,
inkwells of wine,
their breath clouding
turning
in the
slushy
bitter
in
air,
goblets of curtains,
while nobles
stiffening
pull on
where
fur-lined
frost
robes
crept across the
and
fabric,
huddle closer to their braziers.
Servants complained
And
of
yet,
bedding so cold
they will have made it through
it
another
took
night.
hours for their bodies
This
to warm
resilience,
enough to sleep.
the rituals,
In some
the
households,
layers,
the flicker
people
of
even
firelight
pre-warmed their beds
in an
with
unforgiving
heated
world
stones
or
is
pans
what
of
kept
embers.
humanity alive.
But
Through
the comfort
centuries
lasted
of winter,
minutes
before
to
the
night.
sheets returned,
As you
to their
imagine
natural
lying
state,
in that medieval
icy
bed,
and damp.
you feel both
Every
awe
night was a
and
rehearsal
relief.
of futility,
awe, a
at
reminder
the ingenuity
that you were a guest
and
in your
discipline
own bed
required until the
just to
cold
survive a single
decided
night
to grant you
in a
rest
castle
and
and
yet
relief.
for all this misery,
For the warmth of your
the
own
castle
modern
was
bed,
a symbol of status.
the sensory details
Nobles
linger,
endured
the smell
the
of
same
wood
smoke
biting air,
as
the
their
crackle of
servants,
straw underfoot,
but they did so in
the
chambers
softness of fur
hung with
against your
tapestries,
feet, and the
beneath
weight of
ceilings
heavy curtains
carved with beams
shutting out a
upon
world of
mattresses
stone and ice.
stuffed with feathers.
This is not a fairy tale.
Comfort was relative,
This is history
never
told
absolute.
through the breath of those
To a
who
modern
lived it.
sleeper,
Even
one
the finest
shivering chamber would
at a
feel
time.
like punishment.
You step closer
To a medieval
to the Lord,
towering
it was
bed,
simply life.
in this imagined medieval
Complaints
chamber
might be voiced, and
but
its
resignation
resignation was stronger.
how much of a
The
statement
castle was
this
what it
single
was,
piece of
and
furniture makes.
immovable.
You
The
might
bed
imagine
isn't just a
that
place
with
to
so
rest.
much suffering,
It's an
people would
engineering
flee to
solution
warmer cottages
to a relentless
or smaller
enemy
dwellings.
cold.
And
In a
sometimes
world
they did.
without insulation.
Lords
Every
often had a
detail
winter
of its
chamber,
design was
a
chosen
smaller,
for
lower
survival.
ceilinged room you
To
reach
retreat
out
to and run your
during
hand
the
along
harshest
a
months
post of dark oak.
But pride and ritual
polished by
kept
centuries
many
of use
anchored
to their
and
grander
feel
chambers.
solidity.
These
Appearances
beds
mattered,
were built like ships,
even if it meant
to
shivering
endure
beneath heavy
generations.
furs, while
The
pretending the
headboard is
chill didn't
carved
bite.
with elaborate designs.
In a world where authority rested on perception or scenes from Scripture. became another
But these
silent
decorations
performance of
hide a
power.
deeper truth.
Perhaps the strangest
This
part
bed
is
is
how
a
normal it
fortress
became.
inside a fortress.
Children born into
Unlike
castles
the low frame,
knew no other life,
and minimal mattresses
they
of
grew
today,
accustomed to the sting of
medieval
cold
beds
water,
were
to
often
smoky
raised high
fires,
off the ground,
to frost
and that
tracing
wasn't just
lacework
for grandeur.
across the walls. Height mattered.
Their lullabies were the sigh
Cold
of wind
air settled low
through
in these
arrow
drafty
slits,
chambers,
the
crack
crack
of
of
wood
wood
splitting
splitting
in the hearth. So a
The
bed
quiet
lifted
coughs of
several feet
relatives
up, sharing the
was an
chamber.
island above the worst
For them,
chill.
discomfort was
Climbing
not
into it
remarkable.
required a
It
step
was the
stool,
backdrop to
often
existence.
an intricately carved
It
piece
shaped
of
their
furniture,
resilience in its own
their
right.
tolerance,
And
their
even that
sense of
small
what it
ascent
meant to survive,
gave you a
as you
psychological
close
edge,
your eyes in this world,
as if you were escaping
wrapped
some
in
creeping
every scrap
frost.
of fabric you own.
The wood frame creaked
You
softly.
realized the castle
A
as
sound of
trained you.
reassurance. This
In its
wasn't a
own
flimsy
way.
cot. It
But
had
a
a stronghold
stronghold
designed to last a
stripped
lifetime.
away
Expectation now,
and
picture
left
the bedding
only
itself.
endurance.
You
The
will not
medieval
be warm
bed
tonight.
was a
Not
carefully
truly,
layered construction,
but you will sleep
at the
very
eventually
bottom,
lulled
sat
by
the bed
exhaustion,
cord
wrapped in damp
thick
wool,
ropes woven
your
across the
dreams,
frame to support the
fogging the
mattress.
frozen
air. Servants
The stone
tighten
walls
these cords,
do not comfort,
nightly adjusting
but they
them
contain.
for firmness.
They do not nurture,
which is where the
but
old
they
saying
shelter.
"sleep tight"
and that in the
finds
medieval
its
mind
origin
was enough.
On top
After
of
the
this,
icy grip of
sat
your
the
bed
mattress,
chamber,
a heavy sack.
the journey to the
stuffed
great
with
hall
straw wool,
feels like
or even
stumbling
feathers
into
for the
another
wealthy.
world. Peasants'
You
mattresses
descend the winding
might be filled with hay
stairs,
or dried
with a
reeds,
stub of candle
while
in
nobles
hand,
could sink into
your
a
breath
luxurious
swirling
featherbed
in the darkness.
so soft.
At
It felt
first,
like lying in a
it
cloud.
seems the cold
but
follows
comfort was
you,
always tempered,
nipping
with
at your heels,
practicality.
whispering through
No matter how
cracks in
soft
the
the mattress,
stairwell.
it grew damp from cold
But
air.
then,
And
every
every
few weeks,
a low
servants
hum
emptied
of
and refilled
voices,
shaking
the
out
shuffle
bats,
of feet,
and freshening
the
the straw.
occasional burst of laughter.
Above the mattress came sheets
By the
often
time you
made of
push
coarse
open
linen.
the heavy wooden doors,
Wealthier households
you are
used
hit by
finer
something
linen.
rare in this
Its smooth
fortress,
weave a mark of
stone,
prestige.
a wave of warmth.
But even that luxury
The hall
offered no real
is
warmth.
alive. Over the sheets,
At the far end
came a sequence of
flames
blankets
leap and roar
coverlets
from an enormous
thick woolen
hearth,
layers,
big
embroidered
enough to
quilts
roast a
and
whole
fur
ox.
pelts stitched together
Sparks
from
dance
sable fox
upward
or ermine
into the cavernous
Some of these
rafters,
furs symbolized
vanishing
status,
into shadows,
but their real value
streaked
was
with
insulation.
soot.
A
The glow
nobleman
paints
might
the
spend
walls
a fortune
gold
on a
and
cloak
crimson,
edged in ermine,
throwing flickering
yet that
shadows
same
across
garment
banners
would double
and
as
beams.
bedding during winter.
Long
Its
trestle
softness
tables
pressed
stretched
close
the
around
length
him,
of the hall,
like
crowded
armor
with
against
servants,
frost.
retainers, and
And
noble
then there
guests.
was the canopy.
Wooden trenchers
Suspended from the tall
clatter
posts
mugs
of
of
the bed
ale,
frame.
are
It
passed
wasn't
hand
simply
to hand.
decorative.
Heavy
Laughter
curtains
swells
hung down
and
from
falls
the
like the
canopy,
tide, forming a
For a
cocoon
moment, you
that
almost
trapped
forget
body
how
heat.
cold the castle
At
really
night,
is. But the
servants would
warmth
draw
here
them tightly,
is fragile,
enclosing the sleeper
Sit
in
too
a
close to
private
the fire,
microclimate.
and you
Within
sweat
this enclosure,
uncomfortably, your face
breath
hot,
warmed the air,
while your back still
by a
prickles
few
with
precious
cold.
degrees.
Move just
Some
a few feet
households
away,
even lined their bed curtains
and the chill
with
creeps
wool,
back in,
or patted them to
insinuating
block
itself
drafts.
through every
This
gap
tent
in your
within a
clothes.
made an
The
enormous
fire is
difference
no
in a
central
chamber
heating
where
system.
temperatures hovered just
It
above
is a
freezing.
fickle sun,
Even
with only a
castles with
small
large
orbit
fireplaces
of comfort.
remained frigid.
The great hall
Beyond the
becomes a
hearth's glow.
study in extremes.
So every noble bed
Scorched skin
was essentially a portable
on one
shelter,
side,
a
frozen
testament
bones
to medieval
on the other.
ingenuity.
And yet this
It
was the
wasn't
beating
just
heart
nobles
of
who
castle
understood
life.
this layering of warmth.
In winter,
In
especially,
peasant
the
homes,
hall wasn't
smaller
just a
and
place to
smokier
dine.
beds
It
often
was the only
consisted of
refuge
straw
where
pallets
warmth, community,
laid on
and
wooden
light
boards,
gathered together.
or directly on earthen
Families,
floors. Soldiers,
families
huddled together,
servants,
sharing
even
not only
animals,
blankets but
shared
body
in its
heat.
glow.
Curtains
Dogs
were rare,
prowled
but
beneath
cleverness
the
filled the
tables,
gaps.
snapping at
Parents
scraps.
placed children between
Cats
adults
lounged near the
to
hearth,
ensure the
blinking
youngest
lazily
didn't
at the
freeze.
flames.
Livestock
The air
sometimes
smelled
slept
of
in the
roasted
same room,
meat, and though the
Spiced
smell
wine,
was strong,
sweat, and
a
smoke and
combined
warmth of
intoxicating
humans
mix
and
that
animals
made the cold outside
created a
feel
surprisingly
for a short
cozy
time like a
environment.
distant enemy.
What peasants lacked
Picture
in
the
luxury,
scene. As
they
the feast
compensated
reaches
for
its
with
height,
proximity
a
and communal
bard
living.
strums a lute,
Returning to the
near
noble
the
chamber
dais,
in your imagination,
his voice rising
you
over the
notice the
clamor.
ritual surrounding the bed
Children
itself.
dart between benches,
Preparing
shrieking
for sleep
with
in
laughter.
the medieval world
Nobles
was a lengthy
in
process,
fur-trimmed robes,
more a performance than a
raised
simple
cups
act
to one
of lying
another,
down.
their faces
Servants arrived
ruddy
with
from
warming
drink.
pans,
Even
shallow metal
servants,
trays,
exhausted,
filled with
from
hot
endless
coals,
runs to the
and fitted
kitchen,
with long handles.
pause to steal
They slid
bites
these
of
pans
bread
between
and
layers of
cheese,
bedding, bedding, moving them
For a
in
few
careful
hours,
circles to heat the sheets.
The misery of
The
cold
scent of
walls
scorched linen
and damp
and faint
chambers
wood smoke
is forgotten.
filled the room as they worked.
The hall is not
This
just
wasn't a
warm,
one-person task.
it is alive,
It took skill and
radiant,
vigilance to
with
warm
the
a bed
heat of
without
bodies
setting it aflame.
and the illusion
pan was
of
removed,
safety,
but
and
the warmth
illusions
dissipated
don't
quickly.
last.
But for those
As the
first
night
precious
deepens,
moments, The tables cleared. The bed felt inviting. The musicians icy pack away their instruments. Once the warming pan was taken
Servants
away,
sweep bones
servants
and
arranged
crusts
blankets
into baskets
and fluffed the mattress. The fire dwindles. The bed, its
like
once
a
roaring
fortress
blaze reduced to a sullen glow.
Wealthy
of embers.
families
Might own dozens
One
of
by
blankets
one,
stored
people drift
in
back
carved
to their
chests.
quarters.
Each
A
chosen
few linger
according
to
to
the
curling
season.
up on the rush-strewn
In winter,
floor,
near
the
the
heaviest
hearth,
layers
preferring
preferring the smoky warmth. High sometimes, so many to the frost awaiting
that the
upstairs. Felt pinned
For
down
them,
by their weight.
sleep comes in
Some
snatches,
beds required
punctuated
punctuated by the
servants
crack of settling
to tuck
logs.
in
All the layers, the shuffle of
the
edges,
edges,
emboldened by
so that
darkness
no
and
draft
the
could
occasional
creep
bark
through.
of a restless
For
dog.
nobles,
Eventually,
bedtime
was a public
silence
ritual.
reclaims the space.
A lord or lady,
The embers
rarely
fade
prepared
to
for
ash,
sleep alone, leaving the hall
ladies
as cold
in waiting
and cavernous
or
squires as the rest of the
assisted with
castle.
undressing.
The
removing
warmth was
elaborate
never
gowns
permanent or armor piece
It
by
was
piece.
borrowed a trick of fire
Folding garments
and
neatly
flesh gone as
and
quickly
placing
as
them
it came.
in chests near the bed.
By dawn,
A servant,
the great
might
hall
help
is
their
no more
master wash
hospitable than the
hands
battlements
and face
outside.
with warm water.
Think of it this
brought in
way.
copper basins.
The great hall was
followed
less
by
of a
scented
solution
cloths
than a reprieve.
to mask the smell of smoke.
It didn't conquer
and
the
sweat.
cold.
This
It
washing
merely
ritual
distracted
wasn't
from it.
merely about cleanliness.
In the same way a
It was
party
a small
today
comfort.
might make you
A way of
forget the
reclaiming
weather
a
outside
sense
the
of
medieval
dignity.
feast
In a world
was
where
as much
nightly
about
discomfort
heat
was inevitable
as it was about food.
By contrast,
Each guest
peasants
brought
had
not just
simpler,
company,
swifter routines, but warmth. Their
After a
bodies
day of
adding to the
backbreaking
fragile
labor,
shield against
they
winter.
collapsed
onto straw
the
stuffed
moment they
mattresses.
left
The cold, wearing much of their
slipped
day
back
clothing
into
to
bed.
bed. Patient,
and
they
eternal.
rarely had a
And yet,
separate set of
despite
night
its
clothes.
fleeting comfort,
Their homes
the
were
great
single
hall was
room
remembered
cottages,
fondly.
with a hearth burning
Travelers
low in the
spoke of its
center.
glow chroniclers,
The fire smoke
described its
blackened the
feasts.
rafters and filled the
Poets
air
sang
with a thick
of its
haze.
laughter.
But
In
that
the
same
midst of
smoke
an
kept
unforgiving
insects at bay
environment,
and insulated
this
the house
was the
by trapping
castle's
heat.
single act
Children,
of mercy.
grandparents, and even
You could
animals
endure another
all
freezing
shared
night
this space,
so
turning the
long
cottage
as you
into
had
a
basked
warm,
for a
bustling
time
nest
in the warmth
during the coldest
and
nights.
noise of the great hall.
But let's return
So,
to the noble
as you blow out
bedchamber.
your candle
You climb the small
and prepare
wooden
to
steps,
climb back up the
and
winding
slide under the
stairs,
heavy covers.
you
drawing
hold the
curtains
memory
shut.
close.
The sensation
echo
is
of
immediate.
laughter,
The
the
world
smell of
outside
smoke,
disappears muffled into
the flicker of
silence.
fire,
Even
still
the sound
clinging
of
to your
wind
closed
rattling
all,
shutters seems
are
far
small
away.
talismans
This
against
small
the
space
chill
feels
waiting in your
private,
chamber.
safe.
You
The
know
warmth of your own
the cold
breath
will win in
quickly
the
collects
end.
inside the canopy.
But for now you've had your share
and
of
though your
warmth,
body shivers at first,
and that is
within
enough.
minutes,
As the last of
you
the
begin
feast
to
scraps
settle.
are cleared,
Yet you never
the
forget
great hall
that
transforms.
this comfort,
The
this
riot
fragile
of
noise fades. Outside the curtains,
replaced
by the creak
the
of
room is still
benches,
frigid,
being dragged
Servants
aside, tend to the fire,
and the shuffle
but the
of
chimney
servants
draws warmth
spreading
upward
fresh
and away.
rushes on the floor.
And before long,
What was a
frost will
dining
creep along the
space
window frames.
only hours ago
The psychological importance
now
of this
becomes
enclosed
something
bed,
else,
a
cannot
sleeping
be
ground,
overstated.
a gathering
In a
place
time when castles
for those who
drafty,
prefer the smoky
dark
warmth
and cold
of the hearth. The bed
to
was
the
a
icy
sanctuary
void
of the
chroniclers from the
bedchambers
Middle
above.
Ages, you
Often
picture
wrote
the
in
scene,
reverent tones,
a handful
about
of
the
soldiers
sensation of still in their
sinking into
padded
bed,
gambesons, describing
roll
it as
into blankets
entering
near the
a
fire,
private chamber,
their helmets
within a
set down
chamber, like
for
guardians
many,
at their
this
sides.
was the
one place
dogs
where they could
settle
feel
among them,
secure and
curling
protected,
into
tight circles,
even in their own
tails
homes.
over noses,
Beds
giving
were
off
status
little
symbols
gusts of
too.
warmth.
A richly
A couple
carved
of
bed
boys
frame
nestle close
and
together,
embroidered canopy,
sharing a tattered
displayed
cloak,
wealth
and power. Their breaths
and nobles
rise into the
often
rafters, traveled with
like
their pale
bedding
ghosts,
to ensure
mingling with the
familiarity
last wisps of
and
smoke
warmth
that snake from the
wherever they
hearth.
stayed.
This is
Some
not
accounts
comfort,
even mention
by any
travelers
modern
bringing
measure, entire bed
but it is
frames,
survival.
disassembling. Even nobles
and
sometimes
reassembling
linger
in
here.
guest chambers.
A lord might
For the
pretend to
medieval
stay
elite
behind
bedding
wasn't
for
just
late
personal
night
property,
planning,
or
it was
private
part of their
talk with his
identity.
steward, a movable
But the
piece
truth
of
is
home.
simpler.
In a world where comfort
He dreads
was
the
rare.
climb to his
Sleep
freezing
itself,
chamber,
however, wasn't as
sitting near
straightforward
the embers,
as lying down
cloak
and drifting
drawn
off.
tight.
The medieval
He
night
watches
was a
shadows
carefully
flicker
managed
across the
process.
stone walls,
Fires needed
and allows
constant
himself
tending.
to feel something resembling
Servants
ease.
rotated shifts to
It
ensure
is a
embers
humbling
didn't die
picture.
out. Some
A
noble
man with
households
wealth
had
and
staff
power
whose
enough
sole duty
to command a
was
garrison,
to watch over their
yet
master's
still captive
bedchamber throughout
to
the
the
night,
same cold,
stoking
as his
fires
lowest
and
servant.
adjusting blankets.
The
if
air
needed.
itself carries
Even with all
memories
this care
of the evening's
medieval
revelry.
people understood
The scent of
cold could
roasted
strike
meat
suddenly
lingers mingling
and
with
fatally.
stale ale.
There are
and
stories
damp
of travelers found
smoke
frozen
from
to
the
death
dying fire
in beds where
clings
fires
stubbornly
burned
to fabrics
only hours earlier,
saturating everything
fear
it
of
touches
drafts
was
tomorrow,
deeply rooted to the point
the same
where
garments
catching
will
a
be
chill
worn again,
was considered a
and the
genuine
smell
threat to
will
life.
travel with their owners
Curtains,
through
furs,
corridors and
braziers
stairwells weren't meant
A
just
reminder
luxuries
of fleeting warmth.
They were medical precautions
For those who drift to
this
sleep
obsession
here,
with bed warmth.
the odors are almost
Even
comforting.
fashion.
Familiar.
Wealthy nobles
Proof
owned
that
elaborate
life
night
still
clothes,
smolders in a
embroidered
castle
with gold
otherwise
thread,
ruled by chill
or
stone.
lined with fur.
But the great hall
turning bedtime
is not
into a
entirely
display
safe.
of status.
Rats grow
Some
bold
ladies
at night,
wore long trailing
scampering
nightcaps
across
adorned with
rushes,
ribbons, though
drawn by
practicality
crumbs and
likely
bones,
won over vanity.
overlooked
Most
in the
households
cleanup.
and simpler woolen
They
caps
skitter over
became
feet,
the norm.
noses
For men,
twitching their
heavy linen
presence,
shirts and wool stockings,
a reminder that
were standard
warmth always
sleepwear,
comes
adding
with
layers
company.
between
You do
skin
not
and
choose.
icy sheets.
The fireside
Peasants adapted in
slumberers
other
groan,
ways.
their
And
mattresses
roll swatting
often
at the
called
pests,
pallets,
were
but
simple
soon
sacks
return to their
stuffed with
uneasy
straw
rest
reeds or dried grass.
Fatigue overpowers
These
fear,
mattresses absorbed moisture
and the
easily.
hall fills with the
So
sound
families
of
aired them
stores,
out in the sun
punctuated
whenever
by
possible.
the occasional bark or
Bed
cough
bugs and lice
from
were
a distance.
constant problem.
The hall looks
And
almost
smoke
like
from
a
the
battlefield,
served
as a
aftermath,
crude,
but
bodies
effective
sprawled,
deterrent.
limbs
The bedding
tangled
was
close,
and
pulled
scratchy,
over faces.
but in homes
Yet there is
packed
peace
with
here,
relatives
of a rough
and
kind.
animals. Warmth
The
was
stone
shared
walls still seep
in
cold,
monasteries,
but the
beds were
nearness of
even
others,
simpler
the glowing
wooden
hearth,
boards, or
the muffled
straw-filled
sounds of
mattresses
breathing,
lined in rows
these combine
in
to
communal
soften the
dormitories.
night.
Monks
It is
rose
not
at
warmth
regular
as you know
intervals
it,
throughout the
but
night
it is something
for prayer,
as you
which kept
imagine
fires
yourself
tended,
lying down among
but
them,
also meant their sleep
head
was
pillowed
intentionally
on a
short
rolled-up
and
cloak.
segmented.
The
Warmth
rushes
wasn't the
crackling
primary
faintly
goal.
beneath you.
Discipline
You
and
feel the
devotion
paradox
were.
of medieval life.
Yet even monks took
The
measures
grandest
to
room
block
in the
drafts,
castle,
often hanging
decorated
woolen
with
draperies
banners,
near their beds,
built to impress
or
visiting
using portable
lords
screens
and
Returning
dignitaries.
to the noble bedroom
Doubles as a communal dormitory.
Imagine servants
Power and
tucking in their
poverty
master,
overlap here.
adjusting the curtains
For the
and
cold
dimming the candles.
makes no distinction.
The crackling fire is
Whether
a comfort,
noble or servant,
but its warmth
soldier
won't
or
last.
scullion.
Before long,
The great
smoke
hall
will cling to
embraces
the
them
room,
all with the same
seeping into
uneven
every
firelight.
blanket and
Eventually, the
in some
embers sink
castles,
to dull
the
red,
smell of burning wood was
and
so
even those
constant
closest to the
that
hearth
visitors remarked
shiver
had become
in their
part of the
sleep.
household's identity.
Dawn is still
Children grew up
hours
with blackened
away.
rafters,
The
and
hall,
soot-stained
which only
walls,
recently
as
rang
a
with
normal
laughter
backdrop,
and
associating
song,
these scents
now
with
resounds
safety.
with the low
Once
chorus
you are
of
alone in
sleepers,
your curtained bed,
trying to outlast
you
the
feel as
night.
if you're in a different
You
world.
understand in this moment
The flicker of candlelight
why the great
outside
hall was
casts
remembered,
faint shadows on
not
the fabric,
just as a place of
creating
feasts,
a cozy glow inside
but as
your
the
small
fragile heart
enclosure.
of survival in
You
a
close your
castle
eyes,
where
aware of
winter
the
never
muffled
truly
noises
relented.
beyond a
Morning,
guard's boots on the stairs.
in the great hall,
The distant
comes
howl
not
of
with
wind,
silence,
the gentle sigh
but
of
with
the
stirrings
servant
that feel
adjusting
almost
logs on the
theatrical.
hearth.
This
The faint
sense of
gray light
enclosure,
seeps through
of
narrow
being
windows, hidden away from a harsh
high
world,
above cutting shafts
was
across
deeply
the smoky
psychological.
air.
In a time when
Embers
danger still
and
glow
discomfort
faintly
were
in the
constants,
hearth,
releasing the
symbolized
last
control
whispers of
privacy
heat.
and
The
survival.
sleepers begin to rouse.
For nobles owning
First
a
the
bed of
dogs
this
stretching
magnitude
and shaking their
was
coats,
a mark of wealth. Then the servants,
but its
blinking
real value
wearily
lay
in its practicality,
rubbing cold from their joints.
The curtains weren't just
It
drapery.
is a slow rising,
They acted as primitive
as though
insulation,
no one truly wants
trapping
to
body
surrender.
heat. What
Cutting
little comfort
drafts.
the hall has offered.
Heavy wood
Their
frames
frames
of
of feather mattresses
servants
and furs
are the first to
turned an
move with
otherwise uninhabitable
They
stone
gather
chamber
rushes,
into a livable
foul,
environment from the night's
for
use.
peasants.
Crumbs
Crumbs,
may have been
bones
humbler,
spilled,
but they
drink
represented
even the waste
security
left
as
by
well.
animals,
A
and sweep
simple
them
straw
aside.
mattress near a
The
hearth
smell is sour,
could be
heavy,
the
clinging
difference
to
between
everything.
waking with
New
frost on your
bundles of
blanket,
rushes are
or
spread,
not waking
scented
at
with
all.
herbs like
Even
lavender
with all these
or meadowsweet.
precautions, when available,
Medieval sleep
though
was
within
rarely
days,
restful.
those herbs
Blankets
will be
were
drowned
heavy
out
smoke
by the
filled the
stench of
lungs,
everyday
and
life.
pests
were ever present.
This ritual cleaning
Yet within these
is less
discomforts,
about beauty
there was also
and more
a kind
about
of intimacy
tolerability,
and
an
resilience.
attempt to keep the hall
Families
livable
shared warmth
despite its role as
servants
both dining
cared for
room
their lords
and
through
dormitory.
long nights.
Soon the tables
And
are
entire
reset,
households worked together
benches
to
dragged
survive
back
winter's
into
grip.
place. The medieval
Trenchers
bed,
arranged
more than
cups,
any other
polished
piece
with
of furniture,
ragged cloths, reflects this
The
balance
great hall
between
is nothing,
hardship
if not versatile,
and ingenuity.
In less than a
It
day,
was a symbol of
it can
wealth,
shift from banquet hall
a shield against
to
cold,
dormitory
and
to
a courtroom
haven.
of fragile
But
comfort.
beneath these
In an
transformations,
age where
the
warmth
memory of cold
was never
lingers.
guaranteed,
Those who
tonight
slept
in
on
your
the rushes
imagination,
feel
you
it in
draw
their
those
bones,
curtains close,
stiffness in their
and
limbs
settles
deeper
from the
into
hard
the bedding.
ground.
The
And
weight
the
of
uneven
centuries
warmth of the fire
presses
around you.
They rise,
carved
not
wood,
refreshed,
The embroidered
but relieved
textiles,
to have made it
the
through
smell of
another
soot,
night.
and
And
herbs
yet,
hanging in
despite the
air.
hardship,
You feel
there
the
is a
bed
strange
sway
sense
gently
of cried, as if alive its To have endured the cold together, and frame holding the memory side by of countless side sleepers, was a form of solidarity. Winter chill. The hall outside was not just the center of warmth, and the but the center of community, But here,
even nobles, though they returned to private chambers,
sanctuary,
carried away the echo of that collective survival.
When you step onto the
A
stone
feast
floor
was more
of
than
a medieval
indulgence.
castle chamber,
It was insurance.
is its bite.
The laughter,
Even through thick
the heat
leather
of bodies
soles,
packed
the
shoulder
cold
to shoulder,
rises up like a tide,
the shared drink and
a
food,
steady reminder
all of it
that you're
worked
living
against the
inside
winter,
a fortress,
pushing it
built
back
for
for a few
survival,
fleeting hours.
not comfort.
For the castle's
These
lord,
floors,
the great hall
carved from
also had
slabs of
symbolic
limestone
power.
or granite,
To host a
were
feast
meant to last centuries,
was to demonstrate
and they did.
abundance, strength,
But their
and
permanence
control.
came with a price.
Yet no matter
They
how much
absorbed
meat was
winter's chill,
roasted
like
or
sponges,
wine was poured,
turning every step into a
the
small
cold was
shock to
never
the body.
fully banished.
Even those who grew up
Guests
in
might
castles
marvel at the
never
grandeur,
became fully accustomed
but they
to
too
that
felt the
sensation.
drafts snaking through the
Chroniclers
room,
often wrote of
the sharp
servants
bite of
slipping through
chill when
darkened
they
halls,
strayed from the fire.
feet wrapped in scraps of
The
wool
lord's wealth
or
could buy
littered
food
the stones
and
beneath them,
finery,
as icy
but it
as
could not
riverbeds
buy
in
insulation.
midwinter.
The hall,
Modern
like the
visitors
castle
often
itself,
marvel at the
was a
grand size
constant
of castle
reminder
halls and
that
corridors,
nature always
but this
had the final
architectural
say.
scale was part
Think
of the
for a
problem.
moment
High
about the rhythm
ceilings,
of
wide
such days.
staircases, and
In
cavernous
summer,
rooms
the hall
meant
would
that
be
warmth
stifling
dissipated
smoke,
quickly.
curling in
roaring
thick
fire
haze
might
beneath the
provide a
beams.
halo of comfort,
But in winter,
near the hearth,
every
but
gathering
just a few
revolved
paces
around
away,
the hearth.
the stone floor
People leaned
reclaimed
in
its
close
power,
conversations,
pulling heat from your feet,
held with noses
Imagine
nearly
a
in the
nobleman
flames,
in thick fur
backs
robes,
turned to the cold
perched
world
on a
beyond.
raised dais.
For many,
During a banquet feast,
this was the only
resting
time
on a
in a
footstool,
day when they
covered
felt
with
something
animal
close
pelts,
to warmth.
yet still feeling
It
the chill
made the
creep
hall
up his legs.
precious.
It
Even
wasn't just
sacred
discomfort
in its own rough
This
way.
kind of cold
The
was
chapel
deeply
fed the
fatiguing,
soul,
a constant
but
drain
the
on
hall
energy
kept the body
and morale.
alive. Of course,
In
the price of
response
this
to this
warmth
relentless
was
chill
always
medieval household
impermanence.
turned
By
to an
midday,
ancient and
the fire roared
surprisingly
again for
elegant
cooking,
solution rushes.
but the hall was never
These were
truly
bundles
cozy.
of straw or
The
reeds
scale of
spread
the
across
space
the
defeated
stone
any
floors
attempt
to create
at
a
real
makeshift
comfort.
carpet.
Heat
But
rose
rushes
and
weren't
clung
just laid down
uselessly to the
casually.
rafters,
They were often
while
layered
those on the
with
ground
aromatic
huddled in
herbs,
cloaks, shifting
like
closer
lavender,
to braziers, blowing
and
on
chamomile.
hands, stamping feet.
These herbs
Even
served
during
multiple
banquets,
purposes.
when laughter
Their
masked
scent helped
discomfort,
mask the smell of damp
guests
wool,
might tuck their cloaks
unwashed
tighter
bodies,
around
and
themselves,
smoke-filled air.
stealing glances
And
at the
some
nearest
even
flame.
acted as
What
natural
survives in
insect
memory,
repellents.
Walking across
not
such
the
a
cold,
floor
but
was
the
like stepping
contrast.
over
A living
the hall was
tapestry of
remembered
scents and
as
textures,
bright, noisy,
alive.
The debate over
A
rushes
reprieve
is
from the
fascinating
solitude of private
because it
chambers
reveals the tension
between
It was
historical
here that the
reality
misery of
and
winter
romantic myth
was held at bay,
in some
however
accounts.
briefly.
Rushes
In
are
this
described
vast,
as
smoky
practical
room,
insulators,
people
keeping
gathered,
bare feet warm,
endured,
and
and
even
creating a
thrived
buffer
for a
between
while.
occupants
and cold
And
stuff.
when you step back to imagine
Other
castle
historians,
life,
however, argue
it is this
that rushes
image,
were primarily
the glow of
decorative
fire,
or symbolic.
the clamor of voices,
They point out
the shared
that warmth
warmth
loss in a
that
castle
softens the
was far
otherwise
greater through walls
relentless
and ceilings
ceilings of
than
cold stone
floors.
walls.
And
So
that
the great
rushes, if
hall
not
stands
replaced,
as a
frequently
paradox.
quickly became
It was a
filthy.
place of grandeur,
Archaeological
and
studies
squalor,
of medieval
comfort,
floors reveal
and misery,
compact
celebration,
layers of
and
rushes,
survival.
straw,
Its
and
warmth
dirt
was real,
that built
but
up
never
over
lasting.
years, creating a
Its light was
surprisingly
bright,
soft
but always
unhygienic
fading.
surface.
Yet for
In
those
grand
who lived
halls,
within
This
castles,
floor carpet
it was
could be
everything
several
a
inches
fleeting
deep,
glimpse of
trapping
what it
not only
meant to
warmth,
feel human
but also fleas
in a
dust
world of chill stone
and remnants of food.
and endless winter.
Yet,
You
despite
step
their
into a
drawbacks,
chamber
rushes
that smells
provided
faintly of
psychological
damp grass,
comfort
herbs,
in a castle
and something less
where
pleasant
every surface
lurking
was
underneath.
cold and
At
unyielding.
first glance, the floor
The
looks
presence
covered in
of a
straw,
warm, fragrant
but
layer
it is not straw
beneath your
exactly.
feet offered
It is
a sense
rushes,
of domesticity.
bundles of long, reedy
Servants
plants,
refreshed
cut
them
from
seasonally,
riverbanks,
dried, or even weekly
and then
in wealthier
strewn across the
households,
stone.
laying down
To
new herbs in
modernize,
summer and thicker
It
straw
feels
in winter.
primitive,
Imagine
almost
stepping
careless.
into a chamber
Why not
lit only by
carpets
flickering
or
torches,
wooden
inhaling
planks,
the sweet
polished
scent of crushed
smooth?
lavender,
But in a
mixed with
medieval
the earthy
castle,
smell of
rushes
straw,
were the
and for a
answer to
brief moment,
everything: insulation,
feeling a sense of
decoration,
warmth
even a
that the
primitive
temperature
form of
alone
hygiene.
couldn't provide.
Walking across
For
them,
nobles, rushes
your
were a
boots
sign of
crunch
status,
softly,
as well as comfort.
muffling the echo of
Wealthier
stone.
estates could afford
In
fresh
theory,
rushes more
rushes
often,
were meant to
and
soak
some
up
castles
spills
even
and
employed
scraps
staff
to make the hard
specifically
floor more
tasked with
bearable to
maintaining
trap
them.
some of the
In
damp
contrast,
rising from below.
Peasant cottages
Often they were
typically
mixed
had
with
dirt
fragrant
floors covered
herbs,
with straw or
sweet
reeds.
woodruff,
Though
lavender,
humble,
meadow sweet
these cottages
to freshen the
benefited
air.
from their smaller size.
For a little while, this
the heat
worked.
from a central hearth,
The hall
warmed
might
the
smell of
entire
grass and flowers,
and animals housed
instead of
inside
sweat
added
and
both
smoke.
warmth and a
But
pungent
give it a
scent.
few days
Then
and
the
villagers
illusion
accepted
collapsed as part of life.
Food fell, The rushes in ale-sloshed dogs weren't just track mud people spat. They were a necessity absorbing and soon mud. The rushes became a filthy animals, concealing rather than curing the grime of daily life. In castles, imagine sweeping them aside after a feast so entrenched. Underneath you rituals would revolve around them. During feasts or important ceremonies, greasy puddles, floors were freshly strewn with herbs, even the occasional forgotten display of wealth. Chroniclers visitors wrote entering with disapproval would notice the rich about rushes not being springy feel of the floor underfoot. Sometimes even years until they rotted resources. Even in the sweet herbs that once the fragrant air hinted became brittle sticks mingled with mold. Yet under this layer of luxury, yet for all their faults, no rushes remained because castles had few better options of stone. Stone floors without sweeping floors were unforgiving, cold, echoing, uncomfortable to walk on. Smoke blackened, a fresh layer of rushes settled, however temporary, and moisture softened the world a little. Breath of dozens of people. There were the walls, condensed on walls, turning bare castles stone was bleak, damp, imposing caverns, and worst of all, how carefully maintained. Now, to fight this, picture yourself as a guest, draped them climbing with tapestries. You step carefully These were not the delicate wall hangings. Their you might faint, picture today, but comforting, but massive, their woven texture panels, soft, but thick with wool beneath your feet. Sometimes lying, a servant with has just finished warming your sheets. They depicted hunts, battles, and the room smells saints or heralded beasts. Linen. Stories told between the warm bed, but their cold floor is striking. Was more than beauty. You hurry to climb into a tapestry sanctuary. Was a shield against few moments of heat, a barrier between the canopy skins and unyielding stone. In a room filled with tapestries beside one, velvet drapes, and you might the chill seems a little less upward from the floor, seeping inward, reminding you the warmth that castles they offered never designed with comfort in mind. A tapestry the absorbed damp of these fortresses nearly as readily as it prioritized defense. In thick winter, walls, they sagged heavy edges, curling with moisture, minimized vulnerabilities, crept into fibers. Stone floors allowed for easy had to beat them outside mud to shake out dust and fleas. Warmth. Though the parasites always returned. Wealthy nobles at night wooden floorboards when you drew close to admire the stitched creating a slightly warmer surface than stone. You might see tiny shapes, but these were rare, scuttling at the seams. Expensive. They were works of art, relied on rushes, as there also habitats for vermin. Stone. Despite their flaws, rushes, this practicality and tapestries influenced carried prestige. Opulent castles. A hall without the coldest months felt barren. No one was immune to the poor unfinished. Servants to display were thick hanging heroes of woven in Flanders against France. They rose to prove wealth and to replace rushes, to scatter rushes with herbal water and with exotic layers of straw was to show refinement. This labor-intensive process, even if within days, helped keep the room smelled of beer and dog and created the illusion of contradiction defined castle life grandeur, actual temperature layered over grime beauty. Servants themselves laid down upon filth. Near the guests fire, might remark on the richness of your tapestries. The same herbs but they also stepped carefully wary were stuffed of what lay beneath the rushes. For those who lived within the experience was simply normal bedding. Children crawled through rushes, impact of rushes as if they were playgrounds, be overstated, unaware of the fleas in a world leaping onto their skin. Stone and iron. Servants spread organic layers dutifully, breathing in the grassy scent before it turned sour in the depths of winter. Nobles boasted of new hangings, their colors glowing in torchlight, and smelling even rosemary as drafts and slid past the edges, crushed beneath their boots. Comfort was never complete, mingling with wood smoke, but it was always pursued, and the savory aroma by of roasting meat, layer by layer. That sensory mixture, if you close your eyes, herbs, fire, and you can feel it, became synonymous your boots pressing with into the springy floor and warmth. The faint give beneath your steps heat was a luxury. Your hand brushes the woven wall. Rushes had a more rough wool beneath your fingers. Monks often surfaced unheated despite the fire nearby. Their viewed simple, and their both will betray you beneath woolen robes. Rushes will rot, yet even their rushes, the tapestry, were laid out as a practical necessity. But for religious texts, sometimes they are small defenses, like root, fragile attempts, or pennyroyal, used to tame the stone beast of the castle. Their sharp scent filling the cloisters. And sometimes, while monks prized fragile defenses, were all that stood between misery and endurance. Even the most ascetic the deeper you look, recognize the more you realize rushes were both blessing as you walk through the castle halls in your mind. To step barefoot, picture the cold stone straw beneath your boots would be torture. The faint perfume to step on rushes was at least tolerable. It softens the harshness of the stone labyrinth, added a sense of an otherwise inhospitable fortress, and soaked up the worst into a space that feels at least, but that so briefly like a home, came at a price. The combination
Over
of
time,
sound,
they
scent,
became sponges
and touch
of filth,
created a
Think of
multi-sensory
every
experience
accident in a
that
hall
gave medieval life
filled with
its
people,
richness.
spilled ale,
Modern homes
greasy
are warm and
drippings
silent
from roasted meat
their
chamber
floors
pots,
smooth,
emptied carelessly
and
in the
sterile.
corner.
But in these
The rushes
castles,
swallowed
every
it all,
step carried with it
until the layer beneath
a
was a
reminder
damp,
of nature,
stinking
herbs
compost
underfoot,
heap, hidden from
smoke
sight.
in the air,
Archaeological digs
and the cold
in the old
ever-present
castles
creeping
sometimes reveal
through
these
every
layers,
crack.
compacted
The
into dark
practicalities
mats
of rush maintenance
beneath centuries
reveal
of
the
stone
sheer
dust.
effort medieval
They
households
tell a
invested
story
in daily
not
survival.
of elegance,
Imagine
but
an
of
army
daily
of servants
survival.
sweeping
People
out
were
old
practical.
rushes,
Replace
replacing
the
them
top
with
layer
fresh
when
bundles
guests arrived,
collected from river
scatter
banks.
fresh herbs for
Herbs
scent,
were carefully dried in
and
summer
ignore the
stored
festering
for
floor
winter
beneath.
use. This
The result
process
was a
wasn't
kind
just
of
for the
medieval
elite.
carpet renewed at the
Even
surface,
small cottages
decaying below.
had seasonal rhythms.
You can imagine
tied
the
to
crunch
gathering
and squelch
and drying
underfoot,
herbs for bedding.
the smell rising
These
in
rituals
summer,
were
the
part of a
fleas
larger
hopping
relationship
eagerly into the
with
folds
nature,
of clothing,
one
and
in
still
which people
rushes
used
endured
every
for
resource available
generations.
to them
Why?
to endure harsh
Because
winters.
there were few
But rushes were
alternatives.
far from perfect.
Carpets were
Over
luxury
time,
items imported at
layers of
great
straw
cost.
compacted,
Wooden
creating a
floors
dense
required
mat
more
that
timber
could
than
harbor
many
vermin.
lords could spare.
Guests and residents alike
Stone was
complained
the
of
most
fleas, lice,
durable,
and
and
even
rushes
rodents.
were the cheapest,
Chroniclers
most
sometimes
adaptable
mentioned
covering for
that
it.
floors had to be
They
scraped
became
down to
part
bare
of the
stone
rhythm of castle life,
before being refreshed,
replaced
a laborious
seasonally,
task
or
that
at best
required
yearly,
hours of back-breaking
a
work.
constant cycle
Yet
of
the
fresh
tradition
greenery
persisted
turning foul.
for centuries.
Now,
Because
lift
it
your
worked
eyes
well
from the
enough,
floor to the wall.
its softened steps
Here the
added scent
tapestries speak
and
bright with
created a
color
psychological
and
buffer
woven with care.
in an otherwise
Knights
unforgiving
ride in
environment.
pursuit of stags.
Even the wealthiest castles
Ladies with falcons
couldn't
fully
lift their
escape
hands
the icy grip
saints
of
of their
glow
stone floors
in golden thread.
In some accounts,
In the flicker of
nobles
torchlight,
took additional
the
measures,
scene seemed to move
such as
shadows
placing
and
rugs
animating the
imported
hunts
from the
and
Middle
battles.
East in their
These
private
hangings
chambers.
transformed otherwise
These
bleak
bleak
walls
often woven
into
with
storybooks
intricate
of
designs
wool.
were prized
To a
possessions
guest arriving
displayed
on a
not
cold
only for their
evening,
beauty, but for
they
their
declared
warmth.
wealth and culture
Yet they were small
as
luxuries
clearly
in vast
as any
rooms,
banquet
and their
could.
effect was
But
limited.
behind the beauty,
The average
was a
chamber remained
practical
cold
aim,
enough
warmth
that frost formed
Sit
on walls
beside
overnight.
bare stone,
In winter,
and you could feel
nobles
the
often
chill
wore
radiating.
shoes or slippers
Sit
indoors,
beside a
and
tapestry,
servants carried foot
and
warmers,
at least
small
some of that
boxes
icy
filled with
breath
coals
was blocked
to place near their master's feet.
It wasn't
during
much,
meals or
never
meetings,
enough,
to make
You
the
crouch
chamber
in your
truly
imagination
comfortable to touch the rushes.
but it was something.
They are crisp.
A family might
aromatic,
huddle on
and layered,
benches,
so
pressed
thick
close to the
that your
hangings,
hand sinks slightly
believing
into
the
them.
woven saints and
Beneath
hunters
that softness
shielded them from
you
more
feel
than
the
just
unyielding
drafts.
chill of stone.
The wall
The
still
floor
seeped
tells a
cold,
story of ingenuity,
but less
and
directly
compromise.
filtered through layers
Medieval
of
life
wool
wasn't
and
about
imagination.
eliminating hardship.
Of course, the hangings
It was about managing
absorbed
it.
their own share of
The
the
cold could
castle's
not be
life.
defeated.
But
Smoke
it could
from
be
hearths
softened,
layered
darkened
over with
them,
straw herbs,
leaving
and human
soot ingrained in every
until it
fiber.
became bearable.
Damp air
Now, imagine
caused them to
lying in
sag
bed
their once
as a
taut
winter
surfaces,
storm rages outside.
rippling,
Wind howls
and as months
through arrow
passed,
slits.
vermin
And
took
snow
advantage.
piles up against the
Mice
castle
and
walls.
moths
Your
found
chamber
homes
smells
within the
of smoke
threads.
and dried
Servants
lavender.
beat them in the
The
courtyard
warmth
to
from
drive
your
out
body
insects,
creates a pocket of
clouds
comfort
of dust
beneath
and
the heavy
debris
blankets,
flying into the winter
but
air.
every time your foot
But
strays
the pests
near
always
the edge of the
return.
bed, a
Even
draft
beauty
seeps
in a
in,
castle
reminding
could
you
never
of the
be
cold floor
entirely
below.
clean. Still,
Somewhere in the
tapestries
darkness
became
servants
heirlooms,
stir stoking
prized
fires
for their artistry.
and sweeping embers.
Families
Their bare
passed
feet
them
brush
down
against
commissioning
rushes,
new panels for
the sound
marriages,
muffled
and
rhythmic
victories
part
or
of the castle's
pilgrimages.
nighttime
In
symphony.
a sense, this
They were
interplay
memory keepers
of stone,
recording
straw,
what stone
and scent
parchment
could
defined
not.
medieval domestic life.
And though they failed at
Floors
true
weren't just
insulation,
surfaces.
they
They were
succeeded in
ecosystems,
spirit,
absorbing
they made
the
chambers
chambers
look less
of
like
every meal,
dungeons,
every
and
footstep,
more like
every
homes.
season.
The
That
urban
is the
illusion
perfect
mattered
these
perhaps
halls
more
more
than
than
the
the
actual
were
temperature.
harvested
Together,
months earlier,
rushes
dried
and
under summer
tapestries
sun, formed the
straw that
castle's
cushioned noble
attempt
feet in
at
winter
comfort, was collected from
They
autumn
covered the
fields,
two surfaces
even in its
that mattered
harshest
most.
moments.
The
Medieval
ground
life
beneath
was
their
deeply
feet,
connected
and
to
the
the
walls
rhythms
that
of hemmed
nature.
you in, and rushes
Neither
were one of the
could
most
defeat the cold,
intimate
intimate
expressions of that
but
connection.
both softened it
As dawn
disguising
breaks in
the stone's
this
cruelty.
imagined castle,
With layers of plant
sunlight
and
filters
wool.
through horn-paned
Walking
windows,
across the
catching
hall,
fine
you felt
dust
the spring of
suspended
greenery
in the air, Sitting near the
floor
wall,
glows
you saw
golden
the
beneath
shimmer
your
of
feet.
thread, a patchwork
For
of
a
straw
moment,
and herbs.
You could almost
You
believe you
realized
lived
that this
in luxury,
simple
not
detail,
hardship.
yet
An
the
ancient
truth
practice
always
now
crept
largely
back.
forgotten.
Beneath
was
the
as crucial
rushes,
to medieval
rot
survival as
festered,
armor or castle walls.
behind the tapestries,
It didn't just make life
damp
bearable.
gathered. The castle was too vast, too unyielding for such small remedies to conquer.
Without modern comforts.
They were decorations on a beast,
deeper,
dressings
your
on a
medieval
wound,
bed, drawing
and
the heavy
everyone knew
curtains
it.
shut.
Still,
the icy
night
chamber
after
outside
night, the
feels like a
rushes were
distant
laid.
world.
The
Inside
tapestries
this cocoon,
admired the illusions
warmth
maintained,
becomes precious,
because without
treasure
them,
built
the
layer
raw
by layer.
truth of the castle
The
would
medieval
be
bed was not
unbearable,
just a place to
stone
rest.
cold and nothing
It
else.
was a carefully
By
engineered
evening,
survival
when
structure.
torches are lit,
Every textile
and shadows
every
tremble
drape,
against the stone
every
walls,
stitch of embroidery carried
the
both
role
status
of rushes
and function,
and tapestries
and the layering
becomes
process
more
was
ritualized.
As
You
much
notice
as it was practical,
in the floor.
let's peel back
Each
those
step
layers in your
releases a
mind one at
faint
a time.
crunch.
Closest
The brittle
to your skin,
stalks shifting
like a linen
underfoot.
sheet.
At the
To
same
modern
time,
ears,
an
linen sounds
odor
luxurious,
rises, part grassy,
but for medieval sleepers,
part
it was
sour,
an everyday
tinged
necessity.
with smoke and spilled
Unlike
ale.
wool or fur linen,
Hours earlier,
could be boiled
servants
and laundered,
had scattered herbs
making
among
it
the
the first
rushes
line of
to
defense
freshen the air
against dirt and pests.
But by night,
Linen
the
was
sweetness
cool to
is
the touch,
overwhelmed, crisp
by the sheer weight
and
of
surprisingly
daily life.
smooth.
When
What
finely
was meant
woven,
as comfort,
but in the depth of winter,
becomes a quiet reminder
that first contact
of decay.
sent a
Imagine
chill
yourself
through
as
even
a
the
guest
bravest
arriving
soul.
for supper.
Servants would warm
You
sheets
glance
with
at the floor
coal-filled pans,
and see a
yet the
golden
sensation
green
of
covering
icy linen
soft
was
compared
unavoidable
to the naked stone.
in wealthy households.
Perhaps you even
owning
admire
multiple
the
sets of
herbal
linen
scent
was a
that
sign of
wafts
refinement.
up as your
Poor
boots brush the
families
stalks.
made do with coarse,
Courtesy
homespun
demands
cloth
polite words
that grew softer
How
only
refined,
through years of use.
how pleasant.
Above the linen,
But then
came
beneath the
layer
cover of
after
conversation
layer of woolen blankets.
you hear the scuttling
Medieval
of tiny
Europe was
claws.
rich in wool production.
Rats slip along
and
the
its
edges,
versatility
bold
made
in
it
the
the
half-dark.
foundation of bedding.
Fleas
Coarse,
leap
thick, and
silently
heavy.
from the rushes
These blankets
onto woolen
did more
cloaks.
than keep people warm.
The illusion of
They acted like
civility is
armor.
thin.
Some
and
were
you feel
so
it
weighty
crumbling with
that
every
turning
breath.
over in bed
Now
required
raise
effort.
your eyes.
Yet their density
On the walls
provided comfort.
woven hunts
Under their
and
press,
saints
the sleeper
shimmer
felt
in
secure.
torchlight.
The smell
Horses
of lanolin
gallop
often lingered
falcons,
in these blankets, a faint
dive
reminder
hunters
of sheep grazing
blow
on
their
distant
horns.
hillsides.
Their gestures
Fur was the next
caught
luxury
forever
layer
in
reserved
colored
for nobility
thread.
and wealthy
At
merchants.
first glance,
ermine, sable,
the
fox, and
tapestries
marten
dazzle.
were sewn
They
into
hide the
patchwork
bleak
coverlets,
stones, soften
creating
the echoes
bedding that
and
was as much
proclaim
a
the
display
wealth
of
of the
wealth
Lord who owns
as a
them.
defense against
But
cold.
lean closer,
Medieval
and you see
inventories
sagging
often
corners,
listed dark
with
bedding
damp
alongside
threads,
jewels and
dulled by
silverware
smoke,
proof of its value.
tiny holes
where
a
moths
bed covered in
have chewed
furs
through signaled prestige.
Beauty, yes,
but for
beauty
its
under
owners it was
siege.
also an
Servants
embrace
know
of
these
life-saving
weaknesses
warmth.
better than
Some
anyone.
noble women traveled
Each season,
with their own
they beat
fur-lined
the
sheets,
hangings
unwilling to
outside,
trust the
coughing,
accommodations
as
of
dust
even
and
the
fleas
grandest castles.
billow out.
For them,
They
bedding
replace
wasn't
the
just
rushes,
personal,
hauling away
it
bundles
was an
that
extension
stink
of
of
their
rot.
identity, only to scatter new ones.
There were the coverlets and
that will
quilts,
meet the same
often
fate,
embroidered
with intricate
It is
designs.
endless,
These
thankless
were
work,
more than
yet
decoration.
essential.
Their extra
Without
weight
such
added another
efforts,
layer of insulation.
the hall would
while
reek
embroidery
beyond endurance,
reinforced fabric,
and the
making it
hangings
last longer.
would collapse under their own
In
decay.
castles where drafts
Life
seeped through
in
every
a
crack,
castle was
these
not only
coverlets
about
created
battles
a psychological
or
illusion of
banquets.
protection. Even
It
if
was
the room
about
itself was
constant
freezing,
maintenance,
the bed
a
became
fight to keep the
fortress
appearance of
textiles.
comfort alive.
Its sheer
Despite
bulk
all this,
creating a sense
people
of
cherished
security.
rushes and
The
tapestries
canopy, however,
because
was the
they
true
mattered.
centerpiece of medieval
They were
bed
more than
design.
floor coverings or
Suspended
wall
from
dressings.
tall wooden posts,
They were
it
psychological
wasn't merely
defenses.
ornamental.
To walk on
It was a
greenery
marvel of medieval
instead of cold
engineering.
stone
Heavy
was
curtains
to
of
feel
wool
for a
velvet or
moment
damask
removed from hardship.
draped down from the canopy,
To gaze at
transforming
colors
the bed
instead of
into
gray
a private
walls
tent.
was to
Once drawn
believe,
closed,
however briefly,
this enclosure
that you lived in
trapped body
refinement.
heat,
These
creating a
illusions
microclimate
gave
several
dignity
degrees
to
warmer
survival.
than the room outside.
A noble woman
Servants
could boast
sometimes
of
lined
Flemish
these curtains
tapestries while
with
shivering
extra
under
padding,
furs,
or
a
added a
servant
second inner
could
layer
take
for
pride
winter,
in laying fresh
further
rushes
enhancing
that turned a
insulation.
dungeon-like
In
hall
large drafty
into something
chambers,
resembling a home.
this innovation
Think of children
could mean the
playing here.
difference between comfort and
To
misery.
them, rushes were
Picture
playgrounds,
yourself lying
a soft
inside
bed of
such a
stalks,
canopy bed,
for crawling,
the room
rolling,
beyond is
chasing one
cavernous,
another.
its high
They did
ceiling
not
lost in
notice
shadow,
fleas.
the fire
They knew
crackling
only the
faintly
crackle
against
beneath
distant
their
stone
hands.
walls. But inside
Tapestries,
your curtain,
too,
haven,
were their storybooks.
warmth gathers.
They
From your
stared up
own
at
body
woven
and breath.
hunts and saints
The air
with
smells
wide
faintly
eyes, inventing
of smoke,
tales beyond the
lavender,
threads.
and lanolin.
For them, the illusions
mixture,
were not false.
both soothing,
They were
earthy.
magic, transforming
It's
a bleak
not true
stone shell
This was
Rushes
and
and
tapestries
at its
never
best,
defeated the cold,
using textiles,
the
and
damp,
craftsmanship,
or the vermin
to create warmth,
but they distracted
without the aid
from
of
them.
modern insulation.
They layered meaning
Interestingly,
onto misery, turning
medieval
bare
people
stone
believed that these
into
layers
something
carried
livable,
risks as well as benefits.
survivable,
One
even
peculiar
memorable.
superstition
When
held
visitors
that
entered,
linen
they
drew
saw
away
wealth.
body heat.
When
Some
families
physicians
gathered,
advised
they
against
felt
using
pride.
too much linen.
When
winter,
children
claiming
dreamed
it
they
drained
saw
vitality
beauty.
from the sleeper.
In that way,
Others
fragile
believed that
plants and
excessive
fragile
layering
threads
was
did what
unhealthy
stone
warning
could not.
that it could
They
stifle
made
natural
life
bodily
healing.
functions.
So, as you
or
picture
trap harmful
yourself
vapors.
settling into a
These
castle hall,
beliefs seem strange
remember
today,
this double vision.
but they reflected a world
Beneath
where
your
health
feet rushes
was
hide
deeply
rot,
intertwined with
while
climate.
herbs whisper
The medieval
perfume.
concept
Before
of
your
humors,
eyes, blood
tapestries
shimmer
shimmer
with
with
hunts and
and black
saints,
bile,
while
tied
moths
bodily
nibble in the shadows.
well-being to temperature and
Comfort
moisture.
and filth,
Sleeping
grandeur
arrangements
and
weren't
decay,
just about comfort.
all woven together,
They were a matter
in a
of
fragile
medical
truth.
philosophy.
And it
This
was
obsession
within that
with warmth
truth that
shaped
people
sleeping
lived,
habits across all
slept,
social
and
classes.
carried their memories forward.
Peasants didn't have
As the night
canopies or
deepened,
embroidered coverlets,
the rushes and
but they
tapestries
layered whatever they could find:
remain
wool
your
cloaks,
closest allies.
spare clothing,
Though they are frail
even
ones,
sacks of grain.
the rushes
placed near
dull
the bed
the echo of
to block
footsteps,
drafts.
making
Many
the
slept in their
vast
day
hall
clothes
feel a
to
little
avoid the
less
shock of
cavernous.
cold fabric against
They
bare
also
skin.
hide the hardness of
A
stone.
peasant family's bedding,
giving you the
might
illusion
smell of
just
smoke,
for a
livestock,
moment
and earth,
that you are stepping on
but it
something
provided
alive,
practical warmth.
something
In
that
many
belongs to
cottages,
nature,
a single mattress
rather than
was shared
fortress.
by the entire
Yet,
family.
the smell
with
rising
younger
from
children
them
sandwiched between
betrays their
parents
true
for
state.
insulation.
It is
Even
the odor of
animals
damp
were
earth,
part of the system,
mixed with smoke
hens roosted near
and
beds,
sweat,
cats curled
a
by feet,
reminder
and
that
dogs
nothing
lay
in this
across
castle
doorways,
escapes
their bodies
decay.
acting as
The
natural
tapestries,
heaters.
meanwhile,
Monastic communities
are like watchful
developed their
companions.
own adaptations.
Their figures
In
of
monasteries
hunters,
where
humility,
saints
and
or
simplicity
heraldic
were virtues.
beasts.
Beds
Beds
were
were often
torchlight,
simple planks
their
topped with
woven
straw
eyes,
mattresses,
following you
yet
across
monks
the
still
room.
relied
On a
layered
cold
blankets
winter's night,
and woolen robes.
you might find
to
yourself
endure
talking to
unheated
them
dormitories,
as though they could
Some
hear.
monasteries allowed
They are
novices
silent,
to use
yet their
thick
presence
cow
makes
hides
the chamber
or
feel
cloaks
less
as
empty.
covers.
For
While
the
stricter
noble
orders
family,
expected
they
brethren
were more than
to
decoration.
embrace discomfort
They were
as
memory
a spiritual discipline
and lineage,
Even so,
stitched into
monasteries
cloth proof
built with stone
that this
and
stone
minimal
shell
fire
was also a home,
recognized that
a
survival
seat of
required
history.
planning. Still, these comforts
Monks
hung curtains
come at a
around beds,
cost. When
or
the
used
torches
movable
gutter
wooden screens to
and
block
darkness
drafts.
grows,
Back in the
drafts
noble
creep from
chamber,
behind the hangings,
every detail
and the
reflects
cold seeps
the
through.
importance of warmth.
No matter how thick the wool,
Tapestries hang on the walls,
rushes
not
turn
just
brittle,
as
crumbling
decoration
under your feet,
but as
releasing
insulation,
clouds of
blocking
dust
the chill
that make your
that
nose
radiates
itch.
from stone.
In the quiet,
Servants
you
have
hear
stuffed
tiny
wool or
scuttles,
moss
mice,
into window
tunneling in
frames
the
to
rushes,
seal gaps.
moths
The curtains
fluttering
around the bed
inside the folds
are
of
pulled
tapestry.
tightly, forming a private
These
sanctuary.
are the unseen
while
companions
braziers
of castle
burn low
life
in corners,
tolerated,
adding
because
faint
no
warmth
one can
and light.
truly banish them.
Each night
Yet without
becomes
rushes
a carefully
and
orchestrated routine.
tapestries,
The
a
castle
battle
fought
would be
with textiles
unbearable.
and ingenuity.
Imagine
Even
bare
bedding
stone
maintenance was
floors,
a serious task.
each step
Feathers
ringing
and mattresses
harsh and
needed to be
hollow.
beaten regularly to restore
Imagine
loft
naked
and remove
walls
pests.
dripping with condensation,
Straw mattresses
gray
required complete
and
replacement.
unyielding.
Every
The
few
hall
weeks
would feel more like a
especially in
dungeon
winter,
than a
when
home.
dampness invited mold.
With their imperfections,
Noble households
the rushes
employed
and
chambermaids
chambermaids
who
softened the
specialized in
world
caring for
just
bedding,
enough to make survival
shaking out
possible.
blankets daily,
They didn't
and warming
conquer
them
the cold,
before their masters returned to
but
bed.
they distracted from
In
it.
royal courts,
They didn't erase
bedding
the
was
stone,
so valuable
but they taught
that
people
it was
to live
often
with it.
inventoried like
So
a
when
treasure,
you stand in this
with
hall,
records detailing
surrounded
how
by
many
the
blankets,
rustle of rushes
furs,
underfoot,
and sheets belonged
and the
to
silent
each member
company
of the household,
of woven
travel
saints and
added
hunters,
another layer of complexity.
you understand what
Wealthy
they truly
travelers
meant.
rarely trusted the
They
beds
were
of
not
inns
luxuries
or guest
alone,
chambers, preferring
they were
to bring their own
lifelines,
bedding. Some
fragile,
noble families
flawed, but
traveled with
indispensable.
collapsible bed frames,
And as you
which
prepare to
servants
leave this
assembled
chamber,
on site,
you carry with
ensuring
you
consistent
the
comfort.
sense that even in the
These
harshest
portable
of
beds
environments,
were symbols of wealth,
people found
but
ways
also
to weave
reflected
small
genuine
islands
necessity
of comfort,
in an age when
however
warmth
temporary,
could mean the
into the
difference between
fabric
health
of daily life.
and illness.
If the rushes
The bed
softened
became
the
a
floor,
deeply personal possession,
and the tapestries
even
softened
the psychological
walls,
effects of bedding
then
were
the
profound.
bed was where you fought your
in a
most
castle
personal
filled
battle
with
against the
echoes,
cold.
drafts and
Step
darkness.
into a medieval
The canopy
bedchamber,
bed
and you
offered
might
a
be
sense of
impressed at
privacy,
first.
rare
A great
in the carved frame looms in the center. Behind its curtains, heavy with ornament, one could escape the gaze of servants thick as tree guards slipping into a bubble of curtains of wool or linen. This privacy was particularly valuable, sometimes dyed in deep colors, surrounded by attendants at all times, lined with fur. The bed was not merely majestic, almost
It was a
inviting
retreat,
until you realized why
sanctuary
it needed to be
where the
built that way in the
outside
first
world faded
place.
into
The bed
muffled
was not
whispers.
simply furniture,
Yet this sanctuary
it was a
never entirely
fortress.
safe.
Within a
Fire
fortress,
remained a
a
constant
small
danger.
chamber within the larger
same
room.
heavy curtains that trapped
Those
warmth
curtains weren't
could
only
catch
for
fire
privacy.
from a candle or
They
fallen
created
ember.
what you
Some
might
noble
call
households
a microclimate.
employed servants,
A
whose
pocket
sole
of trapped
duty
air
was to monitor
warmed
bed
by your
chambers
body
at night,
and if you were
ensuring
lucky,
that fires
the
didn't
body
spread.
of someone else.
Despite these precautions,
Outside the curtains, records of bedding
the air
fires
was
were
cold
common,
enough to sting
especially
your skin.
in large estates where
Inside,
multiple hearths
with
burned through
enough
the night.
layers of wool
This
and
tension
fur
between warmth and
you could at
danger
least pretend to be
shaped
safe.
medieval life.
But let's not
reminding
romanticize
too much.
that every comfort carried
Even
risk.
with curtains drawn tight,
Imagine now,
the
the
bedchamber
sensory
was
world
no
of medieval
cocoon.
bedding.
The cold
smell
crept
of
in
wool
from below,
and fur,
seeping
the
through
creak
wooden
of bed
frames
cords
and straw mattresses.
as you shift the faint rustle of straw beneath
Condensation
you.
formed on the
These
inside
sounds
of
and
the
scents
fabric,
told stories
dampening
of
it
survival.
with every
A
breath.
single bed
At
might
dawn,
hold the memory
when
of
light
generations
seeped
with
through
its
the
wooden
cracks,
posts,
you might
carved
see
by
your own
craftsmen,
frost-tinged
long
bread,
dead. Its
sparkling
linens passed
faintly
down
in
and
the air.
patched countless times.
The bed was
Unlike
better than
the
nothing,
disposable furniture of today,
but it was not warmth.
medieval beds were
It was only
heirlooms,
the absence
repositories of family
of
history.
freezing.
To climb
Mattresses
into one
themselves
was
varied
to enter
wildly.
a lineage of endurance.
For the
To
poor,
wrap yourself
it
in
might be
layers
nothing more than a
that had
sack of
shielded
straw
others from
laid on
winter's bite.
planks, the straw
Peasants'
flattened
told
and
a
musty
different
within
story,
weeks.
but carried the
For
same
the
theme of
wealthy, down
resilience.
feathers
A straw
filled the
mattress
casing,
may seem
lighter
primitive,
and softer,
but when combined
though
with woolen
feathers
cloaks,
too clumped
family closeness,
and rotted
and
with
the
time,
constant heat of a central
servants
hearth,
had to beat them,
it formed a
air
surprisingly
them out,
efficient system.
refill
In
them,
small cottages,
always chasing the
sleeping
comfort
areas were often
that
raised
faded
lofts,
quickly.
reached by
Lying
ladders
on such
where heat
beds,
from the fire below
you would
collected.
feel the uneven lumps
Families gathered together
beneath your
wrapped in
back,
homemade quilts,
hear
their
the
breath
creak
clouding
of the
in
frame
cold
with
air.
every movement,
These humble
smell the
arrangements
faint
remind
must
us that, sir,
of damp straw
returning to the castle
or oily
you shift
feathers.
under your own layered
Pillows were
blankets,
another luxury.
feeling the weight of
A
history
simple
in each
bolster
fold.
stuffed with straw
The canopy
was
curtains
common,
sway
often
slightly in the
scratchy
draft,
and stiff.
but inside your small
Nobles
enclosure,
sometimes had
the air is
down-filled
warmer.
pillows,
Servant
but
enters
even these
quietly
flattened
to check the fire
under constant
her
use,
lantern casting
requiring
soft
frequent
light
shaking.
that dances across
You could sleep,
tapestries.
yes, but
She
never in
adjusts
the
your cloud-like
cloud-like
embrace we
tucks
expect
them
tighter
today.
around your shoulders
To rest your head
and
in a
disappears
medieval
again
bed
into the shadowed hall.
was to compromise
This care
to accept
is part
that
of the
sleep was a
rhythm of medieval
necessity
life,
rather than
a
a
noble's
pleasure.
comfort.
The true
Depended
stars
on a
of the bed,
network of labor shepherds,
however, were the curtains.
raising sheep for wool artisans.
They served many
weaving
roles.
cloth seamstresses,
They held in heat-blocked
sewing
drafts,
coverlets,
created
and servants
privacy in
arranging
rooms,
the bed each night,
often shared
the
by
warmth
multiple
you feel
people,
is the
and even
culmination
kept
of
out
countless
incense
hands working in unison.
in a chamber
As you drift
that might
towards
house
sleep,
not only a
you
lord
sense how
and
central
lady,
bedding was
but
to medieval
attendants as well.
identity.
The bed
It wasn't
curtains
merely
marked a
practical.
small domain of
It was
intimacy.
a symbol of wealth,
Draw them shut,
a reflection,
and the
of
outside
health
world
beliefs,
dimmed
to
and
a
a muffled
deeply
murmur.
personal possession.
The flicker of the
A
hearth
canopy bed
became a faint
was
glow.
a fortress. Its
In that
layers of
fragile
fabric and
enclosure,
fur,
you could
an
almost
armor
believe the
against the
castle
cold,
beyond had vanished.
and within its curtains,
And yet the curtains
people found a
were as
fragile
imperfect
kind of
as
peace.
everything else.
Even centuries
Wool
later,
grew damp,
surviving
mildew
bed
creeping
frames
along
from this
seams,
era remain
linen grew
impressive,
thin,
towering wooden
tearing
structures,
easily.
carved with
They
vines,
trapped
not only
lions
worms or saints,
but smells,
their
sweat,
craftsmanship,
smoke,
a testament
unwashed
to the value
bodies.
placed on this
Within that
single
enclosure,
piece of furniture.
air grew stuffy,
Tonight,
heavy
your
with the scent
imagined
of breath
medieval bed
and damp
becomes
fabric.
more than a place to rest.
You were warmer,
It's a
yes,
time capsule filled
but you
with
were also
stories,
breathing
a
of
stale
artisans
mix
of
servants,
everything that clung to
and
the
families
fabric.
who braved countless
Survival
winters.
always came with
The
a trade-off.
canopy overhead,
Still beds
whispers
were
of
powerful
safety.
symbols.
The fur
To
blanket
own
at
a
your
great
feet
bed with carved
hints at
posts
luxury,
and
and
rich
the linen
hangings
sheet beneath you
was to proclaim
speaks of
sadness.
labor and care.
Visitors
Together,
might be led
these
to admire
layers
the
form a
chamber,
narrative
to
of
see the
human
finery of the
ingenuity,
hangings,
proving that even
to
in a
envy
world
the
without
heavy
central
covers.
substantial heating,
The
people
lord
found
or
ways to
lady
turn a freezing
might
castle
speak
into a
proudly
home.
of their bed.
You're lying
as a
in your
treasure,
medieval bed
a
now,
place of dignity,
cocooned under
as
layer
much as
upon
rest.
layer of heavy blankets.
It mattered little
But still
that
there's
the
a bite in
mattress
the air
sagged,
that nothing
or
seems
the
to
curtains
dispel.
smelled faintly
Even
of mildew.
inside the canopy,
The bed
warmth is
was
fleeting.
theater as well as
That's
refuge.
where the medieval
a
ingenuity
demonstration of
warming
wealth,
tools comes
even in the
alive.
coldest months.
And every night
Picture
becomes a
yourself
ritual
crawling
of
into such a
preparation.
bed
A
at
small
the end of a
determined
long
battle
day,
to reclaim same
Servants
comfort
have laid
in
the
a world
mattress
designed
with
for
fresh
defense,
straw
not
or
coziness.
beaten down feathers.
A quiet knock
They've
comes at
drawn
your
the
chamber
curtains
door,
close,
and a servant
tucked furs
enters
around the
carrying an
edges,
object that
piled
glows
blankets
faintly in
high.
the dim candlelight.
You
A
lie
warming
down,
pan.
shifting against the
This
uneven
brass or
lumps,
copper pan
pulling the heavy
is a
covers
shallow
up
circular dish
until your chin
with a
disappears.
perforated lid
The
mounted
fire
on a
in the
long
hearth
wooden
crackles
handle.
faintly, inside it, but its warmth doesn't smolder their dull red light. What you feel instead through small decorative is the closeness of fabric, metal, the faint stirring of air with a faint as you breathe in, and undercut by the tang of your world shrinks to the space. Carefully, between four curtains, slips the pan between your and you wait for sleep to dull the sting of cold. Slow, and so the medieval bed, the bedding was not just where you rested, releasing the it was where you endured, wrapped in fabric, dried lavender, and hope, listening to the stone across the icy linen, sigh with cold. There is something ceremonial. It was your final stronghold. The against the castle are deliberate. What often surprises modern could scorch the sheets is how social, too slow, the medieval bed could be before you can settle into bed today, where this privacy, simple as it may seem, represents generations of knowledge and caution. Beds in castles were rarely solid medieval life. But they were also the greatest might share their bed, one over not only with each other, could spell disaster, but sometimes with children, filled with wood attendants or unexpected guests. Handling a warming was more valuable than privacy, and more bodies meant more how hot the coals should be. Imagine yourself drifting into uneasy sleep, with the rustle of someone else's breath beside you, a mattress, or the weight of a servant's arm flung across your blankets. The servant removed intimacy was not a choice. Leaving behind only a faint heat. The curtains that surrounded the lingering aroma of smoke took on even more importance in such settings. Are almost inviting. They created a visual and psychological barrier, hinting at seclusion warmth in a life before it dissipates. Anything but this ritual repeats. To draw them shut after night was to signal that the day had a rhythm so ingrained that for a few hours you scarcely thought about it. Not to duty or community. Warmth wasn't a luxury, but to rest. It was a within their negotiation. You might whisper secrets. Households say your prayers were rare, or simply curl into other methods to prepare their bedding from the watchful eyes of the castle. And most effective beds was the heated also stone. Became centers. Large flat stones were placed near to a be fire put to bed. Was a formal act the blazes heat, especially for the sick. They were wrapped or the dying. Or servants into laid out linens and placed at the foot positioned of the bed. Pillows, arranged covers with ceremony for hours. Chronicles described noblemen was receiving visitors and from their beds used by both the curtains drawn aside and nobility, so witnesses could hear final word or blessings and pressing your in such moments against a cloth. The bed was not only for sleeping, feeling its heat seep. It was a stage where life and death exhaustion settles in. But the most enduring memory from the cold world outside fades would have been the sheer weight of the bedclothes, radiating comfort. Blankets, layered blankets, elevated this practice. Furs piled high, each one using earthenware heavy enough to restrict movement. Small containers sliding under them filled with glowing was embers, like sliding and shielded with perforated lids. The weight pressed you down, were tucked beneath blankets or feathers placed under robes for some specific areas of the body. For carriages or wagons, travelers carried these necessary devices because without that bulk, the cold would creep conveyances and steal your slightly more bearable shelters. So when you think of a medieval bed, think not of a cozy haven, embers might but of a fortress, might smolder within a fortress, and every source of warmth, a place where curtains, companions, and crushing layers of cloth heat source all conspired to keep you alive until dawn. It was a slide deeper, into that fortress intertwined with animals and fabric, and at night, and you began to notice the smaller details against the cold that shaped every night in peasant cottages. First, the mattress itself were not just economic assets for most people in a castle, but literal heat generators. A bed was nothing more than a bake stuffed with straw under the same or reeds as their owners, sometimes mixed with dried body heat or hay to warm the lofts. The straw flattened within weeks. Chickens roosted on beams leaving lumpy ridges while dogs jabbed your spine. Hearth. Worse, their steady breathing, it quickly grew damp. Tired farmers, smelling of mildew, the smell was strong to fleas, a pungent that leapt eagerly from one sleeper to another. But the warmth these animals provided shift of was your irreplaceable. Body stirred the even straw, releasing a musty scent. Dogs were beloved that never quite faded, and sleeping the wealthy partners did better, of course. Accounts from the Middle Ages down mattresses, hunting dogs filled with feathers, dogs were lighter and softer, with their owners offering something closer to real comfort for their natural warmth. But even feathers had their failings. Or terrier curled up at their feet was they rotted if damp as any heated stone, and they attracted vermin of the phrase three-dog night, referring to bitterly cold hours, beating, shaking as roots and restuffing these mattresses, sleeping keep them dogs to keep warm. You might imagine a noble sinking luxuriously and stone walls into a feather bed. The presence of a warm animal, but in truth, was comforting. It was often uneven, sagging, and emotional level. In the middle, the stuffing found creative corners after years of use. Those who couldn't sleep near the fire would fill
Sheets
sacks
were
with
valuable,
heated grain,
often made of
or
coarse
beans,
linen,
using them as
scratchy
makeshift
by modern
pads.
standards.
The sacks retained
They were
heat
not
for
changed
hours,
daily,
often
or even
relieved
weekly.
the stiff
Washing
hands
was too laborious,
and aching backs,
and water too
in
cold.
monasteries, where
Instead,
ascetic practices
sheets were beaten,
discouraged
air,
luxury monks,
and occasionally
sometimes resorted
sprinkled
to
with
heating
herbs
stones wrapped in wool.
They held the smells
quietly
of
bending
sweat
the rules
and smoke
to endure the bitter cold,
and no matter how
of
carefully
unheated
they were tended,
dormitories.
they
These
never
simple
felt truly
measures
fresh.
highlight a
Sliding
universal
into
truth
bed
of
meant
medieval
sliding
life
into
survival
a fabric
required
that bore the
resourcefulness,
imprint of
and
countless
warmth was a
nights
form of
before.
wealth.
The covers
Whether
above
measured
you
in fur
were
blankets
no lighter.
or a single glowing
Blankets
ember.
were woven of wool,
Let's
dense
return now to
and
your
rough,
imagined castle
designed
chamber.
to trap heat
The
at
warming
the cost
pan
of
has done its
comfort.
work.
On
And
top
your
of
bed
them
feels inviting,
came furs,
but the fire
wool
in the
fox
hearth
bear,
has already
or
burnt
sheepskin
low.
layered,
Shadows
until
climb
the weight
walls.
was almost oppressive.
Tapestries
People
flutter
sometimes
gently in a
joked
draft,
that the blankets
and the
kept you
faint howl
warm
of wind
not by their
seeps in
insulation,
through arrow slits.
but by pinning
In
you
this
so
moment,
firmly in
warmth
place
becomes deeply
that you couldn't
psychological.
escape the little
You tuck
warmth
your feet
you
against
generated.
that heated stone at the
To
bottom
turn
of the
over
bed,
in such a bed
sighing,
was an
as its
effort,
warmth spreads
a
upward,
half-waking struggle,
comforting
against
you
the
in a way
load
no
pressing
firelight
down on
can.
your chest.
The
The curtains,
sensation is
meanwhile,
primal.
shaped the
For
experience
thousands
of
of
sleep
years, humans
as much
have
as
sought
the
warmth
bedclothes.
as both a
They
physical
were drawn
need
tight at
and
night,
a form of
enclosing
security.
you in a dim
Here
cocoon.
in this medieval castle,
In the dark,
the tools
they
may be
muffled the
simple,
sound of the wind,
but the satisfaction
sighing
they
through
bring
cracks in the
is
shutters,
timeless.
or the distant
These
groan
nightly
of timbers
preparations
under stress.
weren't just acts of
They
necessity.
also muffled the sounds
They were rituals
of others sharing
and
the
rituals
chamber,
carry meaning.
snoring,
Lighting a fire,
coughing, whispering.
heating stones,
For
and
a few
sweeping
hours,
embers into warming pans.
you could pretend you were
were
alone,
tasks performed with care,
but the air inside
often
the
by
curtains
servants who
grew
understood their
stale,
importance
quickly heavy
intimately.
with your breath.
In many households,
By morning,
warming a lord's
the fabric was clammy
was
with
considered a
condensation
position of
droplets,
trust.
soaking the
In
edges
noble
where they
courts,
brushed your face.
chamberlains
And
oversaw
then
the preparation
there
of
were the
sleeping
creatures,
quarters, ensuring
fleas
everything was arranged
nested in
perfectly.
straw lice,
From the
clung to
placement
hair
of braziers
and linens
to the exact
bed
layering
bugs
of blankets,
thrived in the seams of wooden
this attention
frames.
to detail
No
was
amount
part
of
of the medieval
shaking
obsession
or
with
beating
ceremony.
could
Even
truly
the act
rid
of
the bed
warming
of
a
them.
bed carried
People
weight.
scratched
It
themselves
was
in
another
awe
way to
in the
demonstrate
night
order
cursed
in a
softly,
chaotic world.
and then went
This
back to sleep
relationship with
because
warmth
there was no alternative.
extended beyond tools and
To
rituals.
share your bed with vermin
It was woven
not
into
an
architecture
exception.
itself.
It was the norm.
Castles and manor
Even
houses
nobles, wrapped
often
in
had
furs,
fireplaces
beneath
private
embroidered
chambers.
canopies, itched
But these fireplaces
and endured.
were enormous,
Yet despite
designed
all
to
these
consume entire
discomforts,
tree trunks.
beds were
Their
remembered
scale
with a
was
kind of
more about
affection.
spectacle than efficiency.
They were central
They
places
roared
in the life
brightly,
of a castle.
casting dramatic shadows.
Births happened in
yet failed
beds
to
with
warm
curtains
rooms
drawn,
evenly.
while midwives
Instead,
whispered prayers.
Warmth came in layers. The
Deaths,
fire for
too,
light,
unfolded there,
and
the Lord
morale.
giving final commands
The bed
from
curtains
behind
for
his hangings.
dissolution. The
Even
warming
daily
pan for
rituals,
immediate
gossip
comfort,
shared between
and
spouses,
the animal curled at your feet.
prayers murmured
for
before
steady
sleep
heat through the
children,
night.
climbing
Together,
under covers
these
for
elements
warmth,
created a patchwork
gave
of
beds a
survival
significance
strategies.
beyond their
Peasants
physical
lacking
failings.
fireplaces in every
They
room
were where life's
relied
most
heavily
private
on their
moments
central hearth.
occurred,
The fire was
where
rarely allowed
weakness
to go
and
out
intimacy
completely, showed in a
Embers
world
smoldered
otherwise
even
ruled
through
by
the
the
night
night, ready to be
ceremony.
stoked back to
To
life at
imagine
dawn.
yourself in
these
such a bed,
homes,
the line
is to
between
feel the
warmth and life
paradox
itself
of
was
medieval
stark.
life. A
The
single
grandeur
misstep
of carved
neglecting the
posts
fire
and
failing to
embroidered
dry damp
hangings
clothes,
promised
leaving livestock
dignity,
exposed,
but the
could
reality
mean illness or
inside
death.
was cramped.
This closeness
Smelly,
to danger
itchy,
shaped medieval
and heavy.
attitudes toward
You longed
warmth,
for sleep,
making
yet
it
dreaded the
deeply
moment
spiritual
fleas woke you,
as well as practical
or the weight of
pursuit.
blankets.
Some
pressed
families
too hard,
even hung charms
or the
near their
cold
hearths,
crept in through the cracks,
believing these
you couldn't block.
talismans would guard against
And
winter
still,
spirits that
you
crept
closed
in
your
through
eyes,
cracks and doorways.
because there was nowhere else to
Returning
go.
again to your noble
Beds
chamber,
in medieval castles
you adjust your
were
bedding
not comfort as we know
and
it.
settle more deeply under
They were
its weight.
survival mechanisms,
The warmth of the heated stone,
shrines of
linger
fabric
soothing
and
tired
wood
muscles,
built to hold off
while
the
the memory
cold
of the servant's
and the
warming
night.
pan.
They were
gives you a
fragile
psychological
walls
boost
against an enemy
in a world where daily
you could
life
never
was marked
defeat
by
completely.
labor and discomfort.
And night
These
after
small
night,
comforts were
you
significant.
climbed into them
Wealth
with
could not
resignation,
erase winter's
pulling
cruelty,
the curtains tight,
but it could provide tools
breathing
to
in the
resist
stale
it.
air,
And
and
these
whispering
tools
a prayer
became
that you
cherished
might
symbols
waken the
of
morning
status.
with warmth.
Consider the
Still
craftsmanship
lingering
of these
in your
objects.
bones.
A
Think about
noble's
what it
warming
meant
pan
to
was
climb
often
into
made
bed
of
at the
polished
end of
brass,
a long day,
engraved
paved with
in a
floral
medieval
motifs.
castle
or heraldic
You weren't
crests.
entering a sanctuary
Some
of
were
silence
family heirlooms
and warmth.
passed down through
You were
generations.
entering another
Heated
battlefield,
stones were stored
one waged
in
against the
carved wooden
elements,
boxes, against
lined
insects,
with wool,
against the sheer weight of
transforming a
fabric
simple
pressing
object
down on
into
you.
something elegant.
Every night, even
Was a
utilitarian
negotiation
tools
between
were treated
comfort
with respect
and necessity,
because they held the power
between
to make
privacy
life bearable.
and survival.
Peasants,
In many
solutions,
ways,
though simpler,
the bed was a
carried their
social
own
stage.
ingenuity.
Lords
A carefully
and ladies
selected stone,
often received
heated by the
visitors,
fire, and
while
wrapped in
reclining
homespun
the
cloth,
curtains, drawn
was a
back
testament to
so
practical
they could
wisdom
hold conversation
passed from parent
or
to
dispense
child.
orders.
The emotional connection
Ambassadors were ushered
people
into
formed with
chambers
was
where
profound.
the bed loomed like a
Medieval
throne.
diaries and letters,
Its hangings a statement of power
fireside gatherings
as much as
with
protection.
almost reverent tones.
To be invited into
Families
someone's
sitting shoulder to
bedchamber
shoulder,
was not
feet
always intimate
stretched
in the
toward the
modern
hearth.
sense. Hands clasped
was
around
a
mugs
political
of
privilege.
spiced wine or ale, a sign of trust.
Warmth was
and
not just
status.
physical.
The bed
It
itself
symbolized safety,
spoke for
community,
its owner.
and hope.
In
Rich
a castle,
fabrics, where rooms
declaring
remained
wealth
frigid,
carved posts,
despite blazing
hinting
fires,
at authority,
the act of
embroidered
curling up with a
canopies,
dog,
telling
or feeling
stories
the weight
of
of a
lineage.
warm blanket,
And yet, for all
was
this
more than
symbolism,
comfort.
the bed
was
remained
reassurance.
profoundly human. Now, it
Imagine
creaked
a long
under shifting
winter's night,
bodies,
the snow outside
it sagged
piling high
where
against the castle
generations
wall.
had slept,
The wind
and it
howls
carried
through
the smell
chimneys,
of lived
and
life.
every
Sweat,
torch flickers
wood
under
smoke,
the force of
damp
unseen
feathers and
drafts.
herbs.
Inside,
Children
servants
crawled into
slipped
their
silently
parents'
through
beds
corridors
during
carrying glowing
storms,
embers in metal
clutching at
pans.
furs for warmth.
Their faces illuminated
Servants
by the red light.
whispered gossip
These
as they
embers
turned
will warm
mattresses
the Lord's
or
bed heat.
shook out sheets.
A newborn's cradle,
Lovers shared
or revive
fleeting
a
moments
brazier in the
behind
guard's
curtains
post. Each
that
glowing
concealed
coal
little but
is a
gave the
lifeline,
illusion of privacy.
a small piece of
The
captured
bed
fire
bore witness to
in a world
everything
that
birth
feels
sickness,
perpetually cold.
passion,
As you
death.
drift toward
The
sleep
rituals
in this
surrounding
imagined
it
chamber,
were just as telling.
the scent of smoke
To put a
clings
noble
your
to bed
sheets, mingled
was a
with the
formal
faint
duty.
aroma of herbs
Servants helped
stuffed into
remove layers of
mattresses
clothing,
and rushes.
folded
At your
cloaks,
feet,
set aside
a dog
shoes,
sighs softly, adjusting
stiff with
its position.
frost. Then
The
arranged
warmth it
covers
radiates
with
feels
ceremony.
more comforting than the
At
fire
night's
itself.
end,
Above you,
prayers
the
were
canopy
spoken
curtains
aloud,
swayed gently,
candles,
creating a sense
snuffed
of
curtains
enclosure,
drawn,
as if
in
the
that
entire
act,
world has been
the day
reduced
closed not just
to this
for the
tiny,
lord or lady,
warm haven,
but for everyone
you
in the
realize
chamber.
that medieval nights
Sleep was communal,
conquered.
even when it was hidden
They were
behind
endured,
hangings.
softened
But of course, sleep
only by
itself
these
was
simple,
rarely deep
ingenious measures.
or dreamless.
It's remarkable
The
to
weight of
consider
blankets
how much
restricted
effort
your
went into
movements.
creating warmth each night.
Vermin nipped at your skin.
Fires had to be built,
Drafts
and
snuck in
maintained.
through cracks and shutters.
Stones heated coals.
You might wake coughing
transferred
from
bedding
smoke
that had
arranged
seeped
curtains
into the
drawn,
room, entire
or shivering
households
as the fire
worked
burned low.
together to
For
create an
many,
illusion
sleep
of
came in
comfort
fragments,
in an environment
dozing,
that was fundamentally
waking,
harsh.
turning.
This
This
dozing
nightly
choreography reveals a
To
truth
wake fully rested
about
was
medieval
rare
life
enough to be
survival.
worth remarking
Was a
upon.
communal act.
Still, the bed was
And warmth
indispensable.
was both a physical
No matter
need
how flawed, it
and an
provided a
emotional
place
balm.
to retreat,
as dawn
to close off the
approaches,
castle's
the heated stone
vastness
at your
and
feet
claim a corner of
grows
safety.
cool,
Behind
and the
those
first pale
curtains,
light
you could
filters
believe,
through
if
horn-paned
only for
windows.
a few hours,
servants
that the
enter
cold
quietly,
stone world beyond
rekindling fires
had been shut out.
and preparing the household
That
for
belief,
another day.
fragile as it
You
was,
rise from bed,
sustained people
grateful
through
for
long
every
winters.
ember,
So when
every
you
layer
picture
of blanket,
a medieval
every
bed strip
creature that helped you
away the
through the
romance
nights,
of
the
carved
castle
oak
remains cold,
and embroidered hangings,
but the rituals of warmth
see instead
have left their mark,
the
transforming
layered
a hostile
reality,
fortress
lumpy mattresses
into a livable space,
damp linens,
if only for a few
curtains,
hours at a time.
heavy
You
with
awaken
smells,
in your
blankets that
imagined
weighed like
medieval
stone,
chamber to the
and the
soft gray
constant
light of
awareness
morning
of being watched,
filtering through
bitten,
horn-paned windows
or chilled.
the heated
It was
stone
not
at
a
your
haven,
feet
but a
has cooled
compromise.
to a lump of hardness.
And yet,
The
within
warmth
that
it gave
compromise,
now,
life
just a memory.
unfolded.
The fire
People
in the hearth
laughed,
is
whispered,
little more than
prayed,
glowing embers,
dreamed, and endured.
and the air carries the
The
stale
bed,
scent
imperfect
of
as it
smoke,
was,
damp wool,
became the
and
most
the
human
unmistakable
corner
odor
of a castle
unwashed
built for
bedding.
war. Slide
This
beneath the
is the
covers
trade-off
of
of
a
a
medieval
medieval
bed,
life to stay
and
warm
the first thing you
was
feel
often to
is
sacrifice
weight, cleanliness. Blankets
You
then
pull back the
were
heavy
not light
curtains
and
of
fluffy
your bed,
layers,
and the
designed
chill
for
rushes
comfort.
in,
They were
immediately
thick,
prickling
dense
your
wool,
skin.
sometimes
The
coarse
layers of
enough
blankets are
to
thick,
leave your skin itching.
comforting,
One or
and
two
impossibly heavy
were never enough.
but they carry the smell
People
of
piled them
countless
on
nights
in
of
stacks,
smoke and sweat,
each one trapping
in a
a little
world
more
without
heat,
daily laundering,
until the
warmth
combined
clung
weight
not
pressed
just to your
down like a
body,
slab.
but to the very
Movement
fabric of your
became a
possessions.
struggle. Medieval bedding was rarely washed, required effort. Linen sheets might be boiled and scrubbed a few times a year in wealthy households. In place. But blankets and coverlets were far too
exhaustion,
bulky and valuable
but by
to
the
clean
sheer
regularly.
burden of the cover.
Instead, that
they
burden
absorbed the scent
was
of
a kind of
fires
blessing.
animals.
Without
And
those
human
heavy
bodies
blankets becoming an archive,
the cold would
of
creep
every
in
winter night
almost immediately.
spent under their weight.
The medieval sleeper did
Servants
not dream
shook
of
blankets
airy
daily
quilts
or
to
soft
remove
dust and
duvets.
pests.
They
But
prayed
even
for
that was a
anything that
temporary
could fix.
block drafts, and
fleas,
hold
lice,
warmth and mites.
The roughness of
constant
wool
companions was a
in
price
both
peasant
gladly
cottages
and noble
because it
castles.
stood between your body and the
Chroniclers
relentless
wrote
breath
candidly
of the
about
stone
these
wall.
nuisances.
On top
With
of these
noble women
blankets, complaining of being
came the
tormented
furs.
by small creatures
To possess
and travelers,
furs
noting
to
that
declare
bedding in
wealth
even the finest
and
inns
status.
crept
But
with
in
life.
winter,
They were
warmth
also
for all
necessities,
its
comfort, created
pelts
ideal
of
conditions
fox,
for
wolf,
vermin,
or bear,
heavy
were draped
curtains
across
around beds, trapped
their
heat,
softness,
but also allowed
deceptive,
fleas and lice.
their
to
real
thrive.
gift
In some
lying
accounts,
in insulation.
tapestries on walls,
Sheepskins
were not
were
just
common
decorative.
layered.
They were
Under
also
or
infested
over
with harboring
covers to
insects
keep
that
warmth
crawled
close
into
to
the
the body.
bedclothes at night.
Nobles
Imagine
might boast
yourself
of
curling
exotic
back
pelts
under those
brought
blankets,
from distant
feeling
lands.
the coarse wool against your
Ermine
skin.
for queens,
The smell of smoke
sable
is
for
overwhelming,
kings,
not
while
unpleasant,
peasants made
but pervasive,
with whatever
a reminder
local
that the
hides
fire you
they could
relied
obtain.
upon for warmth
In either
filled the
case,
room with soot. The fur smelled
night
after
faintly
night
of the animal
The
it
air
once
tastes
belonged
faintly metallic,
to a musky
the
reminder
residue of countless
the thin
hours
line
spent
between
breathing in
survival
smoke from
and
torches,
savagery.
braziers, and
Night
hearths.
clothes themselves
The walls of your
were
chamber
another armor.
are darkened with years
Forget
of soot
the flimsy
deposits,
pajamas
and
of
your
today.
own hair and clothes carry
Medieval
its scent.
people wore long linen
In winter,
or
this was not
servants
unusual.
recorded the rituals
Medieval
of
people
dressing for
simply
bed with a kind of
accepted a
grim
level of
humor.
crime we would find shocking
One account
today.
joked
That
that
to
to prepare for
this
sleep
trade-off was even
took
more
as long as
pronounced.
preparing for a feast.
Their single-room cottages
So many were the layers
heated by a
required.
central hearth.
First, the
And though
linens,
this design kept the family
then the
warm,
blankets, then
it
the
also
furs,
filled the air with smoke.
then the cap,
Chimneys
and
were
hose.
luxury, and
The
in
result
many rural homes
was a body
the
encased
smoke
in
from the
fabric,
fire simply drifted
trapped
upward,
yet defended.
escaping through small
Once
vents in the
arranged,
roof. The sleeper
the
lay
rafters
still
grew
resembling
black.
less a person
The
at
smell
rest
of
burning wood
than a
permeated
relic
everything
wrapped for safekeeping.
and yet
But
families
for all the
considered
care,
this a fair
the
exchange
cold
for
often
survival.
won anyway.
Smoke, in fact, was seen
Blankets
as beneficial. Furs
it
drove
shifted
away
casts,
pests,
rode
preserved
up in the
timbers,
night,
and created a
sudden
sense of
draft
security.
could undo
A smoky
hours
home
of
was a
preparation.
lived-in home.
People
And
woke
in
with
winter,
numb fingers,
that smoke
stiff
became part of the
joints,
household's warmth.
and the ache of cold
Returning to your noble
embedded
chamber,
deep in their bones.
you noticed the rushes
It
on
was
the
a
floor,
reminder
once fragrant,
that even
with
the
herbs,
heaviest
but
cover
now damp
was
and
not
soiled.
invincible.
Servants
The
replaced
castle
them
always
regularly,
had another
but not
draft,
daily.
another
In
crack,
between, the rushes
another
became
stone
a
ready to
repository
sap your
for
warmth.
crumbs, ashes,
Still
and
debris,
blankets and furs. Archaeological
had
evidence
meaning
from
beyond
medieval
function.
sites shows that
They were
these floor
heirloom
coverings
passed
down through
could
generations
compact into
patched
dense
and
mats
repaired over time
until they were more
sometimes
history
several
than
inches
fabric.
thick, layered.
A
with
noble
years of
woman
detritus.
might prize a
In
fur
summer, fresh
that had
rushes
once wrapped her
gave
mother
a sense
a
of
blanket
cleanliness.
embroidered
With
but
a
in
family
winter,
crest, they absorbed moisture,
or a cloak
filling
worn
the
by
air
ancestors
with a musky
in
scent
distant wars.
that clung to every
To
garment.
sleep
Under such
The
coverings,
truth is,
warmth
was to
itself
sleep came
beneath
at a
memory
cost.
itself. To keep fires
to feel the
burning
weight
through the night,
not only of wool
braziers
and hide,
smoldered
but of
constantly,
lineage.
filling
Close your
rooms with
eyes
fine soot
and picture
that
yourself
settled in
lying
bedding
there,
and
wool,
clothes.
scratches
Wealthy
against your
nobles
skin,
owned multiple
the
sets
smell
of
of
garments
lanolin
and sheets,
still clinging
but
faintly
laundering
to the
was
fibers.
labor-intensive and
A
expensive.
fur pelt
Linen
rests
could be
heavy
washed,
across your
but
chest,
woolen blankets and fur
its musky
coverlets
scent
were nearly
mingling with
impossible
the
to clean
smoke of the
thoroughly
hearth.
without
You
damaging
tug
them.
the nightcap down
Instead,
tighter,
they were
trying to
brushed,
cover your
shaken,
ears.
and scented with herbs
Around
to
you,
mask their smell.
The curtains billow
This
faintly
was not
as
a world of
drafts
crisp, freshly
press
laundered
through.
bedding,
But
it was a
within your
world where
cocoon,
warmth meant accepting
there is at least
earthy,
the
smoky
suggestion
aroma
of safety.
as part of life.
You are not
Even
warm,
personal hygiene
truly,
was adapted to
but
match
you are
this
not
reality.
entirely exposed either.
Bathing in winter was
You
rare,
endure wrath
especially in
in the wake of
northern Europe,
centuries,
where
waiting
heating
for
enough
sleep to
water
come.
for a full
One
bath
of the most vivid accounts
required enormous amounts
left
of
by
fuel.
travelers
Instead,
in medieval courts
people washed their
is
faces
how oppressive
and
the sleeping
hands daily
arrangements could
with warm
feel
basins,
once the covers
relying
were
on linen
piled on.
cloths.
Contemporary
Soaked in herbal
writers
water described
for a
guests
sense
being
of
smothered
cleanliness
under mountains of
in
cloth,
noble
courts, hardly able
scented
to
breathe
oils and powders
for the sheer weight
helped
of
mask
wool
odors,
and fur.
while peasants
And yet embraced
when
a
those same
more
guests tried
practical
to remove
approach,
a
they
layer for
simply
relief,
didn't
expect
The
perfection.
night air rushed in
Medieval
so
people
brutally
were not ignorant
that
of
they
scrambled to pull the blankets back. They knew fleas carry disease. It was a constant balance between suffocation, but freezing always came first. Negotiation that rarely ended psychology in true comfort. Even the freezing children were wrapping into a curtained bed.
A baby,
no matter how dirty the blankets,
in layers of
brought a
linen
sense of
and
relief
tucked
that
beneath
outweighed
woolen
concerns
cloths.
about hygiene. while older
Chroniclers
children
describe
crawled
nights
into
when
bed
frost coated
beside
the
parents,
inside of window
vanishing
frames,
beneath the same
and even
animal
water in
skins.
basins froze solid.
Entire families
In these
often
conditions,
shared coverings,
bathing or washing
not
lids
only to cool body
felt
heat,
secondary to
but
staying
also
alive.
because the expense of
Cleanliness
wool and
was a
fur
goal
was
for summer,
enormous.
when
A
sunlight,
single
open
pelt
air,
represented
and warm water
weeks of
were
labor
easier to
and
come by.
hunting. A
Winter
blanket
was
of
for
finely
endurance.
woven wool
Animals
could
added
be
another
valued as
layer
highly
to
as
this trade-off.
livestock.
Dogs
To
were
own
often
many
welcomed
layers
onto beds
was
for
a sign
warmth,
of wealth, but they brought
but also a
fleas
necessity
and ticks
for
with them.
survival.
For
In
poorer
peasant homes,
households,
livestock shared
within
the
the
same
castle,
roof,
servants' guards
and their warmth
kitchen
was both
workers,
a blessing
blankets
and a burden.
were scarcer.
The smell of
They
hay
often
manure
slept
and
beneath
animal
rough
sweat,
wool cloaks,
blended with wood smoke,
or nothing
to
more
create
than their
an
day
atmosphere
garments.
that modern visitors
If
would
fortunate,
find overwhelming.
they borrowed old
Yet
furs
for medieval
discarded
villagers,
by their lord's
these
pelts,
scents meant security,
patched and worn
a sign that family
until they
and
were more
animals
hide
alike
than hair.
had survived another
But
night.
even these ragged pieces
This intimate
were treasured,
coexistence with
carried
dirt
from
and
room to
warmth,
room like armor
extended
against
even
the
to
night.
castles.
To
In
fall
the royal
asleep
courts of
without
England
any
and
covering
France,
was a rarity,
tapestries were
a
rarely
desperate
washed.
act reserved for
Instead,
summer,
they were beaten
or for the
outdoors
truly
and sprayed with
destitute.
vinegar
Clothing
or herbal
itself
infusions
played
to
a
freshen
role
them.
equal to
The
that of
same was
blankets.
true of bedding.
Woolen hose
Heavy
were sometimes
furs were
worn,
brushed vigorously
day and night,
sometimes perfumed
never
with
removed in the
rosewater,
depths of winter.
but actual washing
Long
was
tunics
reserved for linens.
doubled as nightshirts,
Even noble
their
women who
hems
valued refinement
tucked under legs
accepted
for
that winter
warmth.
bedding would smell of
Gloves
smoke
were
and
occasionally
animals.
worn,
Imagine
in bed
lying
stitched
under
from
these
wool
blankets
or leather,
breathing in a
to keep
mixture of
fingers
scents
supple for morning
that tell the
tasks.
story of survival.
The iconic
There's the
pointed
earthy tang
nightcap
of
tied
unwashed
beneath
wool,
the chine, and
the
yet
faint
despite
sweetness
the
of
weight,
lavender,
the smell, the
scratch of
metallic
fabric
fabric
against
against skin,
and the musk
there was comfort
of
and
animal
ritual.
fur. This
To layer
was the smell of
blankets and
safety
pull
of
on
life,
caps
preserved
was
in
to
a season
participate in
when
an
freezing to
age-old
death
dance,
was a real
one
threat.
shared by ancestors
Medieval life
and
was not
children
sterile,
alike.
but it
It was an
deeply
act
sensory,
of defiance
and these
against the
sensory
castle's
details
cold,
bound families together.
a nightly declaration.
Children grew up
that
associating
even
certain
stone
smells
could not
with
extinguish the
warmth and
warmth
safety,
of the human body,
much as we do with clean
and
sheets
so
today.
people endured.
Some wealthier
Pinned
households
by wool,
attempted to bridge this
hidden
gap
beneath
between
pelts,
hygiene and comfort,
cocooned in fabric
by investing
that
in
was heavy
elaborate
enough
bed hangings
to
and
hold them in
linens.
place until
Curtains
dawn.
could
The
be
deeper you
swapped
settle
seasonally,
into your medieval bed,
and embroidered coverlets
the more you
were
realize
sometimes
that
lined
blankets
with replaceable
and furs
sheets to absorb
were
dirt.
only part of the
Yet
story.
even these innovations
Clothing
only went so
itself
far.
was just as
A
important.
castle in January,
Unlike today,
was still bitterly
when
cold.
most people slip into
Its
lightweight
fires still
pajamas,
smoky,
or
its
even
floors
nothing
still
at all,
covered in rushes.
medieval
that
sleepers
absorbed
went to bed
everything
fully
from spilled
dressed.
wine.
It was
to
not
candle wax,
unusual
to wear the
same
servants
garments
bore
by
the
day
brunt
and
of
by night.
maintaining this system.
Simply loosening
Their
a
daily
belt
tasks
or
included
unfastening a
shaking
collar.
out bedding,
After
sweeping
all,
rushes,
removing layers
and
was
airing
an
blankets
invitation to
on sunny
frostbite.
days when possible.
Night shirts of
Winter
coarse
sunlight
linen were
weak
common
though it was,
among
served
those
as the medieval
who could
equivalent
afford
of
extra
disinfection.
garments. They
Mattresses
hung
were
loosely
beaten outdoors
to the knees or even
Herbs
ankles,
were added to straw,
serving as a
and
barrier
blankets were
between
draped on
skin
hedges
and
or
scratchy
walls
blankets
to absorb fresh air.
For the poor, ordinary
These scenes
tunics
remind us
did double
that
duty.
people of the Middle Ages
Jose
were not
stayed on.
indifferent to cleanliness.
Sometimes
They
patched with
simply had
scraps,
fewer tools.
wool pulled tight
Their
around
solutions
legs
were creative
that
and deeply
otherwise
connected
might
to
stiffen
nature's
in the
rhythms.
night.
Even
Gloves or
monasteries
mittens
often idealized
were worn to
as
keep
places
fingers
of purity,
limber,
accepted
so that
a
when
level
morning
of
came,
crime.
you could
Monks
still
slept
grip a
in
tool,
communal dormitory,
a
their
quill,
bedding simple,
or the hilt of a sword,
and their washing
and then of
schedules
course there
strict
was the nightcap,
but limited.
far
In
from
winter,
a whimsical
these
fashion.
dormitories grew damp
It was
and
essential.
smoky. Bedding was
Without
refreshed
it,
periodically.
Ears and scalp
But lice
would
and
freeze.
were common
With it,
companions,
heat
acknowledged
was trapped,
but not feared,
and hair was
as
less
they are
likely
today.
to crust with frost.
The emphasis in monastic
These
life
caps were simple
was on
combs
discipline
of wool
and humility,
or linen,
and enduring
sometimes
discomfort
tied
was
beneath the
considered
chin,
a form of spiritual
sometimes
training.
hanging long down the
In
side of
noble
the head.
courts, attitudes
In
toward
illustrations,
warmth
they look almost
and hygiene
comical,
reflected
but
a
to the
different
medieval
philosophy.
sleeper, they were as
Comfort
vital as the blankets
was a status
themselves.
symbol.
Servants and
Owning
chroniclers
multiple sets of
often
linens,
remarked on the sheer
perfumed
bulk
oils,
of a noble
and
in bed.
embroidered bedding,
Layered
showed wealth,
hose, long
even
shirts,
if actual cleanliness
caps, gloves,
was elusive.
all beneath
Royal
stacks of
inventories
blankets and
listed
furs.
Hundreds
It was
of
like
blankets,
swaddling an
sheets,
adult.
and bed curtains.
Movement
Many
was
scented with
difficult,
musk or
turning
rosewater.
over nearly
But
impossible.
no matter how refined the fabric,
Yet people
all bedding
accepted this
eventually carried
immobility the same, because the alternative was worse. Winter left its shift uncovered every even item briefly. In the medieval household meant inviting a chill sensory experience that could settle in your medieval memory. Writers of the era in the age described winter nights not only might lead to fever or worse, but through smell and nobles, texture. Furs carried prestige, the feel of as well as warmth. Feet. Ermine of smoke was especially prized its cleanliness. White winter coat, symbolizing purity, were about survival, and royalty, not perfection. Robes and coverlets, that explains lined with ermine, medieval literature were reserved often for kings, queens, spring cleaning, and the highest clergy. Sables softer represented and darker, and a spoke of wealth from and luxury. Winter. Foxwolf and bear hides in that castle bed were more common, draped across beds, every texture around you, or worn into them, the weight like cloaks, blankets. The smell of animal musk of linen lingered long against your after tanning, the faint mingling with smoke and sweat. Steps, but it was tolerated as the price of warmth of smoke. Peasants and lower servants rarely saw such luxury. Candles, their coverings were plainer sheepskins. Yet you feel safe. Coarse woolen blankets, patched cloaks thrown across straw. Environment as filthy. Yet even these humble materials mattered in a testament to survival. A shepherd in a might sleep beneath the very wool he had shorn imagined world. Beneath the hide of his understand that warmth, in such ways, survival was stitched directly into the fabric of daily labor. You needed layers. To own even a single serviceable blanket, and all of these was to have something to pass to children's blackened wall, patched and darned curtains, trapped until threads outnumbered the original cloth, oils from clothing and coverings. But to remove these also revealed differences of status or illness in the harshest ways. Winter was a test of endurance. A noble might complain of a draft, and while sinking into a bed heavily with imported pelts. This while a servant shivered in attitudes beneath a single threadbare cloak to morality, yet and both suffered the cold. A well-kept fire, both endured long nights of half sleep, while neglecting cared nothing considered for rank irresponsible. The difference lay only in how much weight you could pile onto your body, rather before exhaustion overcame discomfort. Fleas were tolerated. Imagine this part of life lying on your back that came with the comfort of fogging faintly inside the curtains. Families bonded over these shared experiences. Strengthening the nightcap slides over sterile environments rarely your legs feel as dawn brightened by the tug of hose beneath layers of blankets. Tasks. Somewhere nearby, briefly, another sleeper snores, muffled by his own pile of furs. Sweeping through the room smells of blankets or shaken fires, and smoke, a pungent cocktail of everything you wear. And everything you sleep carefully folded back. It is not comfort as you know it, of your body, but it is survival. And in the Middle Ages, overnight, that was all a bed was ever meant to provide. But so did as you lie there beneath the mound of cloth and bits of straw, and the faint paw prints of a dog that slept at your feet. That warmth, in a medieval castle of medieval comfort, was never guaranteed, only but deeply human. The stepping out of bed, wrapped around you, you feel the cold rush and designed for soft and invigorating. Or you glance back at the heavy blankets, but for sheer endurance, the fur coverlet, each piece of fabric, stone, each foot of the bed, animal skin, and realize how much effort line of defense went into that one nightly battle. In this and world, like any battle, warmth was an achievement. The victory was never complete, and cleanliness only a distant goal to make it to morning. Medieval people for many households their surroundings. The coverings themselves worked with what told stories. Blending practicality, a blanket was not simply bought and creating a home that felt safe. It was patched, repaired, and handed down across generations. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson. Stains became familiar marks. Warmth isn't edges frayed into patterns. It's about recognized by children who grew up beneath them and finding solace. Families could recall which blanket had traveled to a wedding castle, which fur had been used to swaddle an newborn, every scent, which nightshirt had once belonged to a grandfather. A reminder that humanity to sleep beneath has always been willing to sacrifice. Was to sleep beneath memory itself, wrapped out not only in fabric and into but in continuity, dimly lit. Yet alongside memory, the floor beneath you came discomfort, icy. Blankets grew stiff with smoke, lined with heavy with accumulated dirt, draft, and greasy with the lanolin. Feels alive to wool. The castle itself is breathing shed hairs. Each gust that carries tickled your nose, the faint scent of smoke, and clung to your clothes. Dust, swirling around carved doorways and iron and it always did the weight double. The truth of this place is inescapable, and what was once built as fortresses became a clammy burden. And this architecture tried to be magnificent to modern and air the coverings in was daylight. A challenge for those who lived here. But within days, every detail of a medieval castle design. The fight security was endless over comfort, a cycle of walls warming, often measured several feet thick, drying, built from stone, dampening, again, that retained the chill of winter. Too carried this duality, high ceilings and cavernous bed in hose tunics, heating difficult, gloves and windows, caps, often narrow arrow slits, let in light, toil, but also admitted freezing drafts. The wool, even when covered with dug into parchment panes and ties, these windows were far from airtight. After hours of stillness, in January, Children wriggled in protest, but parents hushed them, knowing that to shed even a single layer meant risking a night of shivers. Strategies to survive. In castles, survival trumped comfort, and discipline was the price of warmth. Moving families. Accounts from travelers often note the shock of entering a chamber filled with sleeping retainers or servants. Might sleep in a grand dozens of bundled figures lay in rows with each indistinguishable beneath their surrounding land. It was hard to tell where man ended, solar was abandoned, and blanket began. Smaller chambers, where fur ended, closer to the cloak began. Where thick to the outsider, and it looked almost funereal, as though bodies had been prepared for burial, often lacking grandeur. But for those inside the layers, offering better protection, it was merely another night of life. As usual, following your guide. The wealthiest through a castle tried to soften these realities as they embellished these seasonal rhythms. Blankets might be embroidered with family crests, airy spaces, furs dyed or trimmed in bright colors, night clothes tailored from finer linen. The household but no matter the decoration, like a living creature, the fundamental experience, furniture was the same: heavy tapestries, scratchy, suffocating fires, warmth lit in smaller rooms barely designed for warmth, cold, rather than show. To pull a cover over your winter chambers was not to seek comfort of the castle, but to fight, filled with the smell of burning wood. Picture the moment: the chatter of servants just before a shuffle of guards, changing shift blankets. Not every castle was so well equipped. The air inside your curtains is closed, particularly those on remote frontiers, scented with lacked multiple chambers, forcing residents to endure bitter winters at the knees. In whatever rooms existed, slides across your brow. Chroniclers describe lords sleeping in their halls, clumsy, bed curtains drawn tightly to create warmth, sleeper while guards patrolled nearby, muffled beneath his own covering. The sheer size of these buildings, the sound echoes, made it nearly impossible cocoon to heat them effectively around you, no matter how large the fires. Exhaustion, fireplaces themselves reveal this tension between grandeur and practicality. Morning brings no relief. In Lord Solar, the blankets are damp with condensation, that the furs smell stronger, could stand inside your nightclothes, feeding logs as heavy as his arm into the flames. You rise slowly. The spectacle was pulling away layers, but most of the heat escaped up the massive chimney. The air beyond your curtains provided light is colder than ever, sense of security, and you long for the warmth made your entire room warm. But such was the paradox of medieval innovations. In castle the very weight that oppressed you with later was also the only shield smaller that kept more you practical fireplaces. In this way, blankets, furs, and clothing and improved were more than objects. Even with these they were metaphors for medieval life itself. Burdensome. That's why architecture relied so heavily on textiles. They did not offer freedom, weren't just decorations. They offered survival. They were essential insulation. And night after night, pockets of generation after generation, people accepted their flaws religiously because there was no alternative or epic battles. They wrapped themselves, but their fabric and history endured the discomfort into a and dreamed not of luxury, but of lasting until dawn. Immediately different. You've already learned echoes that blankets, drafts, and furs and gave the impression can only do so much, even if the temperature wrapped like a cocoon. In some still feel the cold wood pressing in, offered another layer testing of insulation. The edges of your defenses, installed oak boards. So what else can you do? Creating a buffer in a medieval castle, and the freezing stone to tricks, gaps, small windows, clever methods with wool moss passed down through generations to keep out the wind. None of them perfect but effective measures, but each one buying that you even in an age a little of more fortifications, the first thing you do is reach for not entirely forgotten. It's a shallow metal pangs to make with a long handle filled with glowing embers from the hearth. Seasonal sleeping. A servant slides it between the sheets before you climb in, also moving it slowly across the mattress. In winter, steam hisses gathered where heat meets damp straw, or closer to the fire. For a moment, you feel giddy at the thought of slipping into warmth as insulation. But as quickly as it arrives, it vanishes, shifted farther from the embers center of the house, fabric chills again, open for ventilation. And you realize this comfort, the rhythm of life, was fleeting visitor seasons. Still, for those few minutes from the grandest castle, you allow yourself to believe that the bed hut is not a frozen slab dance, but something closer to a hearth. Household sometimes instead of a poem, preparing for the cold on the fire. You wrap them in cloth, bustle through hallways, and tuck them at your feet. Windows with linen. At first, soaked in they wax, radiate bliss, carrying driving away the ache in your toes, and furs to winter chambers. Hours later, you jolt awake to be stored stones. The great hall, once the social heart of the castle, their warmth becomes a venue for daytime gathering. Keep them close. By night, even the residents retreat to smaller rooms. Food and fires can offer another line of defense more easily. Before bed,
Even the Lord's private chapel may
hot
see
wine
less
spiced with cloves, as its
or a
soaring
bowl of
ceilings
thick pottage make it
its
bitterly
heat
cold.
lingering in your belly.
This seasonal
The
adaptation
warmth spreads through your
influenced
chest,
medieval psychology,
fooling you into thinking
the shrinking
has
of a
been
castle
driven
into
out.
fewer, warmer rooms
But
during
soon
winter
it
months,
fades,
creating
leaving you
intimacy
hungry for
and a
another
sense
bite.
of closeness among
Another
household
drink.
members.
You
In a
burrow
world where
deeper under
nobility
covers,
often live,
chasing the ghost
surrounded
of
by
comfort
servants
that
and
food
attendants,
and drink leave behind.
winter brought a kind
And
of
then, of
enforced
course,
privacy.
there are dogs,
Families gathered
a
around
little
fires,
terrier
sharing meals and
curls at your
stories,
feet,
huddled together
a
against the
larger
cold.
hound,
While castles
presses at
were
your
symbols
side.
of wealth and power,
You feel their bodies
they were also
twitch
places of
as they dream their
vulnerability.
steady breath,
Their stone walls
warming the
unable
air
to keep
around
out the
you.
chill entirely.
This is where the phrase
Architectural
three-dog
records
night makes
show
sense.
that wealthier castles,
When the cold is so
began to
biting
incorporate solar
that
rooms
only
as
3
living
animals in bed
and
with
sleeping
you
quarters
will keep
in
you
the
alive
13th
until
and
dawn.
14th centuries.
You don't complain,
Emphasizing warmth,
you cling to
and
their
comfort
warmth over sheer
ignoring the
defensibility.
fleas they bring. These rooms were
Grateful
often
for the
located
living
in
furnaces
upper floors
that share
where your
sunlight
space could
when
pour
dogs
in
aren't
through
enough.
larger windows during
People
the day.
are.
While
You share
fireplaces
beds with
provided
siblings,
some warmth at night. Cousins, the
even
solar
servants.
was the medieval equivalent.
Privacy
of a family
dissolves in
lounge,
the face of
a
survival.
semi-private retreat.
You turn
for the
toward
Lord
each
Lady,
other, letting
and
their
body
closest
heat
relatives
seep between you.
Yet even
Sometimes
here,
luxury
it's
was
awkward.
relative. Sometimes
solar
it's
might boast a
suffocating,
large hearth,
but
thick
more
carpets,
often
and
it's
embroidered
relief.
cushions.
The human
But
body
winter night still
is a
required
better heater than
multiple
any
blankets
blanket
and
you
curtains
hold
around
one
the bed
another through
to
the
keep out
long,
drafts.
restless night.
For
Other
peasants,
tricks feel
architecture
stranger.
was simpler.
Some
but
sleepers
often more
scatter
efficient.
herbs, their small
Rosemary,
cottages,
mint, lavender
typically
across
across
their
their
bedding,
and daub,
with
not
thatched
only for
roofs,
scent,
retained heat
but for
better than
supposed
massive
warming
castles.
properties.
Low
Others
ceilings,
place
trapped
charms
smoke,
of iron
and packed
or
earth
brass
floors
beneath the
insulated
mattress
against the cold,
believing they protect
families
against
and livestock
chills
share the
caused
same
by evil
space,
spirits, adding warmth through
You might
sheer
laugh
body
at the
heat.
superstition,
The smell was
but
strong,
in a world
but
where
villagers
medicine
were
is
pragmatic,
and
warmth
insulation
mattered more than
non-existent,
refinement.
you
In
cling
some
to
ways,
any hope
peasants endured
rational or
winter
not.
better than
Even
nobles who
architecture
lived in
joins in the
enormous stone
effort.
chambers where
Winter
fires roared,
chambers
but
are
drafts
smaller,
never ceased.
lower-ceilinged rooms
Returning to the castle,
meant to trap
imagine
heat better than
exploring its
grand
upper
halls.
floors during a stormy
You
night.
retreat there when the
Wind
season
whistles
grows
through arrow
harsh,
slits, causing
leaving the
tapestries
larger
to
chambers
flutter like
to stand
sails.
empty and echoing.
Servants scurry down narrow
Fires
staircases,
are tended
carrying
more
torches
carefully
that
with
flicker
chimneys
wildly in the gusts.
designed to draw
Even in
smoke
its grandeur,
without stealing
the
all
castle
the
feels
warmth.
vulnerable,
And
a
yet,
living structure
no matter
groaning
how
under the
carefully you
assault of
plan,
winter.
the
Yet in a
cold
small
always
chamber,
finds you.
tucked
So
away near
each
the
night,
center of the
you
fortress,
repeat the rituals,
a lord
heat
and
the
lady,
pan,
sleep under
warm
heavy
the
furs,
stones,
their bed
eat the
curtains
broth,
drawn tightly.
tuck in beside your
The room is
dogs
dim,
or family,
but a brazier glows
pull the
softly,
curtains tight,
providing just
whisper
enough
a
warmth
prayer.
to keep the
None
chill
of
at
it
bay.
defeats the cold
The
entirely,
castle's design,
but
may
it
be
gives you
harsh,
just enough
but
strength
generations of
to drift
residents
into
have
shallow
learned to
sleep.
adapt,
And in a
carving out
castle
comfort where
just
they
enough
can.
is
Over
the
time,
closest you will ever
medieval
come to
architecture
comfort.
evolved in response
You also
to these
learn quickly
challenges.
that heating tricks
Later,
are not only
castles
about warmth,
incorporated
but about
glazed windows,
reassurance.
improved chimneys,
The rituals
and more
themselves
efficient
carry weight.
fireplaces.
Watching a
Glass,
servant
though rare
slide the
and
warming pan
expensive,
across the sheets
became a sign of wealth,
gives you the feeling that
as well
someone
as
has done
practicality,
battle with the cold,
reducing
on your
drafts
behalf.
significantly.
Holding a mug
Even
of hot
so,
ale before bed
No castle was
is less
ever
about the
truly
heat it
warm
brings
in winter.
and more
The stone
about the
walls that
comfort
protected
of the act.
against siege engines
Hands wrapped around something
also
glowing
absorbed
steam,
cold,
brushing
radiating
your
it
face
inward
in
like
an
an endless
momentary
illusion.
that
The
you are
psychological
safe.
weight of this
There are other
architecture
quieter tricks
is
too.
easy to imagine.
You
Walking
hang
through
heavy
a medieval
cloths
castle at night
or spare cloaks
was an
across
experience
doorways
of contrast.
to keep out drafts.
The cozy glow of
You
a
stuff
small
gaps in
firelit
shutters
chamber,
with rags.
followed by the
You
vast
drag
echoing
benches or
emptiness
chests
of a
close to
hall
your
where
bed
breath
so that the
fog
curtains
in the
cling
air.
tighter, sealing
Servants
off even
often
more
carried
space.
lanterns.
These
not just for
adjustments
light,
don't
but
banish
for
the cold,
reassurance. Their flickering
they
glow
slow its
offering
attack.
a fragile sense of safety.
and that alone
in the
feels like
cavernous dark.
victory.
These
Sometimes
experiences
ingenuity
shaped
takes
medieval
stranger
storytelling.
forms.
Tales
A
of
traveler
ghosts,
might sleep with
spirits,
warm
and
cold
cold
drafts
buried
haunting
in a pot of
corridors
sand beside the bed
came
naturally in a world
its faint heat
where
seeping
every shadow
upward
seemed
through the
alive.
night.
For travelers,
Others swear by rubbing their
castles
hands
offered
and feet
safety,
with oils
but little
or
comfort.
fat before sleep,
Guests often slept
creating
in
a
great
barrier
halls
against the chill.
or guard rooms. Their beds
These
were arranged
remedies
on
are messy,
pallets or
sometimes
trestles
smelly,
with no privacy.
but when
or
your
warmth.
bones ache, and your teeth
their
chatter.
own bedding provided.
Dignity is easily
Some brought their
sacrificed
own
for
portable
relief,
beds or
and of
bedrolls,
course,
knowing
prayer
that
is
even
its
noble
own kind of trick.
hospitality couldn't guarantee
Before
a
you
warm
pull
night's
the
sleep.
covers up to
The
your
richest
chin,
travelers
you whisper
traveled
words to
with
saints,
entire
or
entourages
mutter charms
to
against
recreate
frost
the comforts
demons of home, said to stalk
bringing
the
the
night.
servants' bedding.
Perhaps you
and
don't
even
believe every
tapestries
word, to hang
but the
temporarily
ritual
in their
itself
rooms.
steadies you. Seasonal
It
living
reminds you
extended beyond
that countless
bedrooms.
others
Kitchens,
have endured the
workshops, and
same
storerooms
trial,
were
that
also
human
adapted for
resilience
winter use.
is as much a weapon
Fires burned
as
constantly
fur
in kitchens
or fire, making
when
them
you
some of the
finally
warmest
draw your
places
curtains
in a
close,
castle.
surrounded by
Elderly
heated
residents
stones,
sometimes slept
layered
nearby during the
bulldogs
coldest
pressed at your
months,
feet,
and sick
and
family
prayer
members echoing
might be moved
faintly in
closer
your
to the
mind.
warmth.
You
This
realize the
flexibility
cold
shows that
hasn't
medieval
been
people were
beaten,
practical
and
but it has
unromantic
been
about
held
their
at bay.
environment.
You've
Castles
carved
were
out
symbols of
a
status,
fragile bubble of
but
warmth
they were also
in a
workplaces,
fortress
and
of
every
ice.
corner was pressed into
And
service.
sometimes
When survival
that
was at
fragile
stake,
bubble
is enough
in
to
monasteries
carry you
and
into
convents.
dreams. Architecture
wake in the middle
reflected
of the
similar
night,
concerns,
and the first thing
monastic
you notice
dormitories
is that
were
the fire
often
has burned
unheated,
low.
but cloisters and
The
libraries
warm
were
glow that
designed
once
to catch
painted the
sunlight,
curtains is gone,
and monks huddled around
replaced by
central
a faint
braziers
red
during
shimmer
study hours.
buried deep in
The rhythm
ash.
of prayer,
The
provided
cold
warmth
presses
in its
harder
own way,
now, slipping into
amongst
every
rows of
fold
intervals
of your
through the
bedding.
night. To tend fires,
Instinctively, you reach
keeping
for
the
the
tricks
community
you prepared
alive,
before sleep,
as well as spiritually
your feet
vigilant.
search
for the
the
stone
same
wrapped in
principles
cloth
applied
at
in
the end of the
castles,
bed.
where night watchmen
Hours
and
ago,
guards
it radiated
doubled
gentle
as
heat,
firekeepers, but now
the
its
warmth
little
of a
more than
household
lump
was
of
not
cold
static.
weight. It had to
You
be
sighed,
actively
disappointed,
but
and
an
not
architecture
surprised.
supported this effort
In
through
castles,
careful planning.
warmth always
Imagine
runs
the
on
sensory
borrowed
experience
time of moving between
the cold
rooms
is
in a
patient.
castle in January.
It waits
You
until
step
you
out of your
relax,
chamber,
then seeps back
and
in,
are hit by a
as
blast
though
of cold
reclaiming
air.
what was always its
The
own.
corridor is dim,
So you huddle closer to
its
those,
torches casting
sharing
only a
your
faint
bed.
orange glow
Maybe
on
it's a
gray stone
sibling,
walls.
a
The wind
servant,
sighs through a
or
crack
even
in
a
a window,
loyal hound,
carrying
pressed
with it
against
the
your
smell of
legs.
snow and
You
wet
adjust
earth.
your layers,
You hurry to the
tugging
great
furs
hall,
tighter
where
around
a
your
roaring
chin,
fire greets you.
pulling the cap
Sparks
farther
flying
down
upward
over your
into a
ears.
vast chimney.
Body heat,
The contrast
collective
is startling.
heat, that is your
One
strongest
moment you are
ally.
shivering, the next
The
basking
air
in warmth.
inside the curtains
This is
stands
heavy
between
and
hot
stale,
and cold, but
defined
compared to
daily
the
life
breath of
shaping
stone outside,
medieval people's
it
resilience.
feels like a sanctuary.
As evening falls,
In these
the
hours,
castle contracts
the
again.
smallest gestures
Fires
matter.
are banked, doors
You
barred,
rub your hands together,
and residents
blowing warm
retreat
breath
to their
into your
inner
palms.
chambers. You
The
shift
architecture
slowly,
itself, trying
seems
not to
to
let
sigh in
icy
relief.
drafts
Its
sneak
vast
under the
halls
covers.
empty, its
You
corridors
murmur
silent,
prayers, half awake,
except for the
asking for
occasional drip
protection
of
against
water
frost
from a leaky
and
window frame.
illness. In this
Sometimes
world,
every
you
warm
even
room
dream of
feels
summer
like a
fields,
sanctuary,
roaring
and every
hearths,
bed becomes a fortress,
only to wake
within a
disappointed
fortress.
in the dim
By
cold
dawn,
reality.
The cold has
But
crept
you don't
back
give
into
up.
every corner.
At dawn,
But so too
the
has the
cycle begins
determination
again.
of those who live
Servants
here.
rake
Fires
the
are
embers
rekindled,
back to life,
rushes swept,
tossing on kindling,
and bedding shaken out,
until flames
servants
leap
move like
and the
clockwork,
hall glows faintly.
resetting the castle for
You
another
clutch
day,
a mug of warm ale
proving
or
that
broth,
medieval architecture,
feeling the
for all
heat
its austerity,
seep into your
was
hands
not a prison,
before it reaches your
but
belly.
a living organism,
For a
adapted to the
few
seasons.
precious moments,
Winter made castles
almost
feel
feel harsher.
alive again, but it
And
also
then
made them more human.
it's time to
Families
prepare
drew closer
for another night.
Fires
You
burned
watch
brighter,
the servants
and even the
carry
draftiest
warming
corridors
pans across the
became part
hall,
of a carefully
hear the
choreographed
hiss of damp
rhythm of
linens,
survival.
touched by hot
Standing
metal.
in this imagined castle,
You see dogs nestling
you
near
run their
their
hand
masters.
along a wall of stone.
Know that soon you'll
So
welcome
cold,
them under
it
your own
stings your
covers.
palm. Yet
You help
behind
hang
you,
cloth across
the
drafty
firelight
doorways,
from a nearby chamber,
and you tuck herbs under
spills
your
into the
pillow,
hall, golden
not
and
because
soft.
you truly believe in their
That
magic,
glow
is
but
more
because
than
ritual
warmth
itself is
It's
comforting.
a triumph.
By now,
You
every
understand the truth.
blazing log,
There is no
every
one trick
drawn
that
curtain,
saves you from the cold.
every woolen
Each
blanket
act
represents
is small,
the ingenuity
temporary
of people
fragile,
who
but
refuse
together
to let
they form a
architecture
pattern,
defeat them.
a rhythm,
The castle may be
a
an
nightly
icebound
defense.
fortress,
like
but within
soldiers
its heart,
holding the line.
life persists,
Every
glowing
stone,
like embers in
every
the dark.
blanket,
Picture yourself
every
standing
cap,
before a
and every
medieval
prayer
fireplace.
does its part.
Its yawning stone
None of
mouth
them
wide
win
enough
the
to
war,
walk into.
but
The
all of
fire
them
roars,
keep you alive,
logs crackling
until the sun returns.
and spitting.
And as you
Sparks
close
of
your
flames
eyes
leaping
again,
high and bright.
you realize that
At first
survival in a
glance, it feels
castle
like salvation.
is never about luxury, a blazing heart. It is about otherwise frigid tiny gestures, but repeated just a few feet away, warm, and the illusion fades. Hot stones, the warmth barely reaches shared bodies, the drafty chamber swallows it, They are the
threadbare
remains
tools
cold
of
enough
endurance
for your breath to fog,
and they are enough.
This was the paradox.
You start to
medieval
notice how much of your life in the
they were
castle
grand in scale,
revolves around
but inefficient
preparing
in
for the
practice.
Every
Designed
task has a
primarily to
rhythm,
vent smoke,
and every
rather
rhythm
than
is
retain
designed
heat.
to slow
Their
the
chimneys
cold
were
advance.
massive, drawing warmth
You know
upward
it will
and
come
out.
regardless,
The stone hearth
but you fight it
radiated some
anyway,
heat,
like a
but the
soldier
room's
defending
sheer
ground
size that can
made
never
true
truly be
coziness
held.
impossible. Servants prepare
Even in a
long
lord's
before
private
sunset,
solar, where
they haul
fireplaces were
logs
smaller
from the yard
and more refined,
stacking them in
warmth
neat
was
piles
fleeting.
by the hearth.
Fires were essential
You watch
for light
as
and
sparks
morale,
leap into the air
as much as
when
for heat,
fresh wood hits
and
the
their glow
embers,
provided
filling the hall with a
psychological
roar that makes
even
you
when the
feel
room
braver
itself
than you are.
stayed bitterly cold.
For a moment, the flames convince
medieval
you
halls used
that
central
this time
hearths,
will be different,
large open
that tonight
fires
warmth
in the middle
might
of a great
actually
room.
win.
Smoke
But
drifted
you've seen
upward
it too many
through a
times
hole in the
by
roof
midnight.
or out of slits in the gables.
Even the fiercest
Imagine
blaze
walking into
dwindles
such a
to a
hall.
whisper,
The air is thick,
and the shadows reclaim
your
the
eyes
hall.
water,
So
and
you
the
join in
rafters
the
are
rituals
blackened
of
with soot.
resistance.
The smell
You drag
of
your
burning
cloak
wood
tighter
saturates your
across the
clothes,
doorway
and
to block
sparks float
drafts.
upward like fireflies
You stuff
into
cloth
the night
into the
sky.
cracks of shutters.
Yet this smoky, dimly
You
lit
lay your
space
boots close to
was
the
a gathering
fire,
place, the center of
hoping
social
they'll
life.
be pliable in the
Families,
morning
guests,
instead of
and servants
stiff with frost.
clustered around the blaze,
Every action
warming
feels
their hands,
small,
eating
almost
meals and
pitiful,
listening to music.
but together
Over time,
they create a
fireplaces
sense of
evolved,
control,
moving to the edges
a
of
belief
rooms
that
with
you're
chimneys
not
that carried
entirely
smoke
helpless
away.
against the stone's
This
indifference.
innovation made
Some
castles
nights
healthier
you
and
experiment
safer,
with
but
new
not
ideas.
necessarily warmer.
A
Chimneys
heated brick
acted like funnels,
wrapped in wool,
sucking not
tucked
only
at your
smoke,
stomach,
but precious
a pouch
heat
of
out of
herbs
the room.
pressed under your
Drafts from
pillow,
windows and
promising
doors
to
added
chase
to the
away
chill.
chills and nightmares
Even when
alike.
fires blazed
You
bright
even
in
try
corners of the
sleeping
room,
with a cup of
remained
ale
icy
at your side.
Medieval
warmed by
chroniclers
the hearth,
often described
though
halls
more often than
where
not,
servants wore
it
cloaks
freezes
indoors,
before you wake.
and frost formed
Still,
on walls,
you try,
despite roaring fires.
because trying
The
is all
smoke
there
itself
is.
was
The
inescapable.
company of others
Even with
makes the
chimneys,
greatest
the
difference.
sheer number of fires
A hall
burning in a
full of
castle
sleeping
filled the
bodies
air
radiates
with a faint
heat.
haze. No
Your
hearth
hair
can
and
match. Clothes carried the
You
smell
feel it
constantly
when you lie shoulder to
and the
shoulder
walls absorbed
with
it, darkening over
companions.
time.
The air inside the chamber
Candles and
thick
torches
with
added
breath,
their own
blankets,
smoke, leaving
rustling.
streaks of soot along
As
ceilings
people
and beams.
shift in uneasy
The
sleep,
atmosphere inside a castle
the
was
cold
far
still
from clean,
lingers, but
in
less
winter
sharply
windows were
softened
kept tightly
by the
sealed,
shared
trapping
warmth of human presence.
but also concentrating the
In those
smoky
moments,
haze. You understand
to
why
medieval people,
loneliness
this was normal.
in a castle
They
is its
accepted the
own
sting in their
kind
eyes.
of death. This relationship
Alone,
with smoke was
The
practical,
cold devours you.
even superstitious.
Together,
People
you
believed
hold it
smoke
back.
preserved timber
Yet
beams
even with all these
by
tricks,
keeping insects away.
there are nights when the
and they
cold
weren't
feels
entirely
victorious.
The
You
acrid
wake
smell
with
of
your
soot
teeth chattering,
repelled pests,
your fingers
and the
numb
constant
your
haze
skin, prickling
may
with
have
the
slowed
ache
rot.
of frost.
Some even thought
The fire is
smoke
gone.
had medicinal benefits,
The stones are cold,
claiming it could protect
and the
against
dogs
illness.
have wandered away.
Whether or not this was
You
true,
burrow deeper,
smoke became
pulling
part of the
every
castle's
layer you can
identity.
find over your head.
Visitors often
Whispering
described
desperate
the
prayers
unique
into
perfume
stale
of each
air.
home.
And
A blend
somehow,
of burning
eventually,
oak
you
or
drift
pine
back
rushes
into a
on the
shallow,
floor, herbs,
restless sleep.
in the bedding.
By morning, you
and
are
the tallow
alive,
of countless candles,
and that alone feels like
but where there is
triumph.
fire,
You
there is
stretch
danger.
stiff limbs,
and medieval castles
shake out blankets,
were tinderboxes,
and
despite
watch
their
as
stone
servants
walls.
coax new life
Tapestries,
into the hearth.
straw-stuffed
You drink
mattresses,
hot broth,
and
warming
wooden
your
furniture
insides as
made
much
rooms
as your
highly
hands.
flammable.
And
Bed
as you
curtains
prepare for
could
another
ignite
day,
with a single
you
stray
know the
spark,
fight will repeat
and with
itself
no
when the
fire
sun
alarms
sets.
or pressurized
But you
water
also know
systems,
you will
a
face it
blaze
again,
could devastate an
because
entire
survival
household.
is built on repetition.
Chroniclers recorded
And so the
fires
heating tricks
sweeping through
of a medieval
castles and
castle
towns,
are not
often
miracles.
destroying years of
They
wealth
are
in
rituals,
hours.
habits,
Even
desperate
nobles
acts
feared nighttime
that turn
accidents.
unbearable nights
Servants
into
were
nights that
assigned
can
to
be
monitor
endured.
flames.
None of
And
them
some
banish the
castles
cold.
employed guards whose
None
sole
of them
duty
guarantee comfort.
was to tend and patrol
But
fires
they give you a
through the
fighting
night.
chance.
Imagine yourself
And in this
bed,
stone fortress,
curtains
a
drawn
fighting
tight,
chance
fire in the heart
is as close
burning
to
low.
victory
A
as you will
servant
ever
sits
come.
nearby, lantern
By
in
the
hand,
end of winter, you
watching the
realize
embers.
that the true trick
This wasn't a
isn't
luxury.
any single
It was a
tool or
necessity.
ritual. It's
Families
endurance.
understood that a single
Every
ember
night
could
you
set
repeat the
curtains alight,
same motions,
and heavy
warming
bedding would
stones,
smolder before
piling
bursting into
blankets,
flames,
sharing body
filling a
heat,
chamber with deadly
whispering
smoke.
charms.
Fires
None
were
of them
rarely allowed
ever
to go
conquer the
completely
cold
out.
yet.
As
Together,
rekindling them
they
in
form
the
a
morning
rhythm
was time-consuming,
that carries you through the
so
season.
they were banked carefully.
Survival becomes
Ashes
less about
covered
finding
glowing
the
embers,
perfect
keeping them
solution
alive until dawn,
and more about
the same fire
accepting
that offered
imperfection.
safety
You learn to
could
measure
also destroy
success differently.
everything you owned.
If your
In
toes
great
only
halls,
ache
Fire instead of going numb became almost ceremonial.
That's a victory.
The hearth,
If the stone
was
in
the
your
heart
bed
of the
stays
house
warm
warm for an hour, and its flames
instead of half,
symbolized life,
you counted
and
as
prosperity.
luck.
Guests
If the
sat
dogs
according
don't
to
steal
rank
too much of the
around
blanket,
the fire with the
you
highest
sleep more
status.
peacefully.
Individuals,
You stop
enjoying
dreaming
the
of
closest
comfort
proximity
and begin to
warmth.
dream of tolerability
Meals
of nights
were planned
around
that are merely
placement.
hard instead of
Picture
unbearable.
a winter banquet.
The people around
Servants
you scurry with
share in
platters
this quiet
of roasted
battle,
meats, while
servants
minstrels
swap
play
stories
near the blaze
of
their
which
instruments
herbs
glinting in the
keep
firelight.
spirits at bay.
Yet beyond the
Children
circle of light,
whisper superstitions,
shadows
swearing, and the air
tucking
is
a
icy.
charm under your pillow. The contrast
Keeps
between
the frost
firelit
away.
comfort
Elders
and the
remind
surrounding
you
cold-shaped
that the
medieval
cold has
perceptions
always
of
been with
luxury
you,
and power,
and always will
fireplaces
be. That
were often
endurance
designed with
itself
artistry,
is the
mantles
inheritance of
carved
castle
with
life.
heraldic
And
emblems.
so when you finally
Mythological
close your
creatures
eyes,
or biblical
you
scenes
no longer expect warmth.
transformed functional
What
structures
you expect,
into works of art.
what you hope for,
These
is another
embellishments
dawn.
demonstrated
You pull
wealth
the covers
and
tighter.
taste.
Press
But they
close
also
to your
reinforce the
companions
psychological
and
value
let
of the
exhaustion
hearth.
win.
Families
Over
gathered
discomfort.
under their coats of arms.
The castle may
with the
never
fire's
grant you
glow
comfort,
illuminating their lineage,
but it grants you
carved into
walls,
stone.
and within those walls,
Even peasants,
your
whose hearts
tricks
were
keep
simpler,
you alive.
imbued them with symbolism.
That in the
fire
end
was the soul
is the
of
greatest
home,
warmth you can hope
spiritual
for.
and
You
practical
lie
center
awake
in the darkness
that
bound family members
and your
together.
senses sharpen
For peasants,
in ways you never
managing
expect.
fire was a
The
constant
castle speaks to
responsibility.
you through
Their
smell,
homes often lacked
sound,
chimneys, entirely
taste,
relying on a hole in the roof
and touch
to
each
vent
one,
smoke,
reminding
the
you
result
that
was
this
a living
fortress
space
is no
filled with
cozy
haze.
refuge,
But this haze
but a
carried
compromise
warmth
between
and survival and suffering. Families
The
slept
first
near the hearth,
thing you
often
notice
on straw
is the
pallets,
smell.
their faces lit
It
by
is
flickering
everywhere,
flames,
clinging to your clothes.
The smell of wood smoke
your hair,
became a
your
signature
skin.
of survival.
The smoke of the
Without
hearth
it,
seeps into
winter nights
fabric
would be
until
unbearable.
everything you own
Children grew up
smells
understanding
faintly
that fire
of ash.
was both a guardian
Beneath
and a
it
threat. Lurks the
accidental
accidental
fires
damp
were
stone
common
in villages. The
where
sourness
thatched
of
roofs
rushes
and
rotting
timber walls
underfoot made homes
the
highly
tang of
combustible.
wool that has
A stray
absorbed
spark
too much
could
sweat
reduce an entire
and
settlement
too little
to
soap.
ashes. Sometimes,
Returning to your
a
imagined
handful
castle,
of herbs tossed
you
on the
walk through a
floor
hall at night,
or burned in the fire
torches
flicker in their iron
adds a
brackets,
moment of sweetness,
casting long shadows
but it never
that stretch
lasts.
across stone floors.
You breathe
The
it all
fireplace
in,
crackles because you must,
filling the
air with warmth.
There is
and
no
scent.
other air to
But every
breathe.
gust of wind
Then
from a
there
door
are the
or
sounds.
window makes the flames
castle
waver,
never
reminding
truly
you
sleeps.
of their fragility.
You hear the
Servants
whistle
move
of wind
silently
through
with
arrow
buckets of
slits
sand,
high, ready to
mournful
smother
like the
embers if
wail of
needed.
distant voices.
Even in this grand
Somewhere
fortress,
water drips
fire is
steadily
treated
with reverence,
a maddening rhythm
and
in the
caution.
silence.
The sensory
Dogs
experience
bark
of
in the
firelight was
Their
deeply
echoes
ingrained in
bouncing
medieval
off stone
culture.
walls.
Without
Close
electric
by,
lamps
you
or
catch the
gas
rustle
lights,
of blankets.
fire was the only
cough
source of
of a
illumination
servant.
after sunset. The restless turn of
flicker of
someone
flames
sharing your
shaped how
chamber
people
saw their surroundings.
And beyond it, rooms
all the
seemed
creak of the
alive,
timber
shifting
beams
with
each movement
under
of
strain.
light,
Groaning
tapping like
stays rippled
giants
in
in
their
their
sleep.
and carved faces.
Each sound
on
reminds
furniture
you of the world
or beams
outside
appear
the
to
storm.
move. The
This
frost,
environment fueled
the animals
imagination
prowling
and
in the night,
superstition, contributing to
and
ghost
each sound
stories and folklore.
makes the thin warmth of your
Shadows
bed became characters,
feel
all the more fragile,
and every
draft
taste
whispered like
even
a spirit
plays its
passing
part.
by.
You
The
lick
physical
your
cost
lips
of
and
living
find
with
them
fire was
cracked.
significant, salted
Medieval
by
lungs
sweat,
or the
bitter from
evidence
the smoke
blackened
that seeps
from
into
your
years of
throat.
inhaling smoke.
The memory of
Filled
hot
with
ale
soot
or
particles
spiced wine
from wood and tallow
lingers faintly.
archaeological studies of skeletons
that has long
from
since
this period
faded. Reveal
sometimes
respiratory
damage.
You chew a
Even
sprig of
children,
mint,
suggesting
or
that
rosemary
smoky
left in the
homes
rushes,
were effective
hoping to
life
cleanse
from
your
birth.
mouth.
People
But
may
the
not
flavor
have fully
quickly gives
understood
way
these
to
dangers,
dust.
but they
Even
recognize
food
discomfort
becomes part of the fight.
Watery eyes
Against the cold, its
persistent
taste,
coughing, bound up
and
with the
soot
comfort
streaked
it
walls
fails to provide for
were
long.
accepted.
Touch,
Touch,
the
though,
price of survival,
is the most constant.
Candles
You
added
feel
their
the
own
scratch
hazards.
of wool
Made
against
of
your
tallow
skin,
or beeswax.
the weight of
They
blankets,
dripped hot wax,
pressing down the
and
damp
emitted
edges of
steady,
furs that never
flickering
fully
light.
dry.
In wealthy
You feel the
households,
itch of fleas,
servants monitored
the
candles,
crawl of lice,
constantly
the
snuffing
occasional
them
sting of a
before they
rat
burned too low.
brushing too close
In
the
poorer
rushes.
homes, every
One or two
sensation
candles
is
might be the
amplified
only illumination
by the cold,
and their placement
your skin
was strategic,
hypersensitive
often
on wall brackets,
your body
to
alert to
minimize
every
fire risk.
intrusion. Still,
What should
accidents
be
were common.
softness is rough. Letters from the period
What
recount
should be
curtains
clean
catching
is
fire
dirty.
from candles
What
left
should
too
be
close
warm
to windows or children
is
knocking
never
over
warm
lamps.
enough.
And yet,
Firefighting
in the midst of
was
all this discomfort,
buckets of water,
there are moments
sand
of
or blankets
contrast
suffice
that
to
make life bearable.
and entire communities.
When you
Returned
rallied
from the
when
battle
flames
broke out,
your
face
this
raw with
ever-present
wind,
danger shaped medieval hall feels almost heavenly. At night, before retiring, its glow painting your cheeks with borrowed fire, called covering. When you stumble in from the yard, carefully banking embers under ash, even the damp straw of your bed without open flame feels like salvation. In many cultures, when a dog presses close by a prayer, sharing its simple steady heat, both gratitude, you sigh with gratitude. Even in a world defined by cold, the smallest task with reverence becomes a treasure. The hearth was more than warmth and retold long after it fades. Anchor. It is in these contrasts to generations of ancestors who had performed the same ritual for small mercies. Imagine now standing before the fire at dawn, watching a servant stir embers back to life. A night when the wind sparks leap upward. You notice details with warmth that would and the day begins anew. In a modern moment feels triumphant. A corner, a small victory over the cold and darkness. A cloak that dominated that holds in heat. For medieval people, a night when every day started with this act dawn of resurrection proof survival that their efforts to guard the fire had succeeded, teaching you to measure joy. Fireplaces became status symbols. The absence of shivers signaled wealth of noise as they required. So as you lie in the castle and expensive stone, your senses, decorative mantles, half tormented, displayed heraldry, half reinforcing lineage and prestige. You understand why people, yet no matter how ornate their winter, these fireplaces not only with bitterness, they but with stories of and filled rooms with smoke. To feel every nobility compensated with taste and touch so sharply curtains and was to be alive in the most. But even kings shivered in their palaces. The cold made life unbearable. Yes, but it also made every scrap of comfort glow monarchs, and so often drove them into uneasy sleeps indoors. Carried not by warmth, couldn't escape, but by the contrast between suffering adapted differently and the fleeting moments using smaller fires that smoldered your eyes and blazed are sharpened. These fires produced less light in dim but retained more heat. A practical choice stretched long across the rushes, families flickering as though around the hearth. The tapestry on the wall around seems to ripple hunters and saints in the same moving fire in the glow, heated their bedding, their woven faces, and storytelling taking on uncanny expressions, with children listening wide-eyed. You mistake the shifting dark for a figure slipping between pillars. It was a trick of light, a classroom from a chapel, all in one, and exhaustion. Back in your imagined castle at night, the fire crackles never still, and you can hear the soft hiss and shift of moisture, and your eyes from every cut logs. Even your skin learns to read the air fills the chamber. You can tell when the storm is coming from beams overhead because the drafts grow sharper, warm as you slicing against your cheek the flames as if carried on invisible but your back is still chilled. You can sense when a fire is dying. Heat. Because the heat no longer touches your hands, you feel comfort, leaving only the numb sting of firelight has always been a symbol to measure time, not by bells or candles learned to conquer the dark, but by the rise and fall of warmth they mastered comfort. These senses, even centuries later, survive, standing in front of a medieval fireplace, to the rat nosing through rushes, for its original shivering beside your bed, all reverence and a sense of community, stoking the flicker of flame at dawn. You see history. They tell you the countless pull the blankets tighter, the stories when to shift closer warm to another body, and the lives saved when to whisper a prayer, because morning the risk of too far away. Constant. Life so was the reassurance it brought, makes you alert. Fire was both enemy to discomfort and ally danger, yet also and capable salvation shaping of treasuring the smallest signs of that went far beyond and warmth. It is those contrasts, by the time you retreat between misery and mercy, to your bed, that define your memories low again. You remember the stench of glowing softly and the darkness, but you also remember the sweetness of herbs scattered freshly. You remember out the endless groan of beams, shadows, but you also remember the silence the warmth fades when snow fell that faint glow and the heart of every sound enough. You remember that when the bitter taste of cold life will return with the flames, but also the bliss of a single warm every night was a negotiation. The castle taught you and danger to live by opposites. The fireplace was to endure the worst, so you could savor the best quietly against however fleeting. Picture yourself you rise in the middle stepping of the night away from the to fetch more wood of a noble bedchamber. The contrast descending a narrow spiral staircase. The flicker of your torch, you push aside lighting your bed curtains, stone steps. The air slaps your face. The castle transforms like icy water. Here, inside your little lower levels, it was stale sleeping arrangements, but tolerable. Dominate a stark contrast. It feels like stepping into the mouth of the lords and ladies. Itself. The hum of voices for your cloak and the faint crackle of it as your bare feet touch the rushes, vast hall, and curse softly where at the shock of it. Servants and workers. The smell is stronger packed together for warmth. Ashes sour
The
ale
sight
is
wet
striking.
dog,
All
long
the
rows
things
of
the
straw
curtains
pallets
muffled
cover
now
the
rush
floor,
in to greet you, and
the
men
hall
sleep
around you
shoulder to shoulder
is both
their
alive
cloaks
and dead.
doubling as blankets.
By day it
The
echoes
smell of
with
sweat,
laughter
leather, and
and
clamor
fills the air.
Now it
punctuated
creaks and
by the
groans like a
metallic tang of
tired
weapons
beast.
stacked
Every
against the
sound
walls.
magnifies
In one
in the
corner, a
stillness.
dog shifts and sighs,
A single ember
curled up near a
cracking
pile
in
of
the
boots.
hearth
The
is
atmosphere
loud enough
is
to make
thick,
you glance over your
but
shoulder.
there is an undeniable
A
sense of
dog
camaraderie.
shifting in its sleep.
This
Sounds like
closeness is both
footsteps on the
necessity
rushes
and comfort.
For a
In
moment,
medieval
you
castles,
think you see movement by
soldiers
the
and guards
tapestry,
rarely
but
had
it's only
private
a
quarters.
shadow writhing in the
They
torchlight.
slept communally in
You
barracks,
realize how
or
thin the
directly in the
barrier
great
is.
hall. When
Between
on campaign,
safety and fear,
this made sense.
how a castle can protect you
It
from
allowed them
enemies,
to rise quickly,
but never
if
from its
danger
own
struck,
darkness.
and
You
minimize
minimize
the
the
hearth,
effort needed to heat
stirring
the building,
embers
to coax
fires
a flame
burned
constantly,
sparks
in these
leap
shared spaces,
upward,
and
men
instantly
lay
you
near
feel
them
the warmth
in
rush
rotating
against your
positions,
face.
taking turns
The
to warm their
contrast is
bodies.
dizzying. The result,
Your hands
was
burn,
a pungent, while your
but
back
practical
still trembles
ecosystem,
with cold.
where warmth
You
was
linger
preserved
as long as you
through
can,
numbers.
soaking
Life
in
in a
every
medieval
second
barracks
of borrowed fire.
was harsh.
Before
The
carrying
straw
a
bedding
log
was
back
rarely
toward your
changed,
bed,
and
already
vermin
the
thrived
warmth
in
is
the close
fading,
quarters.
the air
Yet there was
reclaiming
a
its
strange
chill.
security.
The
in this
fire gives
discomfort.
comfort, but
The
only as
sound of
long as you
snoring
bow to its
comrades,
demands.
The occasional clank
Constant
of a sword,
feeding,
shifting in its
constant
scabbard,
tending,
and the steady
constant
rhythm of
vigilance
breathing created a kind of lullaby.
back inside your bed.
These men were
You
hardened
notice
by
the
war,
smaller contrasts,
but they were also
more
bound
sharply.
by trust. In these
The
halls,
blanket that is
they
rough
shared
against
not
your
just
chin,
warmth,
but
vigilance,
underneath the skin of your
relying
chest
on one another to wake
feels
at the
almost
first
hot
sign
where
of
the
trouble.
furs trap your breath.
Peasant cottages
Your
offered
toes
a different
ache,
version of
but your
communal
stomach
sleeping.
glows faintly
One
from the
defined
spiced
not by
ale you drank
military
earlier.
readiness, but
The
by
smell of
family
damp
bonds.
straw stings your nose.
Imagine a one-room home,
But the sprig of lavender
walls made of
tucked
wattle
under your
and
pillow
dog.
surprises you.
It's thatched
with
roof
sudden
low enough
sweetness.
that you can smell the dried hay.
Misery and
stored
mercy
in the
lie
loft.
side by side,
A central hearth,
each one sharpening
glows
the
faintly
other.
embers.
Even people
banked
become
under ash,
contrasts in this
casting
world.
soft light
The lord
on
of
a
the
scene of
castle
rustic
might
intimacy.
sleep beneath imported
Parents,
furs, but
children,
still his
and
nose
sometimes
reddens in the
grandparents
frost.
sleep
A
together
servant
on a raised
might
wooden
curl on bare
platform,
straw with
or
only a
directly
ragged
on
cloak.
straw stuffed mattresses.
Yet the closeness of
Chickens
companions
roost on
keeps him
rafters
warmer
overhead,
than the master in his
and
grand
a cow
chamber.
or sheep lies in a pen.
Rank means little
one
against
side of the
stone
room.
and ice.
Its warm breath
Here
adding to
survival
the
levels
temperature.
everyone,
The
reducing
scent is
noble and
powerful,
peasant alike
smoke hay
to
animals,
shivering bodies
and
wrapped
the
in
earthy
cloth.
smell of packed
Your
dirt
senses
floors.
record these
To
lessons
modern
without
sensibilities,
words.
This
You
might
begin
feel
to crave
claustrophobic,
not grand feasts,
but to medieval families
or silken sheets,
it was security.
but little
Everyone
things,
was
the
close
sound of
enough
silence.
to feel each other's
When
warmth,
wind drops, the
to
sight
hear
of
the soft
frost
murmurs of
melting near a
dreams,
hearth,
and the rustle of
the taste
blankets.
of warm broth.
This closeness
After
also
hours
meant
of hunger,
that sickness traveled
the
easily.
touch of a cloak
but so
still
did care.
warm from someone else's
A crying
shoulders.
infant was soothed
These
within
details
seconds.
etch themselves
An elder
into
could be
memory,
attended to without
shaping
leaving the
how
warmth
you
of
measure
bed.
comfort
These
for the
peasant
rest of
homes
your life.
were surprisingly
And when you
efficient
finally
at
drift
retaining
back
heat.
to sleep,
Low
it is
ceilings
not
trapped
because the
smoke
castle has
and
become
thatched roofs.
kind. It is
acted as
because your
mild
body has
insulation.
learned to make
Even
peace
though
with
peasants
comfort,
lacked
to
fireplaces
take small
in every
mercies
room.
as victories.
Their single hearth
You
design
sleep surrounded
made
by
the
stench,
entire home a warm
itching with
cocoon.
fleas,
Some
listening to
families
distant
even
winds,
slept in lofts,
yet
above
still
the
you
hearth,
sleep
where warmth rose
because
naturally,
in this fortress of
creating
contrasts,
a surprisingly comfortable
survival
space
lies not
during
in
harsh
defeating
winters.
misery,
In this way,
but in noticing the
simplicity
brief, fragile
often
moments
outperformed
when
grandeur.
misery loosens its grip.
Peasants,
You
though
stir
poorer,
again before
sometimes
dawn,
endured winter
and
more
once
comfortably
more
than
the
nobles
castle
in
reminds
drafty
you
stone castles.
who is in control.
Now imagine walking
The first
into a monastery
sensation
at night
is
when the bell
cold,
for Compline has
always
rung,
cold,
and silence
creeping
has
into your
descended over the
bones.
cloisters.
No matter
The
how
dormitory
tightly
is
you
a
bundle
long,
yourself.
narrow room lined
But then, as
with
your
rows of
senses
simple
adjust,
wooden cots.
you notice
Each
other
monk's
layers
sleeping
of your
space
world,
is
the
modest.
small mercies,
A thin
and
mattress
irritations
stuffed with straw,
that shape each night
a
into
coarse
memory.
woolen blanket.
The smell is the
and
strongest
perhaps a pillow
companion.
filled with feathers or hay.
It clings like another blanket,
Curtains may hang between
invisible
some
but
beds,
inescapable.
but privacy is
You
minimal.
breathe in stale
The air
smoke
is
from
cold
yesterday's fire,
and smells faintly
mingled
of
with
incense,
the earthy
beeswax,
rot
and
of
damp
rushes
wool.
that haven't been
Candles
changed
burned
in
low,
weeks.
casting long
Beneath it
shadows
lies
on
the
the
musk of
whitewashed
furs,
walls.
The sharp tang of sweat, rhythm of life, and the faint sweetness of herbs
into their nights.
someone scattered days ago.
In simple robes,
Every inhale
often
is a
keeping their
reminder
towels on for
that you
warmth.
live not in a
Fires
sanitized
in
dream,
dormitories were rare,
but in a
as
fortress
monastic
of
discipline
survival. prized endurance.
And yet,
but monks
within
were
this
allowed to
mix,
use heavy blankets.
there are
or
moments
cloaks.
of comfort.
Sleep was
The whiff
intentionally
of lavender,
segmented.
when your
They
head
rose
turns
at
just
midnight
right,
for prayers,
the
padding
faint
through
scent
the
of
cold
roasted
cloisters
meat
with
lingering
lanterns,
after a feast,
breath visible in the
even the
freezing
foul
air.
air carries small
After
surprises.
these nocturnal
Your
vigils,
ears work
they
just
return
as
to their
hard.
beds for a second
You hear the
sleep.
drip of water
This rhythm
seeping
was
from
seen
stone,
as spiritually beneficial.
the whimper of a dog
a
twitching
reminder
in dreams,
that comfort was
the
fleeting,
restless cough of someone
devotion
across the
eternal.
hall.
This
Despite the
castle
austerity,
amplifies
communal
everything,
life in monasteries
turning the
offered
smallest
its own
noises
form of security
into echoes.
The sight of your fellow
Sometimes
brothers
you mistake them
lying in
for
silent
whispers
rows,
or for
the
footsteps
sound of
that are
collective
not
breathing.
there. At
And the
other
warmth of
times,
shared
the
blankets
sounds lull you,
created a
the
sense
crackle of
embers,
belonging, the sigh of
poverty,
a wind,
and
easing for a
discomfort were
moment,
not punishments,
the contrast
but
between
acts of
alarm
discipline.
and calm,
and the
keeps
unity
you
of the
alert
dormitory,
even in half sleep,
reflected the unity
as
of their
if your body
spiritual
has
life.
learned never to let its
Communal
guard down
sleeping
fully.
was not just a
Touch is
necessity
constant.
of poverty or devotion. It was
The
also a
weight
social
of blankets
practice.
presses
In
into
medieval
your
inns,
chest,
travelers often
making
shared
each
beds
breath
with strangers,
deliberate.
a concept
The coarse
shocking
wool
to modern
scratches your skin,
sensibilities,
but at least
entirely
it shields
practical
you
at the time.
from drafts.
Guests arriving
Your
at a
feet
bustling
curl around the
roadside inn
stone you wrapped
might
in
find
cloth
themselves assigned
hours
to a
earlier.
bed.
It is
already
cold now,
occupied by one or
but the
two
memory
others.
of warmth lingers.
This arrangement
When a
conserved
dog
space
shifts
and bedding,
closer,
and most
its rough
travelers
fur brushes
accepted
your
it
legs
as
prickly,
part of the journey.
yet
Personal
oddly
space, as we
reassuring.
understand it,
In these
today
moments,
simply
you
didn't
realize
exist.
how much comfort
Warmth
depends
and survival
not
took
on
precedence
softness,
over privacy,
but on simple proximity.
In some noble households,
Warmth from fabric,
communal arrangements
warmth
existed even
from
among
fur,
servants.
warmth
Large
from
dormitories
flesh,
housed
even
staff
taste
members who slept side
finds a
by
way
side
into
in
your
long
night.
rows.
Your lips
These
are
servants
dry
often worked
and
around
cracked,
the clock,
your mouth
stoking
carrying
fires,
the bitterness of
preparing
smoke.
meals, and tending to
You
their
lick them
masters.
and
And their
taste
quarters
salt,
reflected their
sweat,
tireless lives.
and ash.
Yet even here,
But
camaraderie
sometimes
flourished.
you recall the hot broth
Songs
you
were
drank
whispered
before
before
lying
sleep
down,
jokes shared,
and the memory
softly
alone
in the dark
makes your mouth water.
and bonds
In the
formed
depth
that
of
transcended
discomfort, the
rank.
recollection of
Imagine
food
slipping into one
becomes
of
its
these
own
communal
comfort.
spaces for a night.
The castle teaches
The
you
warmth is
that
immediate.
pleasure need not be
Dozens
present.
of bodies have turned
Even
the
the
room
ghost of
into
it
a haven
can ease
against
your
the
mind.
cold.
Most striking
The scent
of
of
all
wool hay and smoke
are the
is thick,
contrasts between
but
your
comforting.
world and the
You roll
peasants
yourself
beyond
into
the
a
walls.
blanket.
The
You
mattress
imagine
beneath you,
their small
lumpy
cottages,
with straw, low roofed,
and listen
and
to the
smoky,
chorus of breathing around
where
you.
one central
Someone
hearth
coughs,
heats
a
the
dog
entire
stirs,
family.
and in the corner,
Their
a
floors are
guard
dirt,
murmurs to himself,
their
keeping
blankets
watch.
fewer,
The fire
but
glows
their spaces
softly,
are smaller,
a single thread
easier
of
to
light
keep warm.
weaving through the darkness.
You envy them.
There's a sense
sometimes
of safety in this closeness,
realizing that grandeur
a collective resilience
comes at the
that
price
speaks
of
to the
cold.
human instinct
The castle
to
is
endure
a
together.
fortress
The
against
psychological impact of communal
Yes,
sleeping
but
cannot
against
be
winter.
overstated.
It is a
In
prison
a world where
of
night
stone,
was full of
and
dangers,
yet within its misery,
bandits on the roads,
you find gratitude.
wolves in the forests,
You learn to
and
treasure
illness
what little warmth
lurking
you have.
in every shadow.
A corner
Sleeping
without
in
a
a group
draft feels like
provided
paradise.
not only warmth,
A cloak,
but
still
security.
carrying heat from another
Stories
body,
and folklore
is a gift.
reflect this
The
instinct,
sound of silence,
often depicting
when snow
hearts
blankets the
and
land, is
shared
a
beds
blessing.
as sanctuaries.
In a world
Even
of
travelers
endless
seeking
discomfort,
shelter in
these
monasteries
fleeting
or
mercies
inns wrote of the
become
relief they felt
lifelines.
upon entering a
you
crowded
cling
room.
to them,
The fire
remember
blazing,
them, tell
and
stories of
strangers
them
gathered shoulder
long
to shoulder.
after the season has passed.
Communal arrangements
So when dawn
also
finally
shaped
breaks
social dynamics.
and pale
In
light seeps
monasteries,
into your
sleeping
chamber,
beside your fellow
you
monks
know the night has
reinforced
not
humility.
beaten you.
No one had private
Your senses
chambers,
are
not
weary
even the
from their
abbot.
vigil.
In peasant cottages,
Your body stiff
sleeping
from hours
together
of shallow
created
sleep.
intergenerational
But you are
bonds.
still alive.
Children
You
grew
stretch
up listening
beneath
to
the
the
weight of
whispered
blankets.
conversations of their parents
Inhale the
and
foul,
grandparents
sweet air.
as they
Listen
drifted
to the
sleep.
castle groan as it
In
wakes.
castles,
And in
soldiers
that
trusted
moment,
each other with
you
their
understand
lives,
the strange
and that
gift
trust was
of
built in
contrasts.
parts during nights spent in
Misery
shared
has
quarters.
taught you,
Of
to
course,
cherish
this
the
closeness
smallest
had its
details.
drawbacks. To savor
Fleas
and lice
even
were
the
rampant.
briefest touch
And
of warmth.
illnesses spread quickly in
Without
these
the cold,
environments.
you would
Yet never
medieval
know the
people
value
understood
of heat.
this.
And
Without
adapted.
discomfort,
Bedding was
you
shaken
would
out
never
daily.
understand
Herbs
relief.
were strewn on
And
floors.
so you
to
endure
repel
night
insects
after night,
and straw
sense
mattresses
after
were
sense.
replaced regularly.
Contrast after
Peasants
contrast
relied on
alive,
smoke to purify
because you
their
have
homes,
learned to listen.
while monasteries
qui sont
emphasized
passés
strict cleaning
in the
schedules,
cold,
beating
and when
mattresses
the weight of
outdoors and
blankets
scrubbing floors.
and the flicker of
Even
fire
in barracks,
fail you.
soldiers
Your
maintain
thoughts
routines
drift
for bedding care,
toward powers
knowing
less
that
visible.
morale depended on some
In a
sense of
castle,
cleanliness.
survival however relative,
is
it
never
may have been.
just about
The
stone
communal nature
and
of
fur,
medieval sleeping
it is
arrangements
also about faith,
reflected a
charms,
broader truth
and
about
remedies
life in this era.
whispered through
Survival was
generations.
collective.
You do
Castles,
not fight the cold
monasteries,
alone.
villages, and
You
inns
fight it with prayers,
all operated as ecosystems,
with talismans,
with warmth
and with every
security
scrap of knowledge
shared
the
among
healers
all who
and
dwelled
priests
within.
can muster.
Unlike the
Before
isolation
climbing
into
of
modern
bed,
bedrooms,
you cross yourself
medieval nights were
and
full
murmur a prayer.
of quiet connection
You
whispers.
ask for Saint
prayers
Blaise to
and the
guard
rustle
your
of
throat
neighbors
against the chill,
shifting under
for
blankets.
Saint Roch to keep
This
pestilence
closeness
at bay,
was not always
for
comfortable,
Saint Bridget to
but
bless
it
the
was
hearth.
deeply human. The words
Picture
are
now
now
a winter evening,
nearly
in a
lost in the
peasant
rustle
cottage.
of curtains, the fire
But they
crackles,
anchor you.
sending sparks into the
You believe,
smoke-stained
or at
rafters.
least you want to believe,
Children huddle close to their
that someone
parents,
listens,
wrapped in homemade
that
quilts,
warmth
while the
of the
dog
spirit
curls against their feet.
might soften the
Outside,
bite
snow
of the
drifts
bodies
against
suffering.
suffering.
Hanging from
But
the
inside
bedpost
the warmth is palpable.
is a charm.
The smell of stew
Perhaps
lingers
a
in
small
the air.
brass cross,
And herbs hang from
perhaps
beams
a
overhead.
pouch of herbs,
Their fragrance faint
perhaps
but
a
comforting.
scrap of scripture.
The family drifts into slumber.
Some call
together
them superstition,
the rhythm of their breathing.
others call
blending
them
with the
devotion.
soft hiss
You do
of
not
embers.
care what word is used.
This is a
When
different
the
kind
wind
of
howls
luxury.
through cracks in
One
the
shudders
shutters,
not on wealth,
when you
but on
wake
intimacy
shaking with fever
and resilience.
it is these small
Now,
tokens
shift your
that you clutch.
imagination to a
They
monastery
remind you
dormitory
that
at
you are
midnight.
not defenseless,
The bell
that unseen
tolls
forces
softly,
might still
summoning
protect
the
you.
brothers from their
Healers
sleep.
have their own
Lanterns
tricks.
flicker.
They
as
warn
monks
that
shuffle
cold
silently
is not
through the
just
cloister to
discomfort,
the chapel.
but danger.
The cold is
That it
biting,
unbalances the
but their
humors
prayers
of the body
rise like
flooding you
warmth,
with
filling the
phlegm
darkness
and
with
melancholy.
purpose. When they
To
return to their
restore
cots,
balance,
they pull their
prescribe
woolen
warmth
blankets
in
tight
every form.
and settle back into
You
the
rub
rhythm
your
of
chest
communal
with
life.
goose fat pungent
This cycle,
and
repeated
greasy,
every night,
hoping
creates
its
a sense of
sinks
stability
deep.
in a
You
chaotic
sip
world.
spiced wine
Finally,
or mulled ale,
imagine a soldier's
letting it
barracks
burn your throat
during
in
a
the
siege.
hope it burns away
The
illness
walls
too.
shake faintly
Sometimes
with the rumble
they
of
mix
distant
herbs
engines,
into ointments,
but inside,
sage,
men
rosemary,
sleep deeply exhausted
thyme,
from
saddle,
battle, strong
weapons
enough to
rest
mask the
beside them.
stench of smoke. Boots are lined
and
up
sweat.
neatly,
Though
and
their
the single
power
brazier
is as much belief
glows
as
guarded
medicine.
carefully.
When
The
fever
air is
strikes,
thick with tension,
the remedies
but
grow
also with
stranger.
trust.
A
These men
physician
know
may
that their
bleed you,
safety depends
declaring
on
that
each other,
chilled blood must be
and their
released.
shared space
Or he
reflects
may
that
recommend
bond.
boiled onions
Even in
pressed
war,
to your
there is
chest.
solace in this
The
closeness.
steam believed to draw
Whether in
sickness
castles,
out.
cottages,
If you are wealthy,
monasteries, or
you
inns,
summon a learned
communal
doctor
sleeping
who
arrangements
quotes Galen
told
and
a
writes
story of
instructions
adaptation.
in Latin.
They were practical,
If you are
efficient,
poor,
and
you
deeply
turn to the
symbolic.
village wise woman
They
who
reminded
burns
medieval
herbs
people
and mutters
that survival
charms her
was a
remedies,
collective act,
no less
that warmth
hopeful
and
for being
security
unlearned.
came from
In
connection
the end,
as
both
much as from
promise
fire
what no one can
or
truly
blankets.
guarantee relief.
In an age
Superstition
without central
weaves
heating,
itself into every corner
breath
of the
shared in
night.
these crowded rooms
You spit 3
was a thread
times
in the fabric of
before the
community.
fire goes
You
out.
wake
So
in
no
your
evil
imagined
spirit
medieval bed
may creep in
to
through the
soft
embers
crackle of a
you
dying
tuck
fire
iron beneath your pillow,
the embers
to ward
glow
off demons
faintly,
said to
painting the
thrive in
stone
the
walls
cold.
in shades
You
of
whisper
orange
charms
and shadow
as you lace your boots,
Your blankets are heavy,
convinced that warm
your
feet
body
mean
cocooned
a
in
safe
warmth.
heart.
Yet a draft
Each
slithers
act
through the
may
curtains
seem
around
small,
your bed,
but each
brushing
act
your face with
gives
icy breath.
courage. And
Even
courage
here in the
is
heart of a
sometimes
castle,
the warmest gift.
Comfort is
The
fleeting.
castle itself
In
bears
this world,
witness to these beliefs.
Warmth was more than physical
Chapels glow
relief.
with candles,
It was tied to health,
even in the
fear,
dead of night,
and
their
superstition.
flames symbols
a
of
lifeline
eternal
between
warmth.
life and death.
Priests walk the
Medieval
corridors,
medicine
muttering
revolved around
blessings,
the theory of the
sprinkling
four humors,
holy water on
blood
thresholds
phlegm,
to keep frost
yellow bile,
and spirits out
and
alike.
black bile.
Even
Doctors
soldiers
believed
crossing
that a
themselves
person's
before
health
guarded duty
depended on keeping
carry
these
with
humors
them
balanced,
not just weapons,
but
but
warmth
prayers,
played a crucial role.
shields against an
Too much
enemy
cold,
no arrow
they
can
warned,
pierce.
could
And
cause
as you
humors to
drift
congeal,
between waking and
blocking
sleep,
the body's natural
you feel
flow.
the weight of these
Physicians
rituals
recommended warm
settle
drinks,
around you.
heated oils,
They do not
and
stop
layers
the
of
cold.
blankets, not merely
They do
for
not
comfort,
cure the cough
but as treatment
that rattles
A
in your
winter
chest.
chill wasn't just unpleasant,
But they remind you
it was dangerous.
that you
a
are
force
part
that
of
could
something
weaken the immune
larger,
system
a
and
web
invite
of
disease.
belief,
Picture
a network of
medieval healer
protection,
preparing you for
spun
bed
by
on a bitter
ancestors
January night.
who endured the
They
same
rub your
winters.
feet with warm olive oil,
Faith, superstition,
believing it will open your
medicine.
pores, and
They are
allow
3
harmful
strands
humors
of the
to
same
escape.
rope.
A
And
servant
you cling to the
brings you a
rope as
steaming
tightly
cup of
as you
spiced
cling to your
wine,
furs.
or
When
heated
the
milk
night
mixed
feels
with honey.
longest, past.
not only
You
for
lean
warmth,
hardest on faith,
but to soothe the stomach.
you whisper
Not
and keep
just
your body
prayers,
balanced overnight,
but whole conversations with
are
saints
draped
over your bed,
bargaining in the dark,
and hot stones wrapped in
If
cloth
I make it to spring,
are
I
placed
will
near your
light
feet.
candles for you.
Every step of this
If my
process
children wake healthy,
feels like ceremony.
I will fast
Yet
on
it's
your
rooted
holy
in
day.
genuine fear. These murmurs
A fear
are
that
half
cold
promises,
could kill,
this
half
fear
desperate
wasn't
confessions
unfounded.
carried on the
Hypothermia,
air,
though unnamed,
that fogs before
was
your
a
lips.
real threat, especially
the
for
silence,
the elderly children
your
and
own
travelers.
voice is a companion.
Chronicles are full
A
of stories
reassurance
of
that you
peasants
are not alone.
found frozen
Superstitions
in barns
shape
or noblemen,
even the small,
succumbing to a chill
sometimes
after a long journey.
The castle's
One
own
chilling
walls
tale
seem to join
speaks
the
of a
struggle.
knight who died in
In
his
the
bed.
chapel,
Candles
after sleeping
burned
with too
steadily,
few blankets,
each flame
on a
a
frosty
silent
night,
defiance
a
of
cautionary
winter's
story
darkness
repeated
across
You kneel
generations.
there before bed.
Medieval
The
winters
smell of incense
were longer and harsher
mixing
than
with
many of
smoke
us can imagine today.
The chants echoing in your ears as you return to your chamber.
Call the little ice
The
age.
memory of that warmth
Snow
lingers
fell
as
in
if the
places
holy
that
fire
rarely
follows
see
you
eye.
back through the corridors.
Now rivers
medicine
froze solid
is never or from
and
faith.
icy winds swept through
You drink
even
the
the thickest
Tyson
walls.
brewed from
This
rosemary
ever-present
and
danger
honey,
shaped culture
and the healer
tradition.
tells you
It
families
balances your
developed
humors,
rituals
for warmth,
but you also
that
believe
became
the
deeply
herbs
symbolic.
chase away
In
evil
peasant
spirits.
cottages,
Hiding in your
parents
chest,
placed infants
you rub
closest to
ointment
the
made
fire,
from sage onto
wrapping
your
them
temples,
in layers of linen,
convinced it
swaddling,
wards off headaches
while
and demons
grandparents
alike.
occupied nearby
Every
beds
cure
to
is
guard
doubled.
them.
In
In
reasoned
castles,
by
elderly
theory,
relatives were
one
often
whispered
moved to
by
kitchens or
superstition.
bakehouses.
During
Together,
the coldest
they offer
months,
twice the hope,
sleeping in the
and
warmth
when the
of
wind
ovens,
howls, long after
like a
bread
beast
had been
at the
baked,
shutters,
letters from
when
Burgundy
frost crawls
describe
across
a
the
matron
bed curtains,
who insisted on
you
sleeping in
touch
the
the charm
bakehouse
at your
every
neck
winter,
and breathe
declaring
easier.
that the warmth there
Keeps
the
death
castle
away.
will not warm you. Superstitions
Not
intertwined,
tonight,
not fully
with these practical measures,
but with saints watching
people
spirits
hung
held at
sprigs
bay
of juniper,
and
rosemary,
herbs burning in
or
the hearth
holly
above their beds.
You believe you
to
can
ward
make
off
it
illness
until
until
dawn.
dawn.
And
The
in
scent
this
of
world,
herbs was
belief
thought
is
to
as
purify
powerful
the air
as fire.
creating
You
an
wake
invisible barrier
coughing in the
against
night,
cold
your
and
throat
disease.
raw, your chest
In
tight.
healthier homes,
In the freezing
incense
dark,
burned in brass
the
censers,
first thought that comes to
filling
you
chambers with fragrant
isn't
smoke.
about blankets
These
or
acts
warming
weren't
pans.
merely decorative.
It's about whether
They
some
reflected a
spirit
world where
has
warmth
slipped past
was
your
spiritual,
charms,
as well as
whether
physical.
illness has been sent
A
as
glowing
punishment
fire
or test.
was a sign of God's
In
protection.
a world where medicine and
an
faith are
extinguished
braided tightly
was a
together,
bad
you
omen.
cannot separate one
Imagine
from the
yourself
other.
lying beneath
The
your
healer
heavy
is
blankets,
summoned,
the
shuffling
flicker
in
of
with a
firelight
bundle of dried
dancing on the
herbs
bed curtains,
and a crucifix
a
dangling
servant
from his neck.
quietly checks the brazier.
He tells you
at the foot of
the
your
cold
bed,
has tipped your
stirring the
humors
embers
out
to
of
keep them
balance,
alive,
flooding
the
your
smell
body
of
with
pine
phlegm
resin
and
he
beeswax
lays a
candles.
steaming bowl of
fills the
onions
air,
on your chest,
mingling with the
insisting the
herbal
vapors will
sachets
draw sickness
tucked
out into your mattress.
At the same time, he
mutters a prayer
You drift
to
toward
Saint
sleep,
Raphael, patron
but in your
of
mind
healing, lingers
crossing
the
himself
medieval
as he
understanding
works.
of vulnerability.
His hands move
Night
between
was a dangerous
ritual
time.
and remedy.
Cold
Without
wasn't just
pause,
uncomfortable,
because in his
it was a
mind,
silent predator.
there is no difference.
creeping in through
You are
cracks
offered a
and
draught of
seams,
hot wine
waiting for weakness.
laced with cloves,
This
cinnamon,
mindset
and honey.
influenced architecture
The
and
sweetness
household
burns down
management,
your throat,
warming
wealthy
you from the
estates
inside.
maintained
Entire staffs,
easing the ache,
whose duties
if only
revolved
for
around
an
warmth.
hour.
Fire
You
wardens
clutch the
ensured
cup
that
like a
embers
relic.
never died, because in that moment, chamberlains oversaw
It feels
bedding
like the
preparation,
closest thing to
and
salvation.
herbalists crafted
Later, you
sachets
chew
to purify
bitter
and
sage
scent
leaves,
rooms,
the
trusting their
ability to
cleansing
keep a taste,
castle warm,
to banish whatever
symbolized
demons
power just
gnaw at
as
your
the
lungs.
size of your fireplace,
Whether it is
or the
science
richness of
or
your first
superstition,
displayed status. Doesn't matter.
warmth
Was wealth.
You need only the hope
And its
that it will
absence
work.
was a
In
reminder
the
of
silence,
mortality. After you listened
even
to
in
the sounds of
monasteries
the
where
castle
austerity reigned,
and imagine
warmth
them
differently.
carried a deep spiritual
The
meaning.
creak of the
fires
beams
were
is
carefully
not just
rationed,
wood under strain,
and monks embraced the discomfort
perhaps
of
it is
cold
angels
nights, shifting
as
their
a form
weight
of discipline
as they watch
but
over
even
you.
their
warmth was valued.
The whistle of the wind
Certain
through
rooms,
arrow
such as
slits
the calefactory,
might be the hiss of
were kept
spirits
heated as a
trying and
concession
failing
to
to break
necessity.
through.
In this
Even
single
fear
heated chamber
becomes bearable
monks could gather
when you
to
frame
warm
it as
themselves
faith.
briefly
Others in the
before
castle
returning to their
share
unheated
their own
dormitories.
protections.
The act
A
of stepping
servant
into that
tells
warm
you she
space
places a
after
sprig
hours
of
in the cold
rosemary above
must
the
have felt
hearth
heavenly,
to keep
a
away
tangible
frost
symbol
demons.
of divine mercy.
A guard
The
swears
medicinal use
that
of
iron
warmth
under the mattress
extended beyond fires
stops
and bedding.
nightmares.
Heated
A
poultices,
nurse
steaming
whispers
Rumors that rubbing
hot drinks
garlic on your chest
were staples of
will
medieval
keep illness from settling too
Physicians
deeply.
often prescribed
Each
warm
remedy,
baths,
each
infused
charm,
with herbs
each prayer
like
is
chamomile
part of
or
a
rosemary
patchwork shield,
for
fragile
ailments
yet
ranging from
vital.
joint pain
You
to
listen,
melancholy.
you try them. Wealthy
because the
households
cold is
even have
relentless,
portable bathtubs,
and you cannot afford to
by
doubt
servants
any tool
with
offered
buckets
to you.
of heated water
By
from the
dawn,
kitchen.
you are
These baths,
exhausted,
though rare in
but
winter,
still alive due to fuel costs.
Your throat aches,
were luxurious
your body
experiences,
shivers, offering a
but
brief
you believe
escape
the worst
from
has
the cold
passed.
that
You
dominated
light
daily
a
life.
candle in the chapel,
Yet warmth,
offering
could
thanks
also
for
be served.
surviving the night.
excessive heat
Was
was
it
the
believed
herbs that
to
saved you,
overstimulate the humors,
the prayers
leading to fevers,
the warmth
and
of wine.
imbalances? You do not know.
Physicians advise
And you do not
moderation,
need to know.
warning that
In this
sudden
world,
exposure to warmth
survival
after
is never the
prolonged
work
cold
of one force
could
alone.
shock the body.
It is
This
always
belief
faith
shaped
stitched
everything
to
from
superstition
clothing
choices, superstition
to sleeping
stitched
arrangements.
to medicine,
People layered,
all bound
gradually
together by
adjusting
the
to
human will
temperature
to
changes
endure.
slowly.
So when the next night
Even
falls,
children were
and the
taught to
cold
fear the
presses
fire's
close
bite,
again,
a reminder
you repeat the
that warmth
rituals
was
without
both a blessing
hesitation.
and a danger.
You cross yourself
in
before
peasant
bed.
life. Warmth
You
was
tuck the
deeply
charm
communal.
beneath your pillow.
Families slept
You
together.
drink the bitter draft
not only
rub,
for physical
the
comfort,
pungent ointment,
but also for
whisper
emotional
the words
security.
that keep you steady.
The soft sound
None
of
of it
shared
guarantees
breathing,
safety,
the presence of
but each
livestock,
act adds another
and the
thread
warmth
to the
of a
rope you
glowing
cling
hearth
to. In the
created a
darkness
sense of safety,
and
in a
together
harsh world.
they are enough.
Oral traditions
You lie back
often
down your
romanticized
chest,
this
still
closeness,
tight, turning winter
and the
nights
healer's
into
remedies
stories of
clinging to
resilience
you and love.
in every sense.
Songs were sung
The
around the
smell of
fire
onions
prayers,
lingers in the
whispered
air,
before banking
mixing
the
with
embers,
the smoke of the
and
fire,
children lulled to sleep
while goose
with
fat
tales of
smeared
saints
on your skin
and spirits who
leaves you
protected
slick
travelers from
and
frost.
pungent.
Travelers
close your
experienced
eyes,
warmth differently,
and you wonder whether this treatment
inns were
works
often crowded, smoky,
because of
and
its
noisy,
heat, or
but even
because
there,
the healer
fire's
whispered
glow was a
prayers
beacon
as he
of
placed it
safety.
there.
Imagine
In truth,
entering an
you
inn
do not care.
after a long
In a
winter
castle
ride,
winter,
snow cake
survival
on your
is never
cloak,
about
fingers
certainty.
numb. The
It
door
is about
swings
trying
open,
everything at once.
and you're enveloped
You think
in
of
a wave of
stories
heat laughter
told in the hall,
and the
whispered
smell
over
of roasting
ale,
meat.
tales
Your
of
bedding may be
soldiers
shared with strangers.
freezing on campaign,
Fleas may be
saved
inevitable,
only because one
that
man
first
carried a
blast of
relic
warmth
of the true cross.
is unforgettable.
Stories of women who wore
travelers,
amulets
warmth
filled
symbolized
with
not
dried
just
herbs
comfort,
and never
but
caught
survival.
fever, though
the
others
promise that they
all
would
around
see
them fell
another
ill.
dawn.
You
In
remember
literature and
hearing
art,
about children
warmth
who
became a
slept
metaphor.
with iron
Medieval
scissors
poets
under their pillows,
often
kept
wrote of
safe
love
from
as a
nightmares,
hearthfire,
said to stalk through the
contrasting
rafters.
passion with the bitter
Whether
cold
these
of
tales are
loneliness.
fact or
Religious
fiction
texts used
does not matter.
imagery of divine
They
warmth
comfort you,
as a
and
symbol
comfort
of
itself
grace.
has power.
Artists
Your
painted
own
holy
rituals
figures
begin to
bathed
multiply.
in golden light,
You recite a
emphasizing
psalm
the
before
connection
sleep,
between
then
warmth
follow it
and
with
sanctity.
a charm
Muttered
even
3
castles
times,
themselves,
though
just
often
as your
depicted as
grandmother
cold,
taught.
were shown
You
with
press
glowing
a
windows,
coin of
a sign
silver
of life and
against your
safety
chest
within their walls.
believing it draws
This
out
cultural
sickness.
symbolism
You
reveals
place your
how
boots
deeply
carefully
medieval
beside the
people
bed,
valued warmth.
pointing them toward the
It
door,
wasn't just a
so evil
physical
spirits leave
sensation.
rather than enter.
It represented
Each
security,
act layers
wealth,
another
and
shield
spiritual
around
well-being.
you.
Families
Invisible,
guarded their fires
but no less
with
real
almost
in your
religious
mind than
devotion.
stone walls.
And the
When
act of
daylight
banking
comes,
members at night
You
was
see
a
others
ritual of
carry
faith
the same burdens
as much as
A
practicality.
servant coughs and
Peasants
ties a
and
red
nobles
ribbon
alike
around her neck,
understood
believing
that
it will
fire
draw
was life,
fever away.
and they
The
treated
cook
it
burns
with
juniper in the
reverence.
hearth,
Imagine
filling the
yourself
kitchen
again
with acrid
in your
smoke,
castle bed,
said to cleanse
the
the
fire
air.
has burned low.
The steward
and
swears
the
by
room
a
is
tonic
filled
of
with
garlic
shadows,
and
a
honey.
sprig of
His
juniper
breath sharp
hangs
with the
above your
proof.
head. Its
Everyone
sharp
has a
scent cutting
method,
through the smoky
and
air.
everyone believes
The
because
mattress
disbelief
beneath you
is a luxury
is
you
stuffed
cannot
with
afford.
straw,
Sometimes
layered
the
with linen
castle
sheets
chapel
and
becomes
fur
the true
coverlets,
infirmary.
each one a
You
testament
walk there
to
shivering,
centuries of craftsmanship.
clutching a candle,
Your
and
steps
labor.
echoing on stone. Outside,
The priest
wind
lifts his
howls,
hands,
snow
chanting
lashes
Latin
against the walls.
that you barely
But
understand.
here,
You
sprinkling
feel
holy
cocooned
water
in warmth
across the cold floor.
The fear of night, the
lingers,
scent of incense
but
fills your
softened
lungs,
by the glow
stinging
of embers
yet oddly
and the
soothing.
presence of those
You
who
kneel
guard
the
you.
stone, biting
The
into your
symbolism
knees,
of warmth
and feel that
extended
warmth
into death
bloom
as
inside
well.
you.
Wealthy
Not from the
nobles
air,
often specified in
but
their
from the
wills
conviction
that servants
that
should
you are
keep
seen,
fires
that
burning
your
in their
suffering
memory for days
is
after their
shared
passing
with heaven.
Even
This
the
was
most
both practical
spiritual
soldiers
act
admit
and
to
a
faith
practical one.
when the cold grows
Warmth
too sharp.
symbolized the soul's
A
journey.
knight may scoff at
A light
charms in the
guiding it
daylight,
toward eternity.
but at night,
In
he
villages,
fingers the relic
the hearth was the
stitched
center
into his cloak.
of morning rituals.
A guard on
with with
wall
families
may curse
gathering
the
around
wind,
it to honor
but he
their
traces
dead.
the sign of the cross
fire
each
represented
hour, continuity,
as the bells ring,
a link between generations.
in private, burning
No
through
one is too
winters,
proud to beg the
claiming
saints
so
for
many
warmth.
lives.
Medical
The
castle
texts
strips
from
away
the
13th
13th
and 14th centuries.
The cold humbles
describe
everyone
in
equally,
painstaking detail.
and so, how to manage warmth another night for different conditions. You perform every ritual Feverish again. Patients were wrapped Herbs in damp scattered on the rushes, while those suffering charms placed beneath your pillow in multiple layers and rubbed into your fires. You drink the bitter warming tonics, even though blending spices like cinnamon, ginger, you whisper the pepper, not only for flavor, doubt every but for their perceived medicinal heat, because each wealthy merchants adds another thread of hope at great expense. Hope itself is to be as essential as medicine. Lying there in the dark, to sip a cup of the truth. Religion, drink health superstition, itself, and medicine, even the very act of are not separate paths, had symbolic They power. Are one intertwined in many like cultures. The fibers of the rope the you cling to. Was never allowed to go Faith out. Steadies your mind remedies from one generation soothe your to the body next as a sacred flame. Guard your spirit. In castles, relighting of them are strong alone. Was a sign of neglect. They formed peasant cottages just strong enough the hearth's continuity to carry you through the winter symbolized resilience. And when dawn the ability to produce warmth day after day and cold to find a household's stability, as you lie thank them your all blankets, the saints, drifting the herbs, waking and sleep, charms, the healers, the weight of this history because settles over you. Every ally matters is no longer something you after wandering through the cold stone corridors, ingenuity, after listening to the groans of beams, the embers in the fireplace, and the whispers of wind, countless hours you finally understand carrying water, sewing blankets, to sleep in a medieval castle. You endure the freezing chamber room has been the rushes rotting underfoot through centuries, the weight of blankets and furs pressing on your chest. World. Warmth you clutched more than charms. Whispered culture. Prayers, rubbed it's herbs onto your skin, gather close, and shared your bed with dogs designed or companions, all in a desperate bid themselves to keep the night at bay. And why the even the humblest cottage, the simple castles like a sanctuary were built to defend against arrows, warmth is life, and armies. Love not faith against winter made tangible flickering their thick softly walls in a world their of grand halls and shadow, their towering ceilings, castle chambers. These were monuments of strength, now, reduced to but they offered little comfort when frost crept inside along the carved stone and yet walls. People survived the wind. They survived with ingenuity, with superstition, with ritual. They survived by finding warmth. In the smallest mercies, cocooned in blankets, a stone heated by the fire, with centuries of tradition, a cloak still warm from another's shoulders, you sink deeper a candle into your burning mattress. In the chapel, feeling the soft weight of fur and wool that steadied the heart, the faint scent of smoke lying here now, and lavender hanging you feel in the air. Quiet respect, a reminder for those of all the lives that once slept this way. They did not have the luxuries of central heating, soft mattresses, each battling the same relentless cold, but they had resilience medieval winter nights, and they turned even harsh endless winter routine. The hands they that carried their faith, the servants their medicine fires, their stories, the families huddled and they wrapped themselves, and among all of it prayed in icy as tightly as they wrapped themselves, flickering flame. So, every carefully stitched your eyes grow heavy, every sprig of juniper the echoes of hanging over a bed fade, was a triumph against the darkness. Imagine the fire was never taken for granted. Low. The dogs was curled through effort, skill, the saints watching from the shadows. Even now, the cold, centuries later, is still there. These castles stand silent, but you are no longer afraid of it. Hold the memory of life, because like them, spent in constant you have learned how to endure with the elements. And with that thought, tonight, you drift into dream bed, into warm, and into the safety of sleep. From that struggle, sweet you carry with you